like Unholy DKs in 41, like Windwalker Monks, but we'll see just who reigns supreme here. Actually, well, I suppose Supreme will reign supreme on the left side of the screen as Buffware and Nerf Rogue immediately mass stealths and heads over to that top left, following suit. AAA going up there as well, starting to pull some of the balcony trash as they spread out for the quaking.
Yeah, what I'm looking for here is just what I mentioned previously. I want to see them pulling trash into the boss. They could pull the trash on the left side, like they have right now, exactly perfectly pulling on the top of the boss, taking advantage of the AoE single target funnel for the Unholy DK. And it's also a slight advantage for the rogues as well. That being said, the Outlaw rogues are already getting their single target boost just by having the other sisters there, but they're able to effectively cleave down some of that trash as well.
Right, you are. So it's just coming in here, and a nice advantage once again, of course, with that spell reflect from the warrior. Now, just want to draw your attention again to it, just because it's the first time we finally had it here on MDI. We do have energy bars or resource bars available for the bosses. You can see at the bottom of the screen there, so we can see just how those bosses are shaping up. A lot of bosses do different abilities when their bar fills up. In this case, should the sisters reach maximum energy or mana or whatever that color is, really. It looks like energy and mana, runic power maybe. But if they reach 100 there, they will cast a massive dire ritual cast that essentially one-shots everybody, especially in this tyrannical affix. But with the DPS that the teams have, it's really not a big deal. You won't see that. Combine this with an 18 next week, though, Zyra. I mean, look, Sister Milady is almost at that 50% mark, so we'll have to see how teams start faring out in the 18s. But right now, we got to focus on this dungeon here. Sister Briar above that 50% mark. Buffware and Nerf Rogue 2% trash on the board. They're starting their second round of DPS on the Sister Triad as AAA is just finishing off their Bloodlust and chewing through Sister Milady.
Yeah, I'm going to take one of your beams here. Unfortunately, Jagged Tettles didn't quite finish off into the DPS, but like you mentioned, if they get to 100 energy, they will pretty much insta-wipe. That being said, on 17, they're not going to get anywhere close to that, especially with the Bloodlust activated. And you got to remember, even if they do get to 100 energy, Dire Ritual is about I believe it's like a 6-second cast time, so they have that extra DPS to finish off the Sister as well. So it's very unlikely that we'll see them ever wipe to this unless they just don't commit Bloodlust to it, and even then it should be not even that close.
Not even that close. Bit of a healing struggle here for Buffware and Nerf Rogue. We do know, of course, Sister Selena provides an aura while she's active that decreases all healing done by 50%. So they managed to squeeze out of that, finished off Sister Malady, and are now working to finish off Briar before they head over into what is, frankly, probably the most dangerous hall as far as tank damage income is concerned. Those Guardian Captain pack quite a punch, and if you have any of the Rune Weavers or extra witch spawns in there, it just get quite deadly, especially with, if I'm not mistaken, there's a Void Emissary right in the middle foyer there as they enter near the stairwell. But back up the stairs they go, actually, and they tag a mob on the side. They actually ran past and went up the stairs and grabbed the Knight Captain and Guard that do patrol up and down the stairs. Pretty substantial pull coming here for the team as AAA finishes their Sister Briar.
And like you mentioned, there's a lot of tank damage coming out here as well, but since they're all melee DPS, they got to look out for those frontal cleaves that also come from the trash mobs as well, and make sure they don't let any Soul Fetish cast get off. You can see that Soul Charmer has a big blue glow on it. That means it had this Soul Fetish buff, and if that mob dies, it'll transfer its Soul Fetish to another mob, giving it increased damage, and it's really nasty in general. Not to mention, it's also raging, so when everything gets to raging, the tank is in huge danger from all the damage they're about to take.
Huge danger. That buff is actually not until the courtyard, but you're absolutely right. This buff that you see here is them standing in the candles, the warding candles on the ground, which decreases their damage taken by 50%. But you're absolutely right, Zyra. As soon as we hit that courtyard, we're going to have those Soul Fetish casts go off, and it's going to be really nasty because these teams don't have an offensive Dispel. They're running Alliance right now. They don't have access to Arcane Torrent, so here they go. Big pull coming in here from Ching right now as he leaps on top of the Void Emissary. He does just a tremendous amount of damage with every Queen's Decree successful cast that goes through. They try to get as much damage in. We should technically see the Unholy DK start rising in damage pretty substantially, but most of the dogs have been finished off right now. Ching has already taken one pulse. Quaking coming in at the same time as the second pulse hits the rest of the group. They do not manage to LOS it. Ching doesn't, at least. He has 2 stacks right now, but trust that his team will kill it before that third stack. Excuse me.
Dude, I love understanding your class's capabilities there. Loda was LOS using Tranquility behind this fountain here. You can still heal your group with Tranquility when you're on line of sight of them. We learned that pre-spring finals last year from a series of tweets from Method and A players. That was pretty funny to see. But, interesting to see that play from them from the Void Touched Emissary. Also, the reason that they tanked that trash at the top of the stairs was so they didn't have to deal with that particular Void Touched Emissary that was at the bottom of the stairs. So interesting to see little route changes based off of the emissaries we see in these dungeons.
Line of sight mechanics, everyone's favorite. This is why we saw it on Mythic Ashara so prominently in this past raid tier. AAA here dealing with their own woes as the Void Emissary pummels them. Hun dipping quite low right now, but managed to get healed up as they well line of sight the remaining Decree Caster. It's just about to pulse right now. Lai gets hit by it, but no problem as he did not have a prior stack here. Buffware and Nerf Rogue looking to clean up the rest of the trash in the courtyard before engaging with the Soulbound Goliath, typically the second boss that teams will deal with. We do know, of course, that it's a very open dungeon in that sense, so they can kind of do the first 3 bosses, actually first 4, if I'm not mistaken, bosses in whatever order they want before proceeding downstairs. 30% now for trash. They pulled, of course, some of the peasants and maggots from Rahl's hallway before dealing with what looks like Matron Brindle. We've seen some teams skip this, but they don't care. They actually pull it straight into the boss, Zyro.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of teams use a rogue to pull Matron Brindle plus the Jagged Hounds to the side. I believe the main reason they were doing that because it was the bolstering ethics for West last week. They don't have to worry about any of that this week, so they can just, funnel the AoE damage into the boss here, get that 2-target cleave so the Outlaw Rogues are doing more single-target DPS. All they really have to focus here on is the tank damage. Having Matron plus the boss hitting the tank here, it's a lot of tank damage. So as long as the tank doesn't go down and they're dealing with these thorns properly, they should be totally fine.
As long as the tank doesn't go down, indeed. And not to mention, both teams have the luxury of a Druid that has Soothe, so as soon as Matron Brindle does hit that Raging, we're able to just get that off right away. Marito taking a fair bit of damage here, while Ching Chung's low just doesn't manage to stabilize. Marito, 6% now, no cheat death proc, and just is not able to get out of this rut. A lot of regrowths coming in from Loda right now, as he manages to just move out of the way from one of those spirits hitting him, which of course do pop up whenever you clean stacks on the Soulbound Goliath by putting him in the fire and cleansing those away. And Rage finally comes up on Matron Brindle. Actually, it's been up for a while, but finally now, because he was so GCD capped, we only now get the Soothe. Ching BB doing well there to avoid that enraged Matron Brindle by moving away from her until Loda was able to support there. AAA, or AAA, showing my Canadian heritage here, does finally pull the Soulbound Goliath as well.
I prefer but I think that's why Twitch chat voted for them so much, because they like the name.
AAA.
Now, looking at Soulbound Goliath, a new thing we saw last week, and we see, I believe it's Tomboy going off the screen right now to pull it off, is they pull more trash. Some of the trash in the hallway next to them, those captains and disciples as well. Actually, there's no captains, just a guard, so not that big of a deal. But extra tank damage, I believe it's less than Matron puts out, so it's not that big of a deal. This is just more focused single-target damage for both the Unholy DK and the Outlaw Rogue, so it's really good for them to do this. We always talk about efficient cleave, and this is exactly what they're doing right now.
Efficient cleave is what you love to see, especially with that Unholy DK in there. We do commit the Tranquility here from Loda on the side of Buffware, who has procced Undulating earlier, went out that hole again for another 25 seconds or so, procced about 20 seconds prior. Marito, just below 20% HP. Loda having a bit of struggle here as he gets in the raw growth off on the group, just trying to stabilize the entire team. Now, the danger of those guards coming in and the one caster is the caster casts a silence that you want to make sure you interrupt, but the guards also have a frontal shadow cleave that does a fair bit of damage, so if any melee is unfortunate and unlucky enough to be in front of that, it's the last thing you need while you're cleaning the stacks of the Soulbound Goliath and all that fire damage is going out. AAA, AAA, or is now at 48% on the Soulbound Goliath. Choose what you will with their name, and they're working to chisel through that as well. They're actually, they have the trash advantage here, regardless of Buff Warrior, of course, pulling the extra trash on top of the boss there, Zyra.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of a trade-off, right? They're 20% lower on the boss, which means I'd take the 20% lower on the boss over the 4% trash in a tyrannical setting almost any time. So, I mean, they're ahead, but they're not as ahead as we would think for sure. I'm interested to see what they're able to pull off with the Unholy DK, because all the trash around Rahl's room is able to be mass pulled. You can pull the entire hallway, you can pull all of Rahl's room, you can even pull the Witch plus the maggots in that side kitchen area as well. So with the Unholy DK, they can do all of this trash in 1 or 2 pulls if they're really looking to go for it.
All right, you are. But once again, raging tank damage is the one thing we're going to have to pay attention to. Warrior, we do know, was nerfed after the last season, but just offensive nerfs have come in.
Yeah, and something that might enable that are those snap points we saw from Abracadabra last week. I believe also Charles' team, No Girls Allowed, also pulled it off, but it doesn't look like they're going to be using any snap shenanigans here. They're just going to pull like the first initial small pull and then maybe go for a bigger pull later on.
Snap shenanigans, snap shots. Good on you there. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue pulling a bunch of the maggots out into the hallway right now, just dealing with the spit debuffs, trying to isolate a lot of the damage coming in on the group before they hopefully commit to a bigger, hopefully for our sake, commit to a bigger pull and take advantage of this Unholy DK AoE prowess and damage. AAA has now dealt with their Rahl pack, and a pretty substantial pull coming in here from WoW as he rejoins Lai, Bao, D, and Hun back in the courtyard. A lot of cleave coming in here, and of course the Emissary of the Tides will prevent any form of crowd control going out on any of these mobs, so not even a shockwave from the Warrior or a leg sweep from the Monk will help with this situation. You're just going to have to pure heal through it, and we can see the HPS just going higher and higher there for the Resto Druid, but Warrior keeping suit as well. Now, you'll have noticed that Warriors in general have pretty high HPS, considering they're the lowest self-sustained tank in terms of healing prowess. They do have, of course, Ignore Pain, but the key is really the two trinkets, Edict of the Faithless, just that huge, massive absorb, whether it's physical or magic, and also Urchin, which provides about a 12k HPS, 12k healing every 3 seconds, so 4k HPS. So it adds up to quite a bit, which is why you see Warriors and tanks in general being so high on those meters.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that's also allowing the healers to do the massive damage we've seen them do the last couple weekends. I mean, we saw Lai in that Shrine of the Storm earlier doing 30k DPS on a boss, and then he did 80k on the last boss. So there's a lot of things that are enabling these healers to do the massive amount of DPS they're doing. Now, that last pull, Supreme didn't use his cooldowns. He let the rogues take care of all the DPS. You see him pop his army here. They're going into the boss. They have their Bloodlust available. We might see the million DPS here.
We might see the million DPS. No Bloodlust yet from them as they spread out for the Quaking, but finally the Bloodlust comes up. Loda makes sure to keep the Enchanted Emissary on the side. 800k, 872k, 900k. Looks like we're not going to get the 1 million ticket as Zyro, ever so disappointed, flops his arms down at his side right now. But nonetheless, huge amounts of damage coming in from Supreme that you should be proud of your guildmate for doing there, Zyro. Not hitting that 1 million peak. Perhaps we'll see somebody else do it in the future for Season 3 right now. But absolutely decimating the trash. Supreme makes sure that is no threat to the tank with the Raging coming in, and Rahl is already down to 65% as AAA is still dealing with the Rahl trash.
Yeah, you know, looking at the damage he did, he could have done more. They could have pulled the kitchen room, and you know, Jimmy did get a little bit more because he also had a Reaping Wave on top of all the trash, so, you know, I'll take the 900k DPS. It was still pretty good. He is also in much higher item level gear, but you just see that's the power of the Unholy DK. You can clear an entire room's worth of trash, and on top of that, the boss is already at 50% HP, 45% HP. This is a tyrannical 17 boss. It's got a lot of HP. It's got a lot of HP, and the team is likely going to combine the kitchen trash perhaps a bit later on, because as you said, Rahl, really not the most dangerous boss. I mean, you have to let him eat a lot of those servants and just AFK for a while to let that damage get out of hand in the team. So usually pretty stable and snoozer boss, if you will, compared to the Soulbound Goliath, the danger of the Soulbound Goliath and the Triad, the Witch Triad at the beginning of the dungeon. 25% now on Rahl. We'll see if they decide to pull any of the kitchen trash on top of it, as they sit at 78% trash. AAA trying not to fall too far behind here. They as well have popped their Bloodlust and done some of the trash on top of the boss, but Rahl is only 65%, 50% difference between the two teams. But the one difference here, AAA is even slightly, but still even further ahead on trash than they were on Soulbound Goliath. So the story continues between these two teams, Zyro. They're both on the same boss. It was a 20% boss difference before on Soulbound Goliath. Now it's a 50% boss difference between the two teams, but AAA has a further 4% trash advantage. Well, there's something to be said about the trash percentage they're at right now, because I believe it's at 85% trash, where you can pull everything downstairs and you'll be at 100% trash percentage. And Buff Warner Rogue is more than likely going to get that from clearing this kitchen trash here. So they'll have their 85% trash that they need for the bottom section of the dungeon completely finished, and AAA is still going to be on Rahl. So, you know, Buff Warner Rogue, they were behind in trash count, but they're very firmly ahead in the dungeon right now. Very firmly ahead indeed. Just, you know, as a note as we progress further in the dungeon, because these things can make a pretty big difference with how close these teams are. You know, they're not super neck and neck right now, but pretty close. Loda did proc the staff already. Won't have that available, something that we have not seen live proc on the side of AAA. So that could come into play at any moment in the basement. The Dangerous Pack before Lord and Lady Waycrest, the Gloom Horrors before Gorak Tul, or the combination of. They might just combine some trash into a very dangerous Hail Mary pull later. 84% on the board for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue right now. That gets their areas, trying to get their 85 as they kite some of the trash in. But Ching, not really sure where he was going with that one. Heroic leapt into the hallway, but he did so at an angle to pull the extra Witch and the Captain that resides on the side of the room there. Got meleeed in the side, in the back, and just killed. I'm not sure if he was doing that to allow his team to go down. I'm not really sure why, because they have Shadow Meld and they use that. So that was a bit of a noodle scratcher. We'll see exactly what happens with Tettles. That is not what you want to see from the teams right now. So a bit of nerves getting a hold here as Ching takes the res. I guess some poor communication there with the Quaking there, Zyro. But, I mean, I see you shaking your head. And, you know, I'm laughing here just because Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has been so solid. They've been such a good team, and it's just crazy to see them do that kind of mistake. This is great. More trash with the boss. Yeah, I watched Loda get the res off, move away with the Quaking, then move back because he thought it went off. And when he moved back, he killed his tank once again. So just another 15 seconds on the board for the res timer plus the 5 deaths. But, I mean, they're doing it again. Supreme popping off 300k DPS without the Bloodlust. They're just abusing the Unholy DK AoE funnel single target damage. This is exactly how you want to see them playing this comp. And this is kind of one of the things Outlaw Rogues are still really good, but there are ways you can fit other DPS into your comp and have them do more damage without the utility, and you'll be totally fine over the course of the dungeon.
Right, you are. Problem is Warding Candles has gone down right now, and Loda's taken a huge hit and fallen. They do have a battle res available from the Unholy DK, who does so immediately, so get out of jail free card there as Supreme manages to res them up, and they move around those Warding Candles. That is not what you want to see happening here, so a bit of sloppiness coming out of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, starting with that Quaking Death on the tank. Another problem is that there is a Void Emissary just off screen there with that sister that can there we go, good view here from our observers. That is they have quite a big aggro range, so you want to make sure you're staying away from that part of the room, and they did get a bit of area denial in the form of those Warding Candles, but have managed now to stabilize after getting the battle res up. 3 deaths on the board for them. And Zyra, you were saying they're firmly in the lead, but AAA was not that far behind. 3 deaths on the board, an extra 15 seconds. I mean, this is getting a little too close for comfort right now.
Yeah, all that shenanigans that happened in that basement section of the dungeon, both tank deaths with that, they have to commit reses to that as well. That caught AAA up completely. Yep. Even gave them an advantage in the dungeon for sure at this point with the 15 seconds of death timers they have. The only thing that I'm really going to look at here is... Now, AAA does have more boss trash percentage, but they're going to have to find out that 3% trash from, the remaining trash in the dungeon, and Buff Warrior Rogue is just going to pull all 7 of those Red Horrors into the final boss for the Unholy DK, so they're not worried about the trash percentage at all. I'm really curious to see what AAA is going to do for just the 3% trash. I feel like they overcommitted the trash percentage here.
Yeah, maybe they're going to pull 2 of the Gloom Horrors, like from the trail end of the pack. They might stealth through the other ones. They might drop it with Shadow Meld and pull the remaining 2 on top of Gorak Tul. So they have a few options. Hopefully, whatever they do it efficiently. They're going to need to, even with the boo-boos here from Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, they should manage to, they still need to be very efficient in order to try and win this dungeon. It's going to be a close one, as Lady Waycrest, is at 5% for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. They didn't go with an efficient cleave strat, essentially, as much as just the Mark Sister here, as much as they would have wanted to. They got rid of Lord Waycrest early on purpose, just so they can put Lady Waycrest on top of the Mark Sister in the corner right now. But by doing so, they also aggroed Zyro, the Void Touched Emissary that we were talking about earlier. So they're purposely ignoring that. They're going to drop aggro with it, likely with a Shadow Meld, and they're getting their 1% actually, 1.5% or so that they need in order to cap 100% with the Gloom Horrors that they're getting ready to pull on top of Gorak Tul. D, unfortunately, goes down here for AAA.
Yeah, and like we mentioned, these Gloom Horrors are going to be their final 9% trash that they need for the rest of the dungeon. They have, I believe, 1.3% each, so that's the last 9%. That's math, quick math very easily. And of course, like we mentioned, they're going to pull all 7 Gloom Horrors on top of the boss. Unholy and the 2 Outlaw Rogues going to AoE him down. They do have the Resto Druid on top of the it's like a little lamp there on top of the rock. They'll be able to use both Ursals and their punt to knock both of their charges away. So they should be totally fine if their timing is right. And they're back ahead in the lead now for sure.
They're cruising right now as AAA is in the same room right now. Indeed, they've had 2 deaths on the board versus their 0-3 now. D has another misskip, didn't have the cheat death available as he had died earlier. So AAA has fortunately, depending who you're rooting for, of course, thrown the ball back into Buff Warrior Nerf's Rogue's side of the court, and looking like they're going to run away with this one as they finished off the trash Indeed at 100%, and there's nothing that's going to stop them before they're able to down Gorak Tul here at 65. Now, we are in a tyrannical environment, but of the 5 bosses that exist in this dungeon, quick trivia, the only dungeon with 5 bosses in the entire expansion, I can't really say Gorak Tul is the most dangerous by any means of the 5.
Definitely not with their comp. The only danger really comes from these slavers kind of overpowering the group, but they have so much CC with the rogue gouges between the eyes. They have grips, they have stuns, they've got so many different forms of CC to knock the Death Touch Slaver casts that they can kind of just AoE 3 or 4 of them down with the boss for extra single target damage should they want to. And if they get overrun, they can also just decide to burn the corpses too. So it's not really dangerous in the slightest at all.
No, not at all, as Gorak Tul now reaches 35%. AAA, still not really done anything with that 3% that they're missing, as you mentioned earlier. And Gorak Tul, only 60% for them. So this is certainly Buff Warrior Nerf's Rogue match to win. They are now at 4 deaths, so they actually just did get an extra death there, as we were talking, and committed their their battle res, the remaining battle res to it. But should be no problem for them to finish this one up, Zyro.
Yep, they did. I believe Marito went down at the start of the boss here to one of the slavers, so they we said the slavers weren't that dangerous, but they did have a death to them, so a little bit of a weird thing. That being said, bosses at 13% HP, I don't see them wiping this at this point. This should be before Nerfurg's dungeon to win.
No, but these teams have shown that they can kind of compete with each other, which is should make for a particularly tantalizing Motherlode coming up that we discussed earlier at the desk. That is going to be a nasty dungeon, and indeed, buff played, indeed. I mean, you know, Zyra, this dungeon, no matter how you spin it, is going to be nasty with a lot of the trash at the start, especially in a fortified environment. It could be made much nastier with bolstering. I totally agree with you, but with the amount of random spot damage that goes out on members of the team, plus the density of trash that exists in here, Necrotic's going to be pretty rough.
Yeah, and the thing to really look out for here is any mech jockeys that don't go into the Peacekeepers, because if their tank is kiting around because of Necrotic and those mech jockeys aren't in Peacekeepers, somebody's going to get grease gunned and get one shot. So we'll see. Both teams doing a similar, well, not doing similar pulls at all, but Fornerfer going for the big Peacekeeper bull with Bloodlust, and AAA going for just one Peacekeeper. This is very conservative from them, actually.
They're just trying to keep the peace here. Important to note that AAA has actually opted to use the Windwalker as well right now to buff their physical damage increase. And Windwalker, of course, has a fair few advantages, can output their own damage, and is very good for that first boss, the coin-operated Crowd Pummeler, just because of their burst damage during the 3-stack of fire of the bombs that go into the boss. But we'll touch on that when we get close to it. So already some key differences between the two teams outside of comp. Of course, we have Supreme running that Unholy DK, which we saw just the power of it in the previous dungeon, versus AAA has only converted over to the Windwalker monk from one of their 3 rogues. Important note as well, I was actually just going to say, no, we did not have a Bloodlust come up from AAA, but just as I said that, Bloodlust does come up from AAA now into... I still kind of a conservative pull here, considering you're committing Bloodlust, only 2 Peacekeepers, but I guess they're just looking out for their tank buddy right now. Yeah,
2 Peacekeepers is, I mean, definite. Conservative is a word, but we normally see teams pull 3 or 4 Peacekeepers with their initial pull in this dungeon with Bloodlust. Seeing them only pull 1 at the start and then 2 later with Bloodlust, it seems a little bit too slow for this dungeon, but Buffalo Nerfurg isn't doing anything too big either, so maybe they're just taking this Necrotic explosive weight a little bit safer than what we normally see from most teams.
Yeah, I mean, you got to play safe around it, I guess. It's just, you know, the more you pull, the more dangerous it becomes, to a very amplified effect with affixes like Necrotic and Explosive on top of it. You just spend too much time babysitting explosives, and then on top of it, mobs won't die as quickly, then the tank needs to go very defensive as a result of higher Necrotic stacks. There's mobs, as you mentioned earlier, before this match started, that just aren't CCable, crowd controllable from the Peacekeepers, so things can get out of hand very quickly, and it seems like both teams are really respecting that kind of conservation of tank life, which is usually fairly important in these dungeons, as we see another Peacekeeper come join Buff Warrior Nerfurg's side here, who are now at 19%. Defensive Ring of Peace goes down, just so Ching can get away for a second to reset those stacks. Important to note as well, Zyra, is you do have a pretty substantial choice to make here as the tank. You either roll Night Elf in order to get the proper skip before the 3rd boss, which both tanks have done, or you run Dwarf, you get Stone Form, you get to pull a bit more aggressively in some areas, but then you have to sacrifice yourself once in front of Rix of Flux Flame. So I guess both teams opted to do the double Night Elf here.
Yeah, I was questioning that choice because we did have a nice little close-up on Ching when he was kiting around there, and I saw him as Night Elf, and normally in Necrotic dungeons where you don't need to do any skips, you see tanks opting to go for Dwarf or Dark Iron Dwarf so they can remove Necrotic. Like you mentioned, both tanks went Nelf, and you can really tell how they're really respecting this dungeon by only pulling 4 or 5 mobs at a time, which also kind of I want to highlight as well. With only 1 rogue, you're missing a lot of that lockdown CC, especially for the hired assassins as well as the addled thugs, to where you really can't manage to pull more than 4 or 5 of those mobs. When you have 3 rogues, you can kind of afford to pull a little bit bigger because you have so much available single target CC in the form of cheap shot, kidney shot, between the eyes, gouge. You have so many tools to stop casts and stop channels that's just really, really useful in general in this dungeon. But when you only have 1 of those rogues and you replace it with a DK and a Windwalker that have a lot less utility, I mean, you kind of have to respect the dungeon a little bit more.
You do, but I mean, it's not like Windwalkers and Unholy DK doesn't have anything, right? You can use Grip defensively to interrupt a cast. I believe you have to spec into Asphyxiate as an Unholy DK, so might have done that. Morito also has Leg Sweep. He can have Paralyzed defensively. So you're right, certainly not to the extent of a Rogue with the frequency and in combat CC and control that they have, but they can still make do with it depending on you know, their DPS prowess. I mean, if the Unholy just rocks it and they kill trash faster, they won't need as much of that CC to stay alive. But it doesn't really look, at least it doesn't really feel to me so far, Zyra, that they're really taking advantage of the Unholy DK in the Motherlode of all possible dungeons, where it's just the trash density is huge, but a lot of trouble coming in here for Buff War.
That must have been an explosive going off or something, because they took a massive chunk of AoE damage right off the bat of that pull, and I didn't see anything else going off. So just goes to show you what can happen if explosives go off. Everyone looks looked like they were in danger of dying there if another explosive went off for sure. But fortunately, you can see all the HOTS that Loda has out on the group right now. Everyone's topped up, everyone's safe. Jing is kiting around to try to reset his necrotic stacks, and they only have the Peacekeepers left. So it looked disastrous at the start, but they were able to rein it back in.
And does manage to reset it there. He was at 30, and once again, the two guys chasing him that can't get crowd controlled by that Ring of Peace going down were the Peacekeepers. But fortunately for tanks, they are quite slow. You can almost outrun them most of the time, especially with a heroic leap or any intercepts or intervenes available from the prot warrior should a target be accessible to you in the opposite direction of where you're trying to run from. AAA right now, 39% trash on the board. Looks like they have an Emissary of Tides in the bottom of the screen there that they opted to crowd control, just because there are a lot of dangerous casts that go out. We have, of course, the Inhale Vapors from the Thugs, but more importantly, we have the Ice Spritzers and the Kaja Colas that come in from the vendors, right? The vendors have a lot of casts, so you don't want the Emissary of Tides on top of that.
I like that strategy that they just pulled off there. That was simple, that was clean. The Monk taunted the Emissary of the Tides out, paralyzed it, and then it's just able for the healer to be just mass rooted entangling roots at every single time they want to. That's so clean and so simple, but it allows them to tank to pull the mobs where they stand, rather than have to move the pack away from the Tides Emissary. It's just so clean from them. And then once again, we're back to kiting because of necrotic.
See you guys in 5 years. Ching BB here, 25% does indeed manage to get out, reset the necrotic, and get back in. Yeah, he did. It looked like he didn't for a moment, but that was just the very quick refresh of necrotic as the other one dropped down. Fairly aggressive pull here coming from AAA right now. They deal with the trash back in front of the boss plus a 4-pack that one of them turns into the Peacekeeper, so managed to handle it well, as Lion fortunately does proc Undulating Tides right now. Won't have access to that single target bonus damage for another 45 seconds. Now, Zyra, let's talk a bit about team strategies here. For, I want to say, let's say 95% of Season 2, the dominant strategy in Motherlode was get 80-ish% trash before the first boss, get almost 100% trash before the second boss, and then at some point, either with one of the first pulls in the R&D wing, or combining it with Azarok at the end, we get 100%, then we go boss. No, boss after the first two bosses, no problem. It looks like both teams are kind of rearing up to do that, and we did see, I believe, I forget which team it was in the West, try to explore an R&D strategy. I think it was No Girls Allowed, and it was did not go so well for them.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was them or if it was the other team from NA, but yeah, whichever team it was, their strategy did not go well. They went for a very large pull on the R&D wing to try to finish off the trash percentage, and yeah, it doesn't go well there at all. Especially, and the thing is, it's hard to talk about the trash on that wing, because outside of like the Echo Blade and the Force Cannon, there's not a whole lot of mechanics that we know about that, because nobody pulls that on live. Nobody ever pulls that trash because it's just such a pain to deal with.
I've unfortunately experienced it a lot, but this is, before the days, we're talking like BFA beta and stuff. There's a lot of nasty stuff in there that you just do not want to deal with. You're right, we always focus on things like the Echo Blade, but the story gets even worse there. And there's a reason you don't see teams do that half of the dungeon worth of trash. Rather, they spend a predominant amount of time here at the beginning. Speaking of predominant, Buff Warrior Nerf Warrior right now, it's 60% trash and still working to chisel some down, as AAA is already well into the coin-operated crowd pummeler boss at 22% right now. They're looking to finish this off quickly. They still have a fair bit of trash to make up by the time Buff Warrior Nerf Warrior gets there, and we mentioned that kind of 80-ish% mark. Well, they're only at 59 now.
Yeah, looking at Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, I think what they're planning on doing is they're going to do more of the conventional routing that we see from most teams, where they'll get 65-ish, 70% before the first boss. They'll kill the first boss, and they'll commit their Bloodlust to that massive pull of Earthkeepers, I believe, after the first pack. And they have the perfect class to take care of that massive AoE pull, and Holy DK will absolutely shred everything there. They've got enough AoE CC in the form of the Monk and the Druid to knock back any of the dangerous casts in that group. The only thing they really have to look out for is that Void Touched Emissary that's sitting right in the middle of all that trash.
Yeah, the Void Touched Emissary certainly packs a punch, and there's not too many places in such an open dungeon to line of sight it. At least efficiently line of sight. You'd have to go pretty far away, but a lot of damage coming in here from Han. Immediately goes down on this fairly large pull from AAA right now. Releases ASAP just to make sure that he can get back into the action. Of course, releases at the first boss's checkpoint, which is the boss that they just finished off for AAA. There you can see Han joining from the bottom of the screen, rejoining the trash as the explosives get babysat in the background from D.
And you can see that Void Touched Emissary on the left side. If they get anywhere near that, they will aggro it and they'll start casting AoE pulses on them. So they have to be very, very careful with the positioning right now. They're like just outside of the pull range of that mob. So this is very well done by them. They did only have one death so far, so I can't complain with that. They didn't even commit their bloodlust to it. They'll have it for some big trash pull with Azeroth should they choose to do that afterwards.
Should they choose to do it indeed, and hopefully it works out for them. 30 seconds left on bloodlust, speaking of which, for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, who is now at 44%. I mean, these teams just shoot this boss so quickly. I just looked over and it was already below half health from when they first pulled it. Here we go with the foot bomb straight into the boss. Unfortunately did not attend soccer practice earlier. Missed that one horribly, but managed to get it back in now as the static shot comes out. Excellent time there by Ching BB to kick that last foot bomb in at the very last second to refresh the 2 stack that's already present on the boss and get maximum uptime of damage taken increase boss debuff. So nicely played by them, making sure that they finish off the boss within the window of this round of debuffs as AAA. A lot of kiting going on here. And, you know, Zyra, it's actually funny. This is the dungeon we were talking about earlier, and then Nagur and I were talking, and I know you were nodding your head at this too. The longer you can stay in and just face tank as the tank, not only does your DPS, of course, as the tank go up, but it just makes it less strenuous for the rest of your melee trying to catch up. You saw how wide of a spread we had of mobs there, and it's a bit slow from AAA right now.
Oh, they're just pulling everything on top of the Void Emissary. They're not even trying to get away from it. This is going to be interesting. Now, with their AoE damage, ideally they'd be able to beat the second cast, which it looks like they're going to be able to do just barely. They do have their personals up for it. Like we mentioned, they committed their bloodlust to this pull, so they're doing a massive amount of damage. But this is disastrous. Almost everyone in the group goes down. It's resetting. That's their bloodlust committed. They just full wipe to it.
They just full wipe to it. There was a ton of mobs at 10%, and I mean, Ching BB just bit off more than he could chew there. He was at 43 stacks of necrotic. Everything was looking great for a second. Supreme was destroying the meters for damage. The Void Emissary, of course, was just about to die, which it died right now. Important fact to note for those at home, the Void Emissary does actually maintain its health level, so even if you wipe at it, in this case they wiped at 10%, it does not heal like most of the mobs do in dungeons, so you're able to just come back and sneeze on it and finish it off. But I mean, just disastrous. It's not even the Void Emissary, Zyra. They had, I mean, there was more packs in here. They had a ton of mobs that were about to die, reset. Huge loss of time here for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even, the tank went down, then I blinked and everyone else was dead. That was catastrophic. That was about as bad of a wipe as you can possibly get, because there was no recovering that whatsoever. Everything reset except for the Void Emissary. Everything's back at max HP, and they pretty much have to recraft this pull, and it looks like they don't have their Unholy DK CDs for this time, so we're going to have to see if they're going to be able to pull this off without that.
I mean, I hope they will. I mean, yeah, their group is living up to the name. They certainly need a buff on the Warriors right now for him to live through that big pack. They do manage to cleave down what they can right now. Still a lot of damage coming in from Supreme. Perhaps not to the level that he would do otherwise, but a lot of damage coming in too as he spikes down to 14%. Manages to heal up, uses a Death Pact, if I'm not mistaken, to try and stay alive. Ching goes down again, though, and Supreme follows suit just because of the damage threat from his just overwhelming damage on the group there. And I mean, everything's looking pretty disastrous as the team immediately rounds the corner and tries to line of sight the Earth Shaper so they don't get any of the bolt casts on top of them, as Ching just tries to get in there right away and get some more damage. And Morito unfortunately pokes his head out, dies. Ching dies. There's explosives orb everywhere. Tomboys goes down too. This is absolutely disastrous from them, as I mean, on the other side of the screen, now on the major screen, AAA is just running away with this one, Zyro.
Yeah, I mean, you know, slow and steady wins the race. They did a much smaller pull in the room. They avoid the Void Touched Emissary as well, so they didn't have to deal with any of that extra damage on the group. Just better route. I mean, I wouldn't say better routing, but better execution from them. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue definitely had the better strategy. Should have worked out for them, but you know, you're always taking that gamble whenever you do a massive pull and you're committing all of your cooldowns to it. If it doesn't work out, you're significantly far behind, and we can see what's happening, you know, to them right now because of that. Yeah,
I mean, those Shadow Emissaries, it's always good to avoid them if you can as much as possible. Azeroth here, 55% for AAA, still has 15% trash, a fair bit lower than usual. I mean, you see teams here come in with about 98%. They just grab one of the stone guardians or the stone elementals that are part of that gauntlet patrolling the area. So it looks like they probably will either commit the full pull with a taskmaster, excuse me, up on top of the boss, or perhaps a bigger pull down in the R&D wing. But 15% in a dungeon like Motherlode is actually quite a bit. So they do have a fair bit of trash left before them, as 84% trash on the board right now. Ching dips low again, below 10%, and just barely hanging on. Finally gets healed up again by Loda as they look to finish off the trash that has already wiped them almost 3 times. I mean, two and a half-ish wipes. They managed to struggle through killing some of the mobs early. 89% on the board and 12 deaths for them as Azrog dips sub 20 for AAA. And here indeed comes that trash with Taskmaster Ascari.
And the thing about this, I mean, this is a pretty typical pull we see when they finish off that last set of Earth Ragers and there's nothing else to do except for single target the boss down. We always talk about efficient cleave. Once again, efficient cleave with the trash. But the thing is, this trash pack, if they do it perfectly, it'll give them, 8 or 9%. The thing you really have to look out for are those necrotic stacks on the tank. You see him leaping out there with about 22 stacks. It's incredibly dangerous. They really need to make sure that they're resetting there. Boss goes down, so most of the danger is gone at this point. They just have to make sure that their tank necrotic stacks don't get too high once again. But they're going to have to come up with 5 or 6% trash from somewhere else in the dungeon. Like you mentioned, they could go back and pull a couple of Stone Furies, but I'm not sure, and I'm not quite sure if that's exactly enough for them.
Taskmaster Ascari casts an ability called Cover. Cover decreases the amount of damage taken from surrounding mobs, if I'm not mistaken, including the boss. That was the second time that he cast Cover, and they just let the mobs bathe in it. I'm not really sure why, because if you drag them away, they will die faster, because they're not taking a decreased amount of damage, and it's not like he was trying to get away from Necrotic anyway in the first place, so not really sure on that one, Zara. I see you're shaking your head at that.
I mean, they still have 9% trash to get, and it looks like they're going down to the R&D wing, so maybe we'll see them show us how that trash is actually done properly here.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to research and develop a few Echo Blades to the face in just a moment. There's just a lot of nastiness here. Devil's Advocate, maybe they actually skip this and do some of the 4th boss trash? Question mark. On the flip side, maybe they don't. As the Mastermind comes in right now on top of the group, Alchemist present, and there are a couple test subjects too. Just a lot of nasty interrupts that you want to deal with here. You can already see the dot ticking away on WoW. Mastermind is a very notable mob in this trash. It's kind of a mini boss style mob. You can't crowd control it. It heals for a ton with the leech globules. It does a constant channel on the boss, on the tank with energy lash. There's a lot of nasty damage coming in.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of like a mini version of Shadow of Zul in a sense. Maybe it doesn't do quite as much damage, but it's all magic damage on the tank here. As we know, magic damage on warrior tanks doesn't really mesh well for them. But that being said, they did it a relatively small pull, so it's not too dangerous for them. But they still need more percentage, and I'm not sure. I mean, are they going to pull more in the R&D wing here?
I mean, they're going to have to. There's another Mastermind and a couple of test subjects rolling around. It looks like that should be enough for their 4%. Oh, no, they're actually riding through it right now, so it looks like they're doing their skip. Not sure exactly where they'll get their remaining 4%. They might combine it with... why am I forgetting the third boss? It's Rixxa Flux Flame. There we go. They might combine it with Rixxa Flux Flame in just a moment. There was one of the West teams that did combine one of the robots on top of Flux Flame at the end. So, excuse me, they might do that. But they have to make it up somewhere, hopefully efficiently. Of course, we haven't lost sight of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here, who's just about to down Azrok, but they have 11 deaths on the board on top of AAA, so an extra 55 seconds that they'll need to overcome.
And they're also in the same boat. They only have 93% trash, so they're going to have to come up with 7% trash as well. These are just really weird strats that we haven't really seen anything like this in the West, outside of that 1 week that we saw Method EU pull 1 or 2 trash packs in the R&D wing. I mean, this is completely new. I don't know what they're going to do at all here. This is really weird.
Yeah, and this is weird. It looks like they're rearing up to pull some of this R&D trash, and they actually pull one of the Enchanted Emissary trash packs on the side. They dropped their ROP, their Ring of Peace, too early, though, and they actually ended up separating one of the trash mobs, the Alchemist, with the Enchanted Emissary. There's lost a bunch of damage on the main mob there because we do have those rat test subjects in there as well, but looking to finally try to polish off the rest of this pull. And once again, I don't think this will be enough, so they're going to have to do a bipartite encounter here as they get ready to pull a second trash pack, or we'll see exactly what AAA does. That was very close from whoa. I was like, whoa, on AAA there when he leapt out of those swirlies on the ground. That does a ton of damage, even on fortified. It's all fire damage on this boss, too.
Yeah, like you mentioned, we saw a couple different strategies from teams to finish their last percentage. Oh, these guys are taking a ton of damage from the fire on the ground here. Cheat death popped for Bao because of that. Fortunately, only one of the cheat deaths is popped and nobody goes down, so they don't have to commit their battle races. But that was That was spooky for sure. That was not very well executed in the slightest.
Spooky, and it forced the rallying cry out of the warrior.
Yeah, that's just another raid cooldown gone. Fortunately, but the thing is, if you use a cooldown to prevent deaths, I think that's worth it. Now, we see this robot on the side, the War Machine, that was pulled with the boss for one of the Western teams last weekend, and they did use that for the final percentage, and there you go. They're pulling it just solo. They're opting to not pull it with the boss.
Probably for the best after what just happened.
Playing it very, very safe here.
Yeah, and once again, we have this discussion all the time on the desk during the cups when the teams are not engaged in land play. They know what their status is in this dungeon. They know where their opponent is in this dungeon. Perhaps it's totally possible that they usually try and pull that War Machine on top of Rix's Flux Flame, but they decided not to here because why not? They're at least 55 seconds ahead in this dungeon purely from deaths alone, not to mention an entire boss.
Yeah, I feel like we say it so many times. It's going to take a wipe from AAA to for Buff Warner to come back in this dungeon. That being said, War Machine goes down as well as the technician next to him. They have 100% trash percentage. All they get to do now is skip to the final boss, use their Shadow Modes, and they might have their Bloodlust come up in the second phase. The boss, I'm not quite sure. It's fortified.
You and I always have this discussion about the Bloodlust on this boss. I think they'll get it up second half rather, but maybe not right away at the 50% mark.
Right, it is fortified too, so it's not. They don't have that much HP. Did they? Yeah, it looks like the rogue messed up his Vanish/Shadow Mode skip there, so that's just another death. That's extra death on the board. 5 seconds plus a res cast time. So, little small mistake shouldn't cost them as long as they don't wipe on the boss. I'm not trying to caster curse them here or anything, but that's not what you want to look at all.
Motions with your hand right now, then. D unfortunately manages to die here for AAA right now as they work to res him up. Neither rogue has cheat death available for pretty much the rest of this encounter, the rest of the dungeon. Bao has about, I would say, 4 minutes left on that, and of course we just saw D die on the side. So rogue's completely vulnerable for AAA right now as Lai kites the homing missile out of the group, making sure that nobody incurs that extra fire damage over time. Well dodged here from the Boomba bots. Right now, we of course do know these Boomba bots cover roughly a 2x3 grid. There's a few safe areas you can go to, or at least drag the boss to a more safe location as well. Rix's Flux Flame finally going down here for Buff Warrior, who's at 99% trash right now, Zyro.
Looks like they might just try to, kill a couple bombs after the final boss dies to finish off their trash percentage. And like you mentioned, with those safe spaces, in this 2x3 grid that they have, usually putting the boss in between these two grates here is kind of one of those safe spots. You'll almost always have some spots on top of the boss.
That sounds like a great strategy, Zyro. 59% right now, Mogul Razdunk, as they're about to transition in just a moment, which usually takes a while, even in this fortified environment. I mean, it's basically a forced time transition. Even if you do it perfectly, he has to stomp down on 3 of those oil cans, or oil canisters, if you will. So here they go down right now into 3 different areas of the map. The team will get ready to make sure they go to the correct location and dunk the boss there. Mogul Razdunk has been already engaged from Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, but 10 death difference. They're missing the trash. I guess they're going to run into we've seen this before, like some teams kind of backtrack for a second just to kill one of the mines.
Yeah, well, I think it's like 1/3% per mine, so they can just run into 3 different bombs with 3 players and blow up the bombs, and that should give them the rest of their percentage. But that being said, they're just significantly behind at this point. The AAA is still, they've been in their intermission for a long time now. They opted to not break the pillars here in this phase while they were killing the trash. They opted to just play it super safe and not take the AoE damage while they were dealing with the 2 technicians. So they're just playing way safe right now. Maybe they're waiting for their Bloodlust to come up. I'm not quite sure. Buff Warner has their Bloodlust available, but they haven't used it in the first phase yet.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no reason not to, but I guess there is, right? Everything lines up at the start. Pre-pods line up at the start, but they did indeed opt to save it for what I would assume would be the second phase for the higher DPS increase rather than the safety of using it for transition. So we'll see exactly where they committed. 17 seconds here for AA, and oh no, looks like we were both wrong. I don't think they're going to get their Bloodlust available before the boss dies here. So Mogul Razdunk in the single digits of percent now, about to fall over here for AA, and they're about to finish the map and tie up the series, Zyro.
Use Bloodlust. Use it. Use it.
I'll see you guys again in Tol Dagor. Hopefully one of these teams just zooms through it and makes it a short Dagor as they bust out the front of the dungeon right now and get ready for... Now, they can't really have as substantial of a pull here, Zyro, just because they don't have access to that Unholy DK.
Yeah, the Unholy DK isn't exactly what you need to make this pull big, but the Outlaw Rogues should suffice as well as the Windwalker. That being said, they do opt to go, both groups actually opt to go for a smaller pull where they only have 1 pack of crabs and 1 of those crocodiles as well. So, like you mentioned, not a very big pull. Big difference here, though. AAA committed their Bloodlust. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue didn't. They're opting to not use it for the AoE here.
Yeah, sorry, I was just still staring at Jack, just sitting there smiling on the side. Sanguine here, 75%. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it kind of begs the question, the more important thing is, where are they going to use it then? Because one of the most dangerous pulls that we see, at least from teams so far this season, Tol Dagor has been combining a bunch of trash with the Sanguine at the start. Obviously, the trash is done already. Sanguine's at 64%. There's no point for them to use it here, so they're going to have to commit to a pull upstairs. But a lot of damage here for AAA. A lot of damage and disaster as both the tank, WoW, and Hun, the Windwalker, go down. Hun, unfortunately, cannot be res. They only have one res available to them. And, I mean, we spoke too soon, Zyra. There was the bloodlust here from Sanguine. From Buff War Nerf Rogue.
And this makes sense. We saw this difference between a lot of teams last cups and the spring season as well. If you use bloodlust on the pull of the boss, you only get about 30 seconds of damage uptime on the boss before he does his first upheaval. If you use it after the upheaval, you get all 40 seconds on the boss. That being said, they used it before the upheaval, which is looks like they just forgot to hit the button, honestly.
You know, it's funny because too often do we give these teams the benefit of the doubt, and we say, oh, these are some of the best teams in the world. But we've actually talked to a bunch of the West teams that are in the top, and they're like, dude, we just literally forgot about the button a couple of times in the dungeon. So it's not outside the capacity of these players to forget pressing the button at the right time. So both teams have finally committed their bloodlust. Obviously, huge advantage to Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here on the Sanguine as it reaches 15%, 7% on trash, and of course they have a full team strength of 5 with battle res available still to them. Sanguine should fall here well before AAA. Only has 6% trash on the board. A lot of explosives coming in as we see the shield wall get popped here from WoW, wanting to make sure to stay as safe and defensive as possible after he already died once and the battle res is not available for them.
I saw that, Supreme. You got hit by the upheaval. You got to time the grappling hook better, man. You better watch this back and be like, man, I missed that. We're going to see the same thing from most teams here. They're going to be skipping a lot of the trash here. They might take care of this first wave of parasites, but they're definitely looking to skip as much trash as possible until they get to the buff floor. And then that's where we see the difference from most teams go off. We're going to see probably differing strategies in terms of how much percentage they're going to get before the cannons. But I think the prevailing strategy that we saw from the West Cup last week was the best thing to do was take care of most of the trash on the bridge, and then you could do a massive pull with all of the trash on the top floor, pull that into the first cannon, use all your shots as much as you can there, get everything as low as possible, and then finish it off with a second cannon. That was like the prevailing, probably fastest strategy we saw from most of the teams.
Yeah, so far, and it worked very well for Method EU, so we'll see exactly what they get there. But, you know, before that, let's back it on up like a U-Haul truck here, Zyro, because what we have to consider is the second boss floor, Jess Howless. We've seen a lot of we just saw it in the previous series, right? We've seen a lot of teams, even in the second season, even with the West teams, have a lot of trouble with either explosive or sanguine. These are devastating affixes on the Jess Howless floor. We saw it wipe in the previous series as well, so those teams kind of got to get through that choke point before we wonder too much about what they're going to do with the cannon. AAA finally has gotten past the sanguine as well, of course, and is moving upstairs. We see double blind there on the two mobs. Hun, unfortunately, gets the 2% health. He needs to be healed because he has the Grievous taken. One stack of Grievous, unfortunately, finishes the job as he goes down. Now, he is running Night Elf, right? So I'm not sure if he died on purpose or not, but he doesn't have his Shadow Meld available, so maybe that was on purpose, but I don't know why.
Did they not res him as well? They pulled before they resed him?
Yeah,
so they're not going to have it. This is the second time in the dungeon where they're just doing a trash pack or a boss with 1 DPS down. This is, I mean, I'm not sure what's going on here. This is not what you want to see out of them at all. I was about to say right when that happened. So far, both of these teams, neither team had a problem with trash skipping, but last second, Windwalker goes down, and Buff Warner have already pulled Jess Howless through the wall, and about to phase into phase 2. Yeah, about to phase, and you know, I really like the strategy with the pull through the wall. It's just the safest to deal with, especially with this explosive environment. You don't have to worry about any explosives along the way. You don't really have to worry about the Shadow Emissary on the side there. You just kind of cleave everything at the end and then stay on top of explosives, which is coming up right now, finally. Luckily, the team gets out of the stun, which of course happens when the boss transitions at 70%. Ching here grabbing some of the trash back around the corner as Just does his round to open the cells and expose Bobby and, of course, all of the raiders and jailers within those cells. AAA still working here to finish off the rest of the trash. Not really sure what Hun is doing or what's going on with them right now, but the Windwalker has been down for the entirety of the trash here when he died earlier, after he died earlier. Yep, and the important thing to mention here is they don't really have to worry about interrupts on any of these trash mobs. C speakers aren't in with the trash with them, so they can really commit all of their interrupts to both Bobby and Jess Howless for the fears as well as the rampage, the single target maul stun that he does. So as long as they keeping track with their interrupts and are killing explosives, which it looks like they've got most of the trash down, you know, minus a couple of small mobs, they're going to be totally fine. We've seen so many wipes to explosive in this particular corner.
We have, and part of it is because most of these mobs run away in fear when they reach low health. The Arsonist, for instance, you can see them running back in the back right now, and what will happen is, often is, an Arsonist runs away, spawns an explosive 20, 25 yards away. Somebody doesn't even see it, let alone get to it, because they're running an all-melee comp. It pops, and somebody goes down, and disaster and hilarity ensue, depending on which side of the equation you're on. So, not in this case, though, for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, which is now 24% trash, and has hit the last fifth of health on Jess Hallis at 17% right now. AAA, once again, full strength. Hun has decided to get his hands out of the honey pot and rejoin the team.
Yeah, okay. I can't even comment on that one. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has Jess Hallis going down here, so no catastrophic wipe to explosives from them, although they do have some spawning at the end. Could have cast a curse to them there, but not going to happen. Second boss goes down. I'm interested.
You are a merciful god, Zyro.
not today, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Not today. I'm interested to see what they're planning on doing with the cannons, which strategy they're going to choose, or maybe they'll come up with something completely different, because it is still early in this cup. They have time. They had time to come up with something new.
Maybe they'll use the cannons to shoot each other.
Well, I think if you shoot the prot warrior tanking these spell reflects, you actually end up killing yourself. I'm not sure if that helps him in the dungeon, but it'd be pretty funny to see.
It would be fun. Would be fun. Hilarity would ensue once again. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has now reached the top of the cannon. 24% on trash is more akin to what we saw in the previous season, where you did the whole 70 to 80% worth of trash in the dungeon with the cannon. So once again, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue definitely seems to be putting all of their eggs in the cannon basket here and working well around with that, as they kill the Void Emissary that guards the very first cannon, are dealing with the remaining two mobs before the Marine, of course. Before moving over and grabbing what I would assume to be a pretty substantial pull. We have seen the power of Ring of Peace here, Zyro, come in to make sure that they bottleneck all of the trash coming in from the floor so that they can make every shot of their 5 shots from each cannon count.
Yeah, but the problem is at some point they kind of start spreading out because of their casts, and you really kind of want to make sure you get as many cannon shots as possible when they're behind that Ring of Peace. That's kind of the ideal scenario. Oh. Usually they only get 1 or 2. This is something typical. We've seen they move the barrel behind the cannon so that it can't get ignited by any of these mobs here. So that's something we've seen a lot, but I think that's the first time we've gotten like a really close-up view of them doing it. It's just a tiny thing they do to set up their pulls.
I mean, he's having a barrel last there. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue now with a big pull. Actually, it's not even that big of a pull. It's really only it's the 2 packs on the side, right? It's the 2 plus 3 behind. So we have a 5-pack coming in here, plus an Emissary of Tide joins the fold right now. They still have not committed to the cannon, but Ching goes down. They have a battle res available. Morita goes down as well. Loda just does not commit that GCD to the situation yet, as Loda's just off on the side right now. They're doing what they can to handle the situation. Loda finally casting Rebirth, gets an angle on Ching BB, but it looks like it might be too little too late as Supremacist procs cheat death as well and is about to die, runs off into the distance and vanishes, and it looks like they might try to reset the pull here. I'm not sure if Loda has access to Shadow Belt. He does not. He has a few more seconds on that as just tons of explosives rain down on the parade of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. This is getting pretty nasty right now, Zyro.
He couldn't cast Battle Res. He had the chains on him, so even if he wanted to, he was silenced. He had no way of getting through it, so that was just kind of on the Rogues for not stunning or CCing that cast. They could have pulled that off. Fortunately, it's not a complete wipe for them. They're able to get a mass res off, but that was still they still have to reset the pull here because of that, which is not ideal in any scenario actually.
No, not at all. So 2 deaths on the board for them. They didn't take the Rebirth in the end, right? He cast the Rebirth, but Ching opted not to take it. So they have that available to them later. They'll have a second one in about 30 seconds as well. As AAA looking to chew through the rest of the floor, we do see the explosions of the Void Emissary that is present in the corner of Jess Hallis' floor, still pumping some damage in the corner as they line of sight it. They haven't even started Jess Hallis yet. They are at 44% trash, so we can already see 2 quite different strategies coming in from these teams. One going with the more traditional, if you will, strategy from Season 2, where you kill most of the trash with the cannons. But, I want to say they kill most of the trash with the cannons, but they haven't killed any of the trash with the cannons. They're just pulling everything and prepping themselves for the cannons. So I assume that they're trying to clear the entire floor so that they have a huge L-shaped kite space along the balcony in which they will pull the majority of the floor and finish, versus the strategy coming out of AAA right now, which is they said, hey, look, the cannons are nerfed. We're going to kill as much trash as we can to deal minimally with the cannons upstairs.
And one of the small changes that one of the small little details that I noticed whenever Method EU was doing the strategy last time around is they made sure that the rogue that was shooting the cannon had their cloak available, because they have to deal with those explosives coming out from all the mobs as well. Everyone else can LOS, they can round the corner, but the rogue can kind of sit in the cannon until they proc their cheat death. Once they proc their cheat death, they can hop back in, use their cloak, and so they can be in the cannon for all 5 shots while they're grouping up all these mobs. And both of the rogues have cloak available, so they can do that should they choose to.
should they choose to. And should they choose to as well, AAA just had their Bloodlust come back up right now. So I'm going to be curious if they actually end up using it on just Halitzess. I don't see why they wouldn't, just because the boss takes a while. You want to use that on phase 2, especially if you combine it with any extra trash. Just Halitzess now coming around for phase 2. So let's see if they end up using it here, just because they've spent so much time clearing trash. And indeed, here is the Bloodlust from AAA right now, as just Halitzess joins the rest of them. They cleave down the Raiders and just try to secure themselves as much as possible. But all eyes here on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Finally, the big pull we've been waiting for coming to fruition as Supreme just does as much damage out of that cannon as he can. A lot of explosives coming up. The team's going to have to line of sight this just to make sure they stay healthy as they keep the rest of the group at bay. I believe they've already used their Ring of Peace, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, they have another 20 seconds on that. Supreme goes down.
That was their final shot. They've used all 5 shots from this cannon, and honestly, most of the mobs are at 20 or 40% health. They did a pretty solid job there. They should be able to finish off the rest of the trash with 2 or 3 shots from this cannon if they have everything stacked up properly. Supreme is just going to go ahead and release, and he can run back through with stealth and vanish or shadow meld should he pull any mobs along the way. So they should be totally fine. All they have to do is outrange these explosives that are spawning. But this is...
That Flamecaster just did not care about that Ring of Peace at all.
Yeah, this is... I mean, it's funny watching all these explosives spawn because they're just flat LOSing most of these. They're going to wait until they stack them up right by this pillar from LOSing, and they should be able to finish this off with 1 or 2 cannon shots.
You know, something that I like seeing in the West, and I wish that Loda would have implemented here as well, he didn't choose Mass Entangle, he chose Typhoon as well. I think Mass Entangle would have been the better call here, combined with an Ursul's Vortex / ROP, just to group up all those mobs together and keep them still. Even if it's just for 2 more cannon shots, that's 40% of the cannon's damage right there. So, you know, I'm not sure Typhoon was really the best play here nonetheless, and it probably would have helped, for instance, in that situation where the mobs kind of spread out, but they did manage to squeeze by without any further casualties outside of their 3rd death, which was from Supreme just earlier in that cannon with all these explosives going off. AAA has now dealt with Just Halitzess and is working up the floor. You know, AAA's strategy and some of the strategies, as a result, some of the strategy we saw in the West as well, of just kind of grinding through the dungeon, just kind of reminds me of, you know, typical beta pulls where, like beta BFA pulls where you're just grinding through the dungeon because you didn't know the power of the cannons. It looks like they've kind of returned to that strategy because they just don't have faith in the cannon damage anymore.
This is weird. It looks like they missed 1 Marine off to the right, or they had it behind a Ring of Peace or something. I'm not sure why it's stuck back there, but they have finished off all their cannon shots, and their Monk has gone down. It looks like they're going to...
If they finished off their Monk with the cannon shots...
They committed their battle res to this, so this is it for them. And instead, we did see some teams opt to pull the remainder of the trash with the boss, but looks like they're just going to play it safe and finish off the trash right here because, like you mentioned earlier, these teams do know where they are in the dungeon, and it looks like Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is pretty solidly ahead. They have the Bloodlust available as well, which AAA will not have available for another 7.5 minutes. And to be honest with you, I don't think this dungeon is going to last another 7.5 minutes for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue.
I don't think so either, man. But like Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just, you know, slowly keeps doing things that just are slowing them down immensely. Inefficiency of pulls, inefficiency of control on their pulls, an extra death here and there. They just committed a battle rest, I believe, clipping their Monk with the cannon there. If I'm not mistaken, that's what happened. That's 5 deaths on the board. They entered this floor with, I think, 1 or 0, so not exactly the cleanest of executions up on this balcony, but Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue certainly solidly ahead as they pulled Knight Captain Valyria right now. Lie with a bit of issue here. Big pull coming in from AAA right now as, did we see the Ursul's Vortex? No, that's actually the a spinning crane kick from the Monk right now as they try to control some of this trash in here, but it's quite well spread out and there's a lot of ranged trash that's not interruptible that is making AAA's life a living nightmare right now.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what they're doing. This looks like a much smaller pull than we saw anything Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue did, and haven't used the cannon yet, I'm pretty sure. This is the first time they got to the platform, so they did get a lot of their trash percentage done before this, but I'm interested to see what they're planning on using their cannon on because they don't need to pull the entire top floor. All they have to do is pretty much clear the bridge and maybe do 1 or 2 of the packs from inside and they're done.
They are done, and Knight Captain Valyria here at 53%. I'm just kind of keeping an eye on what they're doing with their barrels. Your Loda stacking 2 of them in the corner. Ching BB taking one of them maybe 3 yards away from where it originally spawned, not combining it with the other one, but it looks like what they just wanted to do here was clear half of the room for themselves, which is where they immediately pull Valyria just to make sure that Melee have 100% uptime access to the boss once the room starts filling up. A lot of damage coming in on Woe right now, who pops his shield wall just to try and stay alive on the side of AAA, and manages to do so. Marine just taking further shot suppression fire coming in, huge cone frontal fire from them as they use their, I believe that was Shockwave, no, not Shockwave, actually this is a sweep, just to make sure that the suppression fire didn't cast off, but eventually it will, applying that damage over time effect that Lie can indeed dispel. Important to note as well, Zyro, neither of these healers have their Ashara staff available for the remainder of the dungeon.
Yeah, and that's actually, Ashara Staff in this dungeon is an interesting choice because it is a vertical dungeon and the Ashara Staff is essentially a giant arcane explosion. it can pull Overseer Corgus if you're on the top floor or the floor right below that. So it's a little bit of an interesting choice. I'm actually curious to see where they proc, because they could have just pulled the final boss at some point in the dungeon if they didn't proc it at the right time.
Lode having... sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, that would have been really weird if that happened, to be honest.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. I was going to say Lode taking a lot of damage here from the the Void explosions, the Void AoE, and actually almost dipping low quite early. He took a couple of hits from the Priest as well, as we finally see Ching BB run up and grab the remaining 2 Wardens at the top. These are the remaining 5 mobs that they need after they've chiseled all the damage on the Void. D taking a lot of damage, 2 stacks of the Void plus 3 stacks of Grievous. Looks like a lot of trouble getting healed up from Lai on the side of AAA, but they do manage finally to stabilize as they kill off that Void Emissary that sits in the corner of the first cannon on the floor leading up to Knight Captain Valyria that we saw earlier. Ursul's Vortex now down for buff warrior nerf. Rogue Supreme gets down to 2% health, and he has that Grievous taking on him. Loaded really needs to pay some attention to him to make sure that he keeps him alive. They still have the battle res available, but you know, going into the last boss, the last thing you need is 0 battle reses.
I can literally hear in my head Supreme shouting out, "Help, man." on his shower progress, his mic wasn't working, so he sat right next to me. Every single time he had problems in the intermission phase, he would just yell, "Help!" and someone behind us would be like, "Supreme needs help, help him, help him." So I can literally hear him yelling help whenever he goes low there. Fortunately, didn't proc his cheat death, so still has it available for this boss. But we've mentioned it so many times, on Fortified, this boss is just not as dangerous. They can get so many of those doubles that Nagura always talks about, and they should be totally fine, because, you know, Fortified, the boss isn't doing as much damage, it's not gonna kill you very easily.
I mean, that's very true. In Fortified, the bosses do not do as much damage as in Tyrannical. Zyre, you nailed that one on the head right here. As Overseer Corgus, he raised his fist in victory when I said that. Overseer Corgus now at 62% HP, no problem for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, who just finished off the final round of Bloodlust for the dungeon. AAA is just way too far behind at this point to even compete. They're still dealing with the mid-balcony trash leading up to Knight Captain Valyria, so they're essentially an entire boss and a half behind, not to mention 24% trash on the board. So all eyes here on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, that you know, still proving as to why they are the top seed, Zyro, but perhaps not in the most clean fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier when in the Black Mamba versus I don't remember who they were playing, but in their match versus full speed. Sometimes it's not about how good your strat is in general. If you have problems, it's about how you react to those problems and continue to play throughout the rest of the match. If you make a mistake and you play safe after that point, you're not really playing with like the mind of a champion, right? You want to make sure that you're playing to your strategy the entire time, and I feel like they've done that here.
Yeah, no, I feel like that too. And Black Mamba, you know, kudos to them. Nagura mentioned it earlier. It is very hard. You know, on live you get frustrated, you leave the group, you drop the key, whatever. It's very tough to get your mind straight after, especially after an early dungeon wipe or some screw-ups here. But it worked out properly for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue as they seal the deal here. Overseer Corgus does fall, and they manage to win the series 2-1. In Boralus, and both teams right off the bat just checking out here. We actually have Horde side for Team D. Actually, Horde side on both teams right now. We can see the Arcane Torrents present on Black Mamba side, and of course on Team D side as well, as they rush down through the lower rampart area of the dungeon. Looks like both teams, Nagura, opting to skip as much of that trash as possible and get over to that first boss's room as quick as they can.
Yeah, one more thing to note about Team D is that they're running the same comp as they were running in spring season. They're not running this DK that they usually run. So in the very first week of the spring season of the Eastern weekend, they were the ones who were kind of trendsetting this DK. They were running DK in every single dungeon. They only caved in the second week where they actually were switching out the DK for the Windwalker Monk. So interesting to see that they're not running this DK while Black Mamba, on the other hand, choosing to do. So we see the only difference here is, of course, the Windwalker versus the DK. We'll see whoever does better in this dungeon. Utility-wise, Windwalker should be doing better, right? Because most of the mobs are going to be killed, but they spotted later on. But damage-wise, we've seen DK shine, especially in those really huge AoE pools.
Yeah, but it's like you said, though, I mean, those huge AoE pools will be handled largely by the spotter. But, I mean, whatever damage you can get on top of it, it's not like the spotter one-shots them, especially as we don't have a Raging present that we did on the West Cup before. Nonetheless, Black Mamba here has gone ahead and popped Bloodlust on that first boss. Sergeant Bainbridge, of course, is the boss present here instead of Captain Red Hook for the Horde versus the Alliance side. Bombs finally have come down as they do well to kite through that bomb and get as much damage as they can in right now. But moving over, BL Wong making sure he rounds up all of these ads together.
Yeah, so we see the Bloodlust being popped here as well on the first boss. Now, this usually should not be a super big deal for these teams. We've seen some teams struggle, but only if the healer died because, you know, it didn't kite it properly or was playing too risky, got hit by a bomb, stuff like that. Otherwise, there's not huge problems at all because most of the ads are just being either cleaved down or they're being CC'd throughout the fight, so they don't have to deal with them. Of course, you just want to single target down the boss because those ads, they will stop respawning if you just keep them up on the Horde side. On the Lion side, they keep spawning no matter what you do with the ads, but on the Horde side, if you just keep them alive, the Vanguards, they will not continue to spawn, so you can just constantly off-tank them. Of course, it's a little bit annoying for the tank with the Necrotic, but the tank can just choose to kite if he feels like it's gonna be a problem.
Another advantage for those scumbag Horde, am I right, Nagura? Alliance always has it hard in these dungeons. Black Mamba rocketing past that first boss right now and pulling all these Marauders on the side, being careful not to get too many debuffs too quickly on BL Wong here right now as the Wave Shipper gets killed as well. They get ready to move on towards that first spotter, which is where the dungeon starts to take a turn with efficiency. But they decide not to listen to what I'm saying and pull the commander on the side first and just deal with that before moving on. We can see the Kulturan Marksman well CC'd by that Paralyze over on the side of Team D, who has now rejoined us in the fold. Just had a bit of observer lag there for the moment, but everything has been stabilized. Sergeant Bainbridge about to go down here for Team D as they rush off to meet their counterparts, Black Mamba on the side. A bit behind on the boss, Nagura, but 6% trash advantage here, so pretty even overall.
Yeah, it's definitely even, and I want to see just like consistent play out of Black Mamba here, because Black Mamba had a lot of trouble in the previous game where they won 2-0, but they were playing very sloppily. They had lots of deaths, they were making many mistakes, and Moon was specifically saying that he was very nervous before the first Barrow match. So hopefully they got their nerves under control and they're actually playing a lot better here, because they will have to do so if they want to win against Team D. But so far it's looking really well. They have 0 deaths, they're doing well. It's a different strategy that both of those teams are running, as you mentioned. Team D killed the boss a little bit later, but they're ahead in trash, so it's still very even between those two. But we'll see. I think the most crucial part is going to be after the second boss, to see what those two teams are going to do with the spotter.
Yeah, that's really where the dungeon takes a nasty turn. There's just a huge amount of trash that they deal with. High trash density, a lot of tricks with the spotter, a lot of danger coming in from the commanders on the tank. We have necrotics going off. Of course, the snipers that do their ricochet cast on all of the members of the party. So just a lot of danger that comes in, but we'll see when we get there first as they run in, making sure to tag everything on the side. They're getting all the percentage that they need, as Black Mamba is likely to kill off their first spotter pretty soon. Team D not far behind right now as they line of sight around the corner. You could see the Enchanted, or the Arcane Emissary, if you will, trying to get into the pack there as they look to just bump it out of the way. You can see Spinning Crake doing his job there. Unfortunately, the artillery does target Monk there, Loon, and he just misses one of the strikes on the Wave Shaper, but should be enough to finish it off there as they get ready to pull big in just a moment that we saw Black Mamba do. But Black Mamba, I was just...
Wait, I'm actually sorry.
No, I know you're going to go ahead.
Okay, so the druid is running the glyph that he cannot carry someone, a buddy on his back, and that's why the DK had to die here, because he has no way of jumping. So he didn't put him on his back and didn't jump over.
I was looking at whether I was like, I know you're going to say the DK died. I didn't realize that's why he died. You get that smile off your face, Akira. You teach those druids.
That is so selfish. I love it.
All right. Yeah, I think you've got enough ideas for live playing what to do with poor Jack on the back there. But Dread Captain Lockwood has been engaged here from Black Mamba right now, who are sitting at 31% trash on the board. And it looks like they've quite aggressively combined it with some of the trash in front of them. Oh my god, the Unholy DK gets down to about 1% HP. Manages to heal up, though, as Wong has 29 stacks of Necrotic right now. They're in transition phase of the boss, but he's not able to shake off these Necrotic stacks. 31. That is just too much to handle right now.
Yeah, he might be able to taunt off, someone might be able to taunt off, but there's so many mobs, so he can't taunt off all of them. And maybe some sort of C will help him out here, but it just continues to stack up, as you see, 35, 36, so he definitely has to watch out what he's going to do here and how he's going to stay alive, because he's basically immune to healing at this point. The Residue spamming Regrowth is not really going to help him at all with those 40 stacks.
He's at 40 stacks, he's 80% unhealable right now, and both rogues chasing these mobs around. He just refreshed at 41, and both rogues chasing the mobs around proc their cheat death from the cannon barrage coming in from the boat during transition. Wong needs to get rid of these stacks. He's at 46 right now. He's almost literally unhealable. 4 more stacks and he will be completely unhealable as he tries to get away from these mobs, and the DK does well to finally grip in, finally gets a breath of relief as he charges back into Dread Captain Lockwood here, resetting his stacks. We get a bit of a visions proc here from Light right now that buffs his teammates, of course, with haste as a result. We do know that's what that rank 3 essence does. Team D here moving in and getting ready to pull the boss themselves as well, dealing with a fair bit of the trash compared to Black Mamba, but has not yet pulled the boss. So similar story, but further developed that we saw from the first boss there, Nagura.
Yeah, definitely. 59%. So they only have 40% left at this point. We see the staff being procced for the rest of the Black Mamba side here. We see Moon go down, actually. They do have 1 battle rest, and it's going to get casted immediately here to get him back up. Captain Lockwood on 40%. This is a 45 setting, and at this point, they're taking so long to kill this boss just because, I mean, they didn't have a wipe or anything, but because of the tank struggling so much with the necrotic stacks, everyone had to help him out to try to reset it, and therefore the boss is just taking so long. Well, Team D can catch up at this point. I mean, they might not even be behind, which we're not sure yet, just because they're so far ahead in trash. It will totally depend on what those teams are going to do right after this boss.
We can see the food buff there present on Moon from the battle res coming in from the Druid. We do know that is one of the Azurite traits they can take, so just a neat little fact there as a Fish Feast does come down for the cheetah form there of the rest of Druid. Eats up quickly, gets that man up as they get ready to get to what we kind of talked about earlier, the very dangerous part of the dungeon where there's a lot of trash that they need to combine together. We already saw some, I don't want, sloppy is the wrong word, but very daring play with necrotic stacks earlier from Wong that got up to 46 stacks on the previous boss. A lot of bananas here and a lot of slipping that can be done on those bananas, so the team has to be really careful with a very dangerous pull that's come in here. They don't have a Bloodlust to overcast on it either, as Team D works on actually almost killing the boss already, so they're catching up big time right now.
Yeah, so one of the rogues just got feared by the demo here, and also got stunned by the banana afterwards while still having the cloak ready. And the tank actually dropping really low as he starts kiting here. This is very dangerous, and we've seen a strategy before with this Vengeance Demon Hunter where they would just gather everything up, mass fear it, and then try to kill it with a spotter, just because how dangerous these mobs are, as we can see right here on Black Mamba's side. It's so difficult because if with a full melee lineup, you just have to dodge those bananas, you have to dodge the fear that is coming out, the frontal from the demo, which does a lot of damage to the slam. And the closer you are to those Buccaneers, the less cast time there is for the bananas to land. The further away you are, the easier they are to dodge. But if you're very close to them, they almost immediately spawn, and it's really hard to dodge. So melees definitely have a harder time, but rogues do have their cloak ready, so in case something goes wrong, they can always use that one.
Yes, and Gurney's plenty of times demonstrated for us how the range can hit by those bananas as well. Black Mamba now at 48%, dealing with the final Buccaneer. And Team D, I mean, is just starting to run away with this one. They already had a pretty massive trash advantage post-second boss, which they cut up pretty substantially on because of just way less sloppy pulls compared to Black Mamba. They've managed to do a bit of a pull downstairs here. This is essentially where the dock, the pier, is just off to the side. There's a little passageway after the village area. I don't think I've seen a team pull through here since like season 1 or something, so interesting that they're only dealing with a double mob here. Perhaps they're just trying to get themselves in a prime position for dealing with for grabbing one of the mass stealths from the rogue. Nonetheless, we'll see exactly what they do here as they get up to 63% trash, poke back out, and they're getting ready to move through. They can't exactly stealth through here because there's that void touch emissary, and it looks like they're just going to try to brute force this one down.
I actually double check and look at Team D stat because I've never actually been down there at the dock area, so very interesting to see that they pulled that down. It reminds me of Court of Stars, where people will pull everything to the dock at the very start of the dungeon. So very interesting strategy by Team D coming out here. And we see a Ring of Peace usage as well. Now, when it comes to utility, Windwalker compared to DK, I think for the Ring of Peace is just so invaluable for stacking up the mobs here, especially because of the spotter strategy that you're trying to do, right? The DK does have the single target grip, but it's not going to be as efficient as this Ring of Peace, just keeping all of the mobs together and also helping with the emissaries as well at the same time, while you kill everything with this artillery coming down. And you can see the very beautiful strategy here by Team D as they have 4 CCs on those snipers and just try to kill them before they can cast any ability, because the artillery does not actually break CC, as you can see right here.
Yeah, it doesn't indeed. You get double sap and the double blind coming in, and they do excellent job of tagging the mobs right before they die, because if they were to let them die completely from the spotter, they would actually not get percentage from them. So that's why we have that shockwave come up right away from U-claps just at the very end to make sure that they get that percent. They head downstairs right now with the spotter just to get a quick 3 capos on the mobs, getting them to probably about 80% before they do what I would assume is the pretty substantial pull in Hadal's room, the 3rd boss of the dungeon. Black Mamba having their own issues right now as they do a pretty big pull themselves. A lot of damage coming in as Wong sits at around 50% HP, like 7 as well at around 50% HP, so a lot of damage cut out for them, and unfortunately Light gets clipped by one of the Void Emissary casts and almost dips down, does not have cheat death available, should be coming up in just a few seconds. A lot of damage coming in on Wong right now, not able to clean those necrotic stacks, and he goes down here. Unholy DK follows suit, and everybody's scrambling to try and finish off this pack right now, I mean, finally the Eden's about to go down. I'm actually not sure what health he has right now, but it looks like a pretty desperate situation as the rest of Druid runs away. Everything's going Wong here in Nagura.
Yeah, Wong is stunned by a banana again. So the reason why he died was he got stunned by a banana, and now he comes back and gets stunned by a banana twice. So Wong definitely having some trouble with these slippery bananas on the floor. You know, if you're a damage dealer and you get stunned by a banana, it's only gonna be a problem if you get hit by another ability on top of that he can't dodge because of the stun. But if you're a tank and you get stunned, then you're gonna have a lot bigger problems than a DPS. So Wong definitely making some mistakes here, but they did recover now and managed to finish off this pull. This cost them quite a bit of time, as they now are on 8 deaths, meaning 40 seconds difference. And on top of that, Team D is already way further into the dungeon as they pulled the boss room now, popping their Bloodlust.
Popping their Bloodlust, and the Tree of Life has been busted out here from the rest of Druid on the side of Team D, who just pumps out as much healing with his dangerous pull as he can. The mobs are slowly tried to kite it through, at least some of those artillery blasts. A couple of those missed on the side, but fortunately the Ursul's Vortex going down from the rest of Druid is enough to just get them back in. We do know that the commanders are not privy to the damage from the spotter, so you will have to just DPS them down normally, as 5 seconds remains on their Bloodlust, and they're sitting at 96% on trash, which should be pretty much just enough with these 2 mobs for them to get 100% before they move on to the 3rd boss. Black Mamba, everything is just so slow for them right now in Nagura. They finished the boss first. They were obviously behind on percent trash, but everything's so slow. I don't think they've been using the spotter for pretty much any of this or most of this, and so they're just kind of trying to raw throughput through it, and they're finally only now getting up to the snipers.
Yeah, we'll see how they handle these snipers here, because Team D did it beautifully. They didn't have a single cast go through, and it seems like Black Mamba is trying more of a brute force strategy as he just charged in and had a stun go up. But you can see how much damage those snipers are doing if you don't play around properly with them, because the casts are random shoots. They're gonna target random members. They just does so much damage, especially if you get targeted by multiple of them. As you can see just how low they are dropping by all those casts going through.
Yeah, I mean, just a lot of damage coming in. We mentioned it earlier, those ricochets from the snipers. I mean, there's a reason you see the teams just absolutely don't even touch them. They just get quadruple CC up, crowd control up on the mobs, and then just let that go through. Team D now halfway through Hadal Darkfathom encounter, as we see Hadal Darkfathom's energy at the bar, energy bar at the bottom. That is something finally that we've added here to the MDI UI. You can see the boss's energy bars, which have obviously several abilities depending on the boss. In the case of Hadal Darkfathom here, he will have that wave cast that goes through just to make sure that we can keep an eye on that. So once again, Hadal Darkfathom 25% here, about to cast his next wave, and Nagura, it looks like you just threw up your hands in disgust or anger or happiness. I'm not sure which one. What happened?
They finished off the spotter on Black Mamba's side, so they still have the whole trash left in Darkfathom's room, and they're just gonna do it without the spotter. I assume this was a planned thing to do, as they were all running to the spotter, focusing it down, killing it off. So interesting. I wonder what this is about. Maybe they had to go out of combat. Maybe the healer had to drink. I don't know. There was probably something going on. If it wasn't an intended strategy, then it's a very weird strategy, because how are you going to deal with all of this room without the spotter? You're going to be much slower if you do so. So there must have been a reason behind this, as they do actually still pull the whole room without a spotter and just popping their Bloodlust.
And they commit their Bloodlust. Like, I mean, it's kill or be killed right now for them here. The tank can only survive so long. A lot of damage coming in on Moon right now. Just barely gets healed up. He had some aggro, which is why he has the necrotic stacks. And same with Like right now, just making the poor Resto Druid's life so hard as BL Wong is now at 42, I believe, stacks of necrotic. Finally gets a dispel for the 5 stack of poison that are coming in from the Moz. Wong runs all the way downstairs. Of course, we know that the commander cannot get crowd control, but manages to get far away enough just for those necrotic stocks to drop. So it looks like they managed to pull it off, but once again, I mean, why not just include the spotter with that? That would have been faster. A bunch of free damage down the drain. Team D already working here on Vikhoth. First demolishing terror, gripping terror has been killed as they work off to finish the demolishing, as they have the cool Tyrion NPC, of course, fix that cannon.
Yeah, so one more time I want to mention that the reason why those teams are not pulling the spotters through this end boss anymore like they did in the spring final in Australia is of course because it did get fixed and those tentacles are not damageable anymore by the artillery from the spotter. So no reason to drag the spotter down here. This means that the boss is going to take a little bit longer, and how this boss works is basically that you want to kill the gripping tentacle on each of this platform to be able to shoot the boss and continue to the next platform. Now there's demolishers spawning on each platform that do spawn on a timer, and the more demolishers you get, the longer it takes, of course, because those demolishers do need to be tanked. So if you go all out on the gripping tentacle and you spawn 2 or 3 demolishers, you're probably going to wipe, because if they're not tanked, there's going to be a huge AoE on the whole group. We also see the other mechanic here where the rogues just got knocked into the water. This is because of this debuff that you can see right now in one of the rogues that needs to be dispelled by the healer that does do ticking damage, and there's a circle around them. If you dispel and there's anyone around you, you will knock them apart.
Well, the rogue is going for a swim down there as he gets tentacled from the bottom. That's what happens if you spend too long in the water. So that's going to be all she wrote for Mog, and this is actually particularly daunting for the team because they're committing to an all-in strategy here where they're trying to kill the gripping before too many demolishing spawn. They've already had a second demolishing spawn, fortunately close to that gripping, so one of the rogues can just off-tank it. If nobody's within melee range of these grippings, demolishings, you're going to have Hellcracker get cast on the group, and it's just an immense amount of damage that will wipe you. So pretty disastrous situation right now. I believe Mog has been finally able to rejoin the team, and they kill off that gripping just in time. Late in their cannons, of course, were channeled. They didn't have the Bloodlust, so that was almost disastrous for the team, but Team D manages to squeeze Bob.
Right now between Team D and Black Mamba, let's get it started in Waycrest.
Wong and Uclap right away joining their teams up the stairs and up to the left. Nigura, in the west we saw this group being pulled in front on top of the Void Emissary and just dealing with it there, but no such luck from the east teams as they get right in on the Triad.
Yeah, we see the Bloodlust being popped as well for both of the teams, both straight going to try using that Bloodlust here now. Compared to the spring caps, we do have Tyrannical here now instead of the 45 that we had before. So all of the bosses are going to be a little bit more difficult, but we see teams still just pulling trash on top of it, as we see Black Mamba pulling one of the side moves here, the Acolytes, which is very dangerous just because not only do these sisters have an aura that is getting applied to everyone, and the first one being a 50% healing reduction aura, but there's also lots of casts that need to interrupt on the boss, and then you also want to interrupt casts from the Acolyte. So at some point you're just going to run out of interrupts, and if casts go through, it gets more difficult for the healer to heal, as you can also see both of the healers doing 50k and 60k HPS.
Yeah, unfortunately a second round of AoE burst goes out on the side of Team D right now, but they managed to stabilize. Sister Briar starting up here, getting her Jagged Tettle spell ready, and finally nailing Ab with it, unfortunately, who was not topped off. They don't have a battle res, and Team D right out the get-go. I mean, man, Zyro was just saying if they play like this, no one can beat them. Zyro is just cursed, and he has cursed this team for the rest of time. Ab goes down. They have no choice but to force reset. This is a very, very healer-heavy fight, and there's no way they're completing an entire second round on that boss with their healer. So complete reset from the encounters. Everybody Shadow Melds off. They get their healer up as Long gets out of combat, casts that res, and they get ready to go again. We see Tree of Life here popped from Black Mamba, who's now about to deal with their second round of damage phase.
He can't heal off the Nettles, so you can see Moon, he still has the debuff, which does apply a grievous effect until you heal the person above 90% HP. And Moon's, the Restorer is not able to out-heal it, even though he is in Tree of Life form, which is a huge cooldown. Finally, he managed to get off the debuff, but it took him so much mana to get rid of this. And I think the same thing happened to Ab. He just died to the Nettles debuff on top of Quaking. Now, Quaking does not seem like a very dangerous affix to deal with, but if you have so much group damage going on, then it definitely can cause trouble, especially if it overlaps with something like the Nettles debuff.
But hang on, Resto Master Nagura, I'm pretty sure you don't consume mana in Tree of Life form, right?
You do.
You do?
Yeah.
You sure? Okay. So he's pumping out regrowth there, but the problem is the combination really that was very detrimental is those Jagged Nettles hit at the very end of the Sister Briar phase. So when they went back to the first phase of, the second phase of Sister Selena, what happened was you were sitting there in a situation where you were doing 50% reduced healing on somebody that was ticking rapidly in a tyrannical environment from Jagged Nettle. So that's why I was just having so much trouble. In fact, he probably would have died if he didn't have Tree Form there.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
So fortunately for them, that was the pick. But unfortunately for them, they now don't have access to their Ashara staff either. Envy's did proc it earlier. Big pull coming up here from Black Mamba in the Waycrest Manor courtyard right in front of Soulbound Goliath. A lot of damage coming in as they try to finish off this Void Emissary before it finishes them off.
This Quaking just seems so dangerous. It was like almost the worst timing to come out. And we see the DK going down and one more damage dealer going down here as the rest of the dude is actually getting stunned. And now they're going to have a full team wipe come in for Black Mamba here. So this huge pull that they're trying to do in this courtyard here on top of the Void Touch Emissary just not working out for them, as I believe the DK just failed to line of sight or use any sort of defensives to survive the first AoE cast. And then everything just going downhill from there, just a chain reaction, everything just going down. And now that they're all of them released, they're actually pulling some of the soul shards here. I'm not completely sure if they intended to do this or if they're just adjusting their route because of this full team wipe coming in.
Well, they had to because they physically couldn't move past it. It was guarding the door on the side that was just now open, so they had to pull this one to get by in the first place, which they're doing now as they cleave down one of the captains. Envies, of course, the rest of Druid having his work cut out for him. Certainly not envious of that on the side of Black Mamba. Everybody's just standing in line of sight as Team D is backtracked into the hallway. Something we've seen in the previous seasons as well, coming for some of the teams. They'll finish off the Triad and then go back in the hallway to do some of this trash fracture percentage, which is exactly what they're doing here. And they've combined it with that Void Touched Emissary. Forcibly, of course, it is present in the middle of the stairwell there. Cleaved it down. Acolyte is present here. Ab getting a couple of Soul Harass in before they get ready to likely move into the courtyard. Big pull coming in here from Black Mamba, though.
Yeah,
really
Black Mamba trying to do the same thing again. Now, this is a pull I wiped to before. Fortunately, the Void Emissary actually does not heal up to full HP. If you have a wipe on it, it will just stay in the same HP as you left it for. So it's going to be a lot easier for them to finish it off this time around. And without the Void Touch Emissary, they should be able to finish off this pull a lot easier this time around. As I say that, the DK just drops because there's just so many casts going through. You can see the debuffs on everybody. These Deceased and one going down too. This is going to be a full team wipe again. Now, if you have the Thorn Shapers just constantly cast, which just happened right now, and you have all these diseases on everyone, which is a druid cannot dispel diseases, then everyone's just going to drop, especially on top of raging, because the disease increases damage down when the mob are in raging range.
But you know who can dispel diseases is their monk, and their monk didn't because DPS brain. Am I right, Nigra, on this one? So a lot of struggles coming in here from Black Mamba. 2 wipes in the courtyard, just biting off more than they can chew right now. 11 deaths on the board versus Team D's 1, which of course they had Ab die to spike damage from Jagged Tettles in the beginning of the dungeon, of course, at the first phase of Sister Briar earlier. So they've managed to stabilize from that as they're spreading out for the Quaking in the courtyard. They've already dealt with a bunch of the trash in there as they chisel and work their way towards the Soulbound Goliath. Now, we've seen rather aggressive pulls come out of teams on top of the Soulbound Goliath usually here, but they're trying to get rid of that Emissary of the Tide so they can pull the 2 Thorn Shapers, which of course cannot be interrupted or crime controlled if that Emissary of the Tides was present, which it's not. But now it is. And has joined the rest of the group there. They just didn't have enough CC time on it, so they're not going to be able to interrupt the Thorn Shapers, which do have that very dangerous Soul Fetish cast.
Please, Cloak. Moon, you have Cloak. Oh, okay, so he actually survived, but he did have 2 debuffs. He had 2 diseases on him from the Thorn Shapers, and they just saw his HP drop and drop and drop, and he did have Cloak available and just did not use it. Now, again, Raging is just an affix that makes this dungeon so much more difficult because Waycrest has a bunch of random debuffs that get applied to your group, and if if the mobs are raging and they only do tank damage, then it's not going to be such a big deal because the tank can just start kiting and you can just avoid all damage done, or damage taken rather. But if you have random debuffs on the whole group, like the spit debuff from the maggots that we're going to see later on, and just disease here from the thorn shapers, then once all of those mobs go into raging at the very same time, the damage you take is just going to be increased in the whole group, which makes it much more difficult to deal with. And of course, it can be dispelled by the rest of the group with Sooth, but it does have a 10-second cooldown, so you can only dispel that many.
Yeah, you can only really rely on the rest of Druid or whatever Druid's group present in the group at the time to really just dispel major mobs like Matron Brindle or Matron Alma further downstairs in the hallway, which most teams don't really pull these days. Actually, never really pulled. We've seen a couple of strats veer off that course and do it, but Wong here tanking Soulbound Goliath, who's now at 77% versus Team D, who's at 40% trash. Have just now pulled Soulbound Goliath and have combined more trash on top of the Soulbound Goliath. So certainly sitting pretty here, Team D.
Yeah, Team D definitely, even with a little bit of a struggle that they had earlier, Black Mamba, with these 2 team webs coming in, just having 11 deaths, causing so much trouble. Like, Team D only has 1 death, but it was a pretty huge death, as it was on the boss for App. So they did have to reset the whole boss, they lost their Bloodlust. So even though they did have such a huge setback on their side, Black Mamba just having those 2 major wipes, full team wipes on the trash to set them back even further than that. Now, Soulbound Goliath should not be a super dangerous boss, especially with no affixes really affecting it outside of the quaking, but you can definitely have some trouble with it if you tank the boss too long and let the stack on the boss go up way too high before you drag the boss into the fire, because the damage buff on Goliath actually increases all his damage done. So once you drag him into the fire, if you have been not dragging him in for a long time, then the AoE that you can see right now will be increased as well. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't tank it too long, even though Prot Warriors are able to do so if they wanted to.
Yeah, if they wanted to. I mean, it's just a trade-off. How long can you take the tank damage for in order to make your life easier on the healer, but not, nuke the group and wipe it up? So they're having a good ebb and flow, nice balance here for Black Mamba as they hit about to hit 20% on Soulbound Goliath versus the 40% on Team D. So they're maintaining about that 19-20% gap between the 2 teams, which is what they started the boss at, showing that they have roughly equivalent single target damage coming in on this boss. Now the efficiency, of course, in the ballpark rather, for Soulbound Goliath, as they did manage to combine it with some extra trash from the side. So the 37-38% trash that they started the boss with has now gone up to 44% in favor of Team D, who was able to do so with the affixes present to them. A lot of damage coming in here for Black Mamba as they do 1 final reset on Soulbound Goliath, but Envy's having a lot of trouble healing this up as finally they managed to stabilize it. Soulbound Goliath should be falling here in just a moment as long as Wong does not fall first.
Yeah, there was a very unfortunate quaking coming through there as the boss was getting dragged into the fire, and on top of that a Thorns cast was coming out as well, and the healer can be targeted by the Thorns. So but if you shapeshift as a druid into cat or bear form or whichever form, then you're actually immune to the Thorns. So you want to be shapeshifting, but of course in a shapeshift form not only is it a global, but you also can't heal in another form. So if it overlaps with a fire, it's very, very unlucky. That's why you usually want to drag the boss into a fire right after a Thorns cast, so you don't get the Thorns overlapping with the AoE. As Black Mamba, actually their healer going down as he had so many spit debuffs from the maggots on him.
Yeah, just a bit of a mispull there. Not only that, but he got an Infest cast off. They pulled the entire hallway here. Fortunately, they do have the Unholy DK presence. He was able to get the battle res off on Envy's, who has now rezzed up, but Tree of Life got interrupted halfway through and managed to just, trying to save himself. Of staff procced again, but doesn't matter. It doesn't have any charges. Goes down. Light goes down accordingly. Wong doing what he can to stay alive, but these mobs, some of them are raging, some of them are 50-60% HP. There is no way he's going to stay alive long enough. He should be falling, as will the Unholy DK, and Moon will follow suit in just a moment, and that is another full team wipe. Disaster here for Team D as well, as UClap goes down, Battle Res comes up. They look to finish off the rest of these maggots, but the pull size here for Team D is not nearly as dangerous and bad as it was for Black Mamba. Nagur, they tried to do the entire hallway. They tried to do the snap on top of the desk that we saw in the west earlier. Some of the mobs were not aggroed on Wong, so he wasn't snap. You can't snap mobs that aren't aggroed on top of you. They were actually, in fact, aggroed on the healer, and they finished him off, and everything just unraveled from there.
Yeah, they have the DK, right? So they have to do those kind of pulls. They have to play around the DK. They have to make this work. But this is so dangerous. I've been talking about this raging, right? Having these random spit debuffs on everybody, the Gorger bleed, that if he jumps and he leaves a bleed behind. If all of them go into raging at the very same time, your team is just going to fall apart. Everyone's just going to die. So what we've seen in the spring season actually is that the DKs would hold their damage for a little bit if there was a raging affix to make sure that they're bursting everything down once they're raging and not early, because if you burst all your damage at 100% HP and then the damage stops once they're in the raging range, then your whole team is just going to fall apart. So therefore you should save your damage a little bit and then burst later on to make sure that you're bursting through the raging.
Through the ranging, indeed. Team D here has now moved into the lodge or living room area, if you will, of the Waycrest Manor, pulling up the survivalist and finishing off whatever they can here, making sure to avoid those explosive traps on the side. 43% trash on the board for Black Mamba as they just relentlessly didn't give up and did a pretty equally large pull as they did that wiped them earlier. Envy's doing what he can to keep the group, healthy through all the spit debuffs going up, but here's a Quaking that is likely to chunk them down pretty far. Envy's particularly low health, tries to heal himself up and managed to do so with, I believe, a crit regrowth there. That was a pretty substantial hit on him. 18 deaths on the board for them, though, as Team D has done an entire room pull, minus actually the pack in the corner. That pack makes me extremely nervous because I feel like he could get pulled at any second, and they'll have to be on the ball grabbing those emissaries. They probably will pull it at some point, but they want to do it on their terms to make sure that that enchanted emissary does not join the rest of the group in here.
Yeah, you can also see Ab struggling a little bit to keep everyone alive with those random debuffs on everyone. They still do have their Bloodlust ready, so I'm not sure what exactly they want to save it for. Maybe a substantial pull later on the next boss. We also see Black Mamba holding their Bloodlust as well, which is weird because they did this insane pull that you talked about earlier where they had the full team wipe and they just didn't use it. Maybe they should have used it there as their DK is going down again. You can see the DK just playing such an important role in their strategy, in their pulling strategy, but it's just not working out as the DK just goes down again on one more of those pulls. They can finish off the pull, but it's just gonna cost them so much travel and so much time lost again.
Yeah, I mean, the only role he's playing right now is eating dirt on the ground as they get ready to res him. 19 deaths on the board here for Black Mamba right now. Team D only 2 deaths, looking much, much cleaner in their run. Rahl here at 44% for the team. They saw that pack in the corner. I don't know, it's just making me so nervous. I feel like somebody's just gonna back up accidentally. Finally we see the weapon throw go in on their terms as the revelers, the 3 revelers, get pulled in on top of Rahl, and we do have some proper crowd control / damage going in on that enchanted emissary. 20 seconds if it is needed in order for it to start teleporting out of the dungeon to give you your %, and Rahl is now at 23. I'm wondering if they're going to pull the kitchen on top of it, but I don't think they will because there is a void emissary in there, if I'm not mistaken, and the last thing you want is a void emissary pulsing from the kitchen into this room. Actually, I've done that on live. There is a point where you can line of sight it, but it is a nightmare to deal with. So that's likely why you will not see teams dragging the trash from the kitchen and on top of the boss during a void heavy week.
So Black Mamba finally using their Bloodlust as they engage Rahl and engage the whole room as well, the whole room of trash on top of Rahl. They also pulled the emissaries at the same time, and the rest of it was just dealing with it, making sure it stays away with that vortex and the typhoon. As Team D is already done with Rahl, making their way down the basement. Now they need 13% of trash at this point, and the 2 bosses that are left, of course, and they also have their Bloodlust available. So not many pulls left for Team D to do, as Black Mamba seemed like they were doing bigger trash pulls, but they're behind in trash, so they were actually much less efficient compared to Team D. Team D just pulling out of trash, maybe slower, but they were still pulling it on top of bosses. You don't have to pull everything at once. As long as you kill everything at the end of the boss, it's going to be just as efficient.
So Team D opting to actually backtrack technically a bit to the other entrance of the basement, which is in the Triad wing. By doing so, they avoided 2 void emissaries along the way, one of course in the kitchen and one just below the kitchen, and therefore just had an easier time doing the skip, something that we saw almost go disastrous in the previous Waycrest Manor that we saw earlier today. So a bit of backtracking at the benefit of mass safety in the skip that they're doing as they aggressively pull Lord and Lady Waycrest on top of all the trash on the bottom, except for, once again, there is that void emissary hiding in the corner of the room near one of the diviners as well, one of the soul charmers. So they want to make sure not to pull that on top of the boss, and if they do, they'll have to play line of sight for the remainder of this encounter. Lord Waycrest now on his 2nd round of 100% health. We do know you have to do that 3 times over. As always, before Lady Waycrest will join him on the fight. Rahl here for Black Mamba, who is at 74% trash, about to fall as well.
Yeah, so one thing to note is that they still did not use their Bloodlust here on Team D side. That means they probably want to pull some of those crawlers that we're going to see right after this boss on top of the last boss, I assume, and save their Bloodlust all the way up until that point. Now, this boss, Lord Waycrest and Lady Waycrest, usually not too dangerous outside of tank damage in the second phase, but in the first phase, Lady Waycrest actually shoots those missiles that you can see on random team members, and if it overlaps with one of those disease debuffs as you've seen just on the Windwalker, then it can actually be dangerous because it's a little bit RNG on who gets hit by it, and if you get hit multiple times in a row, then you can drop very low.
Yeah, certainly last thing you want is a death here at the end. They do have a battle res available to them if they need, but they're also just so far ahead.
Yeah.
Not even in raw progression through the dungeon, but also 17 death difference, 85 seconds between the two teams right now. I mean, there's no... Oh, yeah, we got to stop saying there's no way they're going to lose this because we've seen throws happen at the end of dungeons. I remember a couple in the West Cup too, but it would take an absolute miracle for them to forfeit the rest of this dungeon, or to fail the rest of this dungeon, excuse me. So Team D here, 93%, about to finish off. They're doing a nice cleave strategy, always more DPS efficient, but more dangerous as a result of a higher double mechanic uptime on the team. But no problem for this well-trained Team D right now. That is, I mean, you're absolutely right, Igor. They're probably just going to pull the remaining 7 Gloom Horrors on top of Gorak Tul at the end and just bloodlust that and try to cleave them down as quick as possible before the danger gets out of hand for the tank.
Yeah, Black Mamba just still not being able to shake off those nerfs as we've seen, like almost all of the dungeons they've played so far. They just had those big mistakes. I don't think it was even their strategies that was the problem. It was mostly the execution, right? They had those good strategies, they had those huge pulls that they were doing, and they just failed to execute it properly, which I can just see the DK doing a lot of damage here in this pull as well. And we see the Tree of Life being propped by the Residue on Black Mamba's side. They do not have a Bloodlust and they do not have a Battle Rest ready, so they want to make sure they execute this pull properly. But again, Team D on the other side, they're already in the last boss. They pulled those Gloom Horrors, as you mentioned, on top of this boss, while also using that Bloodlust that they've saved up until this point. And we can see App is standing on his ledge in the corner to make sure that Horrors are not actually jumping and just continue to hit the tank.
App, of course, having proactive staff just a bit earlier, just making sure everyone's nice and safe. Here comes the Raging, though, on top of Team D. This is where a lot of the danger comes in, which is why you see the support from that Ring of Peace from Long go down on top of a U-Clap. Huge amounts of damage that would come on top of the tank, but is no problem as they finish off the remainder of those Gloom Horrors, hit 100% on the trash, and now the only thing that stands between them and securing a 2-0 in the series is 60% remaining on Gorak Tul. There's no way they're losing this one.
You said it again. What if they
No. There is literally absolutely no way they're losing this dungeon.
So we've seen some strategy changes when it comes to the spring season. We actually seen some teams in the past backtrack after this boss, talk to the NPC, get teleported to the entrance, and clear some more trash, which most teams have stopped doing because that always seemed like a very questionable strategy that the teams pulled off. But Team D, of course, being the inventors of this DK strategy, basically in this Waycrest where we've seen the 1 million DPS, interesting to see that they just don't want to pull off this DK anymore and just did more of a conventional strategy here, and it's still paying off for them. Very clean run. They did have 2 deaths, which again cost them quite a bit of time even on the first Triad boss, but outside of that they have a very good recovery and just way ahead to Black Mamba.
Way ahead indeed. Gorak Tul about to fall here as he hits 5% for Team D, and we weren't able to see them at the beginning of the day just because of the forfeit that had come in from Team 430, but that doesn't matter. They've shown that they're one of the best teams and
I think something interesting about these teams, like when you look at these lower ranked teams, you tend to not know much about them. I remember in our guild chat, in our guild Discord, Supreme was talking about them because Buff Warnerford played one last chance earlier on. Apparently, Rhinon is like a 3.7k Raider IO healer in Season 2, which is pretty impressive. That's pretty high up there, honestly. So it's not like these teams aren't skilled. They just probably don't have the practice of doing these speedruns versus doing the high keys on live that they're not used to doing.
Very unfortunate, the DK actually going down for Hypers, and the DK is the most important part of their whole comp when they do these huge pulls, as they also pop their Bloodlust to do this, to make this happen. And the DK died before he managed to ramp up all his damage. He died with only like 300 or 400k DPS, which is a lot, but they can do a lot more if they want to. So I hope they can finish off this pull, as they also run a Brewmaster, by the way, which is very interesting. As he goes down, unfortunately, jinxed it.
Yeah, you should have waited that till after the poll to talk about the Brewmaster. But once again, Caster Curse, it's been happening all day today, and even in the last cup. We need to stop. Let's just stop talking about the teams at all and just talk about the dungeon.
So how's the weather today?
Yeah, I don't know. It's dark outside. I can't see what it's like. They actually... Are they going to ever dispel this Blood Matron? It's not dead yet. They got to dispel that, okay, the Gift of Gahoon that was still on it, because it'll stay at 1 HP until, Spider went down as well. I think he was tanking the Blood Matron back there. They still, I'm pretty sure they still haven't, maybe it finally went down. Maybe the debuff ran out. But that was an interesting way to get an extra death, and one last chance. They're already on the boss. They popped their Bloodlust. They're getting Elderly Exodon down very quickly for this tyrannical setting.
Yeah, so this whole pull that they wanted to do at the very start with their DK bursting everything in is completely falling apart with their DK going down. One last chance, choosing to do some different pulls compared to Hypers. They do have the 17% trash on one last chance, but Hypers, once they finish off this trash group that they're fighting on right now, they're going to be ahead in trash percentage, but not that much if you look at it. So one last chance definitely in the driver's seat at this point. And as you mentioned, they're dealing with this boss really quickly. And one thing to note, about the Prod Warrior, well, Prod Warrior does not actually provide that much utility if you compare it to other tanks, but they do have the Spell Reflect, which is very important for this boss, just because it makes you kill the boss so much faster. Either you can one-shot the mirror images with the Spell Reflect, or you can do a substantial amount of damage to the boss, especially on this tyrannical setting. So having the Spell Reflect definitely makes this boss die a lot faster compared to Hypers, where they do have the Brewmasters there. Of course, they don't have the Spell Reflect available to them.
Yeah, Brewmaster is definitely an interesting choice in this dungeon. Even Trell, who mains a Brewmaster on live and will pretty much find any excuse to play it at all. I mean, he talked about it in that Raider.io article that came out today about their team. He will always start playing Brewmaster in a dungeon, and if they have to play Prot Warrior for some reason, he'll swap to it. Even he played Prot Warrior in this dungeon. He wasn't comfortable playing the Brewmaster at all. But it's an interesting choice because Brewmaster does provide more of a damage increase than the Prot Warrior, because you do have access to those Battle Shout scrolls as well. So the 5% physical damage increase that the Brewmaster brings is a little bit better than the extra 3% AP that you'd get from having the actual buff over the scroll. So it is a little bit of a damage increase, but having those 4 early deaths is going to be way more than just that 3% damage increase.
Yeah, and one more thing I want to note here is that both of these druids are running Tree of Life again. Now, Tree of Life is something we haven't really seen a lot at all from the Western region last weekend, but we definitely have seen a lot in the spring season from the Eastern region. The Eastern region seems to be lacking this Tree of Life a lot. One more thing to note about Tree of Life is actually that not only is your regrowth instant, but your Entangling Roots is also an instant cast. So in case there's some sort of emissary that you need to be seeing to get it away from your group, you do have an advantage in this Tree of Life one, because you can just spam that roots without having to spend the cast time on it. So you can completely focus on healing while not having to spend too much time seeing the emissaries.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if there's some sort of emissary, maybe of the tides that you'd want to root every now and then. I mean, this does happen to be a tides-heavy instance, so maybe that's another reason for running the Tree of Life as well. But I mean, they're doing actually a very large pull. They've done 2 very large pulls inside of one last chance. We've seen a lot of these Eastern teams. I believe we were watching on Supreme Stream where they were kind of attempting to pull the entire room with the boss. They can never pull it off cleanly, but they have, most of the teams have settled for pulling just 2 of the packs. You gotta keep an eye on that on Holy DK. He has both of the fixates from those Feral Bloodswarmers. They actually managed to fear them away with the Warrior Fear. So very good heads up. He still has both of the fixates, though. He's gonna get absolutely chunked by both of those.
He's being so unlucky. He just keeps getting every single fixate. Now finally one of the fixates actually going on the Rogue. Now because of the fixates just being on the DK, one of the stuns went off from the Lashers, and they went on Tayua on the Rogue, and they don't have any disease dispel on their team. They don't have a monk or any other class who can dispel the disease, so the healer had to not only heal the DK who was dying to the fixates, but he also had to heal the debuff away, which does apply an absorb effect. So it can be dispelled, or the absorb can be healed away, and then the stun will get removed. So definitely some trouble there in one last chance, but they did recover. While Hypers did have a death coming again. They're out of battle rests now, so if anything goes wrong from this on out, they're not going to be able to get them back up.
Yeah, really unfortunate for them. They had to commit their battle res at the start of that AoE pull. They could have chosen to not commit it. He could have run back, but not having a rogue for interrupts and CC on this pack would have been very dangerous for them. So committing the battle res right there. Hopefully they don't have any problems on any of the bosses afterwards, especially on Kragmaw. It could be a very difficult encounter with one less DPS or even no healer. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. One last chance. They've already cleared the room and they're already on the boss. They're absolutely shredding this dungeon right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, Hyper is not doing so well, in opposite of what Twitch chat was voting for. So Twitch chat, you're wrong. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. One last chance is beating Hypers by quite a bit at this point. As they're fighting Kragmaw, they also pulled the skeleton pack on top of Kragmaw. So they're doing some very huge pulls and having a very clean run. I mean, there was some trouble before with the double fixed on a DK, but they managed to pull it off without anyone dying. They still have their battle rest available. So even if something goes wrong, they can recover still. As they're dealing with Kragmaw. Now, Kragmaw on Tyrannical can cause some issues. Fortunately, there's no other affix that affects this boss. There's nothing like Grievous or Quaking, which makes this boss, especially the Tantrum, way more difficult. So only the Tantrum to heal away, and of course the indigestion that the tank needs to dodge. But usually not a big deal at all as a warrior, as you can just leap away or run away and just charge back in. So you should not be getting hit by that indigestion, by that frontal cast.
Yeah, seeing the same pull from Hypers where they're pulling the Fallen Death Speaker plus 3 of the Guardians around the corner and cleaving them down with the boss, providing a single target damage increase for both the Unholy DK and both of the Outlaw Rogues as well. So interesting strategy from them. We saw the same thing come out from One Last Chance. Something I want to touch on that we haven't really touched on for any of the DKs at all. After this last round of buffs, Unholy doesn't seem to really have the problem that it used to have. Like, it used to be a trade-off, right? Unholy DK would do this massive exponentially increasing AoE damage, but when it got to a single target encounter, it would just lag a little bit behind Windwalker and Outlaw Rogue. It doesn't look like it has that problem anymore. Its single target damage is it's very good now.
Yeah, especially if you do have the huge cooldowns available to them, like the army, for example, and the Bloodlust, which is just boosting the damage by so much. So DK definitely seems like a very good choice. Interesting to see if we're going to see a lot more DK now in the Western region as well next weekend, because, of course, the last weekend we did have the Rogue nerfs not in yet, not live yet. So most of the Western teams were just running this triple Rogue OP setup. But now with the Rogues being nerfed slightly, they're probably going to run some DKs as well, especially in dungeons like Underrot that we can see right now in the Eastern region. Now, Hypers, they are on the boss now as well. We can see a lot of damage on the group going out here, but they should be able to catch up a little bit. Now, they have to be careful because, again, they're out of battle rests, and we also see the Brewmaster drop very low from tanking this boss.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a very damaging encounter, especially those tantrums. See how low they're dropping with the tantrum ticks here. One last chance. They've already dealt with the boss. They're an entire half boss ahead of Hypers. Now, Hypers does have that 6% trash advantage, but we both know that the trash that you pull for the rest of the dungeon is pretty well thought out. I mean, there's not a whole lot of differences in trash you can pull. They're doing a pretty large pull right here, but nothing too out of the ordinary. There's only 4 targets that they need to kick, and the Defiler, the Death Speaker, and they're not pulling on top of the Worm, which is what we normally see, but this is definitely just a super manageable pull. It's nothing huge, and you see how much the Unholy DK can do even on 7 or 8 targets.
Yeah, they actually had a Guardian spawn here. I assume it was because of the Tides Emissary not being able to interrupt the Death Speaker at all. So the Death Speaker does have those 2 crucial casts as you've been talking about. One is this Race Death that needs to be interrupted to not have a Guardian spawn, which, again, it's not such a huge deal if you're AoEing anyway, right? If you have those Guardians anyway that you need to kill, then if you have 1 extra Guardian, it's not actually going to be a huge deal. Now, the other thing is the Wicked Frenzy that cast that goes through, which does just randomly buff or enrage, rather, one of the Guardians around. So once you get the cast through, you can soothe it off from the rest to it, and then you can dispel the debuff that it applies to the tank as well. So not a huge deal at all. As we can see, One Last Chance just pulling it off perfectly. And now they're fighting these Defilers while seeing the Emissary in the back. You've seen the Entangling Roots by the rest of it being cast on the Emissary here, and now they're probably going to pull it on top of the boss because this boss can't be CC'd anyway. So just dealing with the Emissary on top of the boss, very efficient.
Yeah, and of course it's also just extra Blade Flurry stacks for the Rogues so they can get more of those double Sinister Strike procs as well. I just saw something very interesting before that poll. We had a nice little POV of Rhinon casting Latent Arcana, which is the font of Ashara, the trinket. I don't think we've seen that many healers running that trinket. Usually they're running the Aquapotent Tides from Lady Ashbane along with the Leviathan's Lure from Blackwater Behemoth, which are just both damage proc trinkets. Interesting to see that stat on use trinket from a healer. It's 30 seconds of a lot of main stat. I think it's about 3,000 int for 30 seconds, so that's just definitely an interesting choice to come out for the healer here.
Yeah, definitely, especially because I guess it always depends on what you're going to do, because the stat trinket can definitely just go into damage as well. It doesn't have to be it's a very versatile trinket, because you can use the intellect for healing, and you can also use it for damage, because your intellect does get reverted into damage in cat form, into agility basically. So the intellect can be used in cat form as well, and we can see him doing decent damage, not too overwhelming though. We've seen lots of druids that do a lot more damage in the past, but maybe that's also because some of his team is getting hit by those mushroom debuffs, himself included. As you can see him actually having to soak some of those up. They do not have a disease dispel, and of course if you have to soak them up and heal yourself, then you can do less damage, as we can see in the damage meter. Well, if you look at Hypers, their Resto Druid is doing quite a bit more damage.
Yeah, almost all of these healers are also running undulating tides traits, which are traits from the raid, which make every single trait is about 2k single target damage. So if you stack 3 of those, you're doing a lot of extra damage just for staying above half HP. Of course, when you drop below half HP, that undulating tides trait procs a shield, and you no longer get any of those damage procs for another 45 seconds. So it's a big trade-off. You can do a lot of damage as long as you don't fall below 50% HP, but if you do, it'll also kind of save your life, but you won't be doing any of that extra damage.
Yeah, one more thing to note is I was slightly confused when I looked at Hyper's setup, because the healer is called Moon, and for some reason I was like, wait, wasn't that damage dealer called Moon before? Did the damage dealer switch to healer now? But no, it was actually from a different team, so interesting to see that they both have the exact same name. One of the rogues from like Mamba is called Moon, well, the healer of Hyper is called Moon as well. Now Hyper's using their Bloodlust here as they pull the Defilers on top of Sancha here. We see the totems go off. The totems, once they go off, they just do a huge AoE around them, but it's outrangeable, so all you have to do is go away, which both of those teams are very capable of. But interesting to see that they choose to use their Bloodlust on this boss. Most of the teams have been saving their Bloodlust for the last boss because it is tyrannical, so last boss is quite a bit difficult.
Yeah, Unbound Abomination is definitely probably. It's I would say it's definitely the most dangerous boss in the instance. There's so much damage going out almost all the time. There's just ticking dot damage on the group. That being said, the affixes don't really lend itself to make that boss any more difficult than it already is. So maybe it kind of makes sense that they're using their Bloodlust for cleave, but that being said, they're already so far behind in the dungeon, they kind of had to go for that Hail Mary type play where they're cleaving stuff on top of the boss. And on top of that, they kind of have to hope that one last chance kind of makes some mistakes here too. But they're getting down this AoE pack very clean. They've even pulled it with one of the worms as well. There's not that many interrupts that have to go off here, of course. They just have to make sure they're focusing the worm down and making sure that the Guardian doesn't get any extra skeletons out as well.
Yeah, this is a dangerous pull, as the Death Speaker just got a Wicked Frenzy off. They had the debuff on Sharas that didn't get dispelled immediately, and then of course the tentacle is not movable, which means that the tank constantly needs to stand there if you want to get an interrupt off. And one of the casts from the Defilers going off here too, which you see the curse on the whole group, just decreasing damage done on the whole group and increasing damage taken as far as I'm aware. So definitely not something you want on your group. You see Ryan only being able to dispel one of the rogues, of course, so the rest of them has to live with the debuff on them. And Hyper is still working on Sancha. I mean, they had the Bloodlust that they used for it, but because they were constantly pulling trash on top of the boss, it just slowed them down so much on boss DPS.
It's important to note now, if either of those rogues is watching this VOD, they'll know which rogue that the healer likes more. He dispelled Kim and not Teua, so interesting there, like a parent with the children. Everyone has a favorite, I suppose, and Ken, you're Rhino's favorite, I guess. But once again, this is kind of a typical pull. They need 5% more trash out. Well, sorry, 7% more trash, so they pulled both of the Corruptors on top of the Worm, and the Emissary of the Tide plus the 2 Corruptors should be the rest of the trash that they need to finish off the instance. And they have their Bloodlust available for the last boss, so unless something catastrophic happens with one of those spores, they should be totally fine.
Yeah, I wonder if one of them adjusted their strategy. I wonder if one last chance somehow bettered their strategy from the time trials to the cup play, because in the time trials they were only 30 seconds apart, these two teams. And when I look at their strategies right now, it seems like One Last Chance definitely has a much faster and more efficient strategy. So either they were messing up all 5 of their attempts in the time trials, because how the time trials works, in case you guys don't know, is that you have to do 3 dungeons, the keys are being provided by Blizzard, and then you can practice the keys, but then you only have 5 shots on having those official runs to get your time in, and then the fastest time of those 5 attempts are going to be counted. Now, if for whatever reason all those 5 attempts you have some huge mistakes in your group, which can happen, then it's going to affect your time by a lot. So the time trial time always has to be taken with a grain of salt, because if something went wrong and they didn't actually play all the way up to their strategy, they can definitely increase their time, or decrease their time, sorry, in cup play.
And I love seeing the energy bars on this fight. The whole reason for the energy bars, in my opinion, was to make sure people understood how this boss works. Because you don't actually do damage to the boss's HP. You do damage to his energy bar. You can see that red bar filling up below the boss's HP. Every time you fill up that red bar, he spawns 2 of these blood visages, and when you kill the blood visage, they do about 1/6 of his health and damage. So that's why the boss's HP isn't moving until they finish off one of those blood visages. This looks, I mean, that looks great that you can see this on stream now. Very clean. But yeah, with the Bloodlust, they're already more than halfway through the boss, and even though they are dropping pretty low, they're about to have all their debuffs cleansed by the construct here helping you out. And I mean, they should be totally fine. I don't want to caster curse them, but they should be totally fine getting through the rest of this boss.
Yeah, so this boss does do quite a bit of AoE, actually, AoE damage to the whole group because of this debuff. As you can see, this magic debuff that is stacking up in the whole group. And as you mentioned, the Titan helping you out with this light circle that cleanses all those debuffs off of you. So you definitely want to make sure that you stack up, and once the light circle gets applied on one of the players, you want to make sure you cleanse everyone's debuff, because if it just constantly stacks up, you have a lot of trouble. You're in a lot of trouble, and it's going to do a lot of damage to you. And in case you miss one of the circles, it's still a dispellable debuff. It is magic. So in case one of them does not manage to go into the circle because of whatever reason, you can still just dispel it off. Now, one more thing to note about the affixes here is that you can see a lot of volcanic spawn, and that's because of all of those spores that are constantly there. But the spores not dangerous at all, because all you have to do is run away of them. But because there's so many spores, they spawn all of this volcanic, which can cause some issues, just because you need to stack up on this boss, and you need to go into the circle to cleanse your debuffs. And if you have a million volcanics spawn in this circle, then you might have some trouble dodging them, but it really shouldn't be an issue for those MDI teams here.
Final Blood Visage going down for One Last Chance, and they're making a good use of their One Last Chance in this tournament, going up 1-0 in the series. AoE pulls, especially the blobs in the second boss room, pretty nice, pretty easy.
We'll have to see. And there is no intro, because we saw plenty of intro. Now it's time for action as we're diving into King's Rest, where One Last Chance has this chance and maybe another chance to knock out Hypers and send him out of this tournament.
So I'm actually standing up for the 3rd time now, and this time we actually gonna have the match start, so I can cast this. As we see One Last Chance do this a very similar pull than what we have seen by Black Mamba before, and by some of the Western teams as well. But instead of pulling 4 of the constructs, 4 of the Guardians here, sorry, they only pulled 2 of them. So definitely a little bit of an easier way to deal with these Guardians and also deal with the emissary at the same time. And I don't actually dislike this pull, because the other 2 Guardians you can just pull on top of the boss or pull on top of the gauntlet later. So doing only 2 Guardians instead of 4 does not actually, it's not inefficient, just because you're going to deal with the other ones on top of something else at the same time.
Yeah, when we were looking at that route earlier, it also mentioned that in the route you had to also take care of that Void Touched Emissary as well in order to get to your 100% trash percentage, or you couldn't really skip the Hulk very effectively. So I like that they did that. They're, like you mentioned, they're probably planning on dealing with those other 2 Guardians later on, either with the boss or with the Gauntlet later on. We saw a much better success percentage with the Gauntlet, so I'm hoping they're going to do that, or maybe they know something we don't know for pulling it with the boss. Hypers, on the other hand, has opted to go for the more natural route that we've seen from most Western teams, where they pop Bloodlust for the first 2 trash pulls. No major issues on their side just yet. Looks like it's pretty clean so far. They've dealt with the Witch Doctor, which is the most important mob to deal with early on. And after that, they'll just go on to the other side of the room, probably chain pull the 2 packs. We do have a death on the side of One Last Chance. Taydwarf has gone down. They haven't put a res out for him just yet. Looks like they're doing it right now, so a little bit of an unfortunate occurrence from them. Maybe he was dealing with the minions of Zool that spawn in the middle there. Actually, that looks like it was exactly what happened to him. But once again, One Last Chance, popping their Bloodlust, doing a similar pull to what Hypers did. I believe they're on the other half of the room.
So it looks like Hypers was actually doing a pretty significant pull here at the very start, where they committed their Bloodlust to. Now, One Last Chance now also using their Bloodlust for one of these trash pulls, which is something I really like, that they actually commit their Bloodlust to the trash here. Because the previous match we've seen, Black Mamba was saving the Bloodlust for the boss, even though they wiped to the trash earlier. If they would have just committed their Bloodlust to the trash, maybe the wipe wouldn't have happened. Things to consider, just because this boss was very difficult in the spring season before the boss nerf came in, and it was also tyrannical, while now we have fortified. So with the debuff, the spit gold being nerfed, and it also being a fortified setting, the boss is really not so difficult anymore. Like, it's gonna be fairly easy for the residues to heal away the debuff. So just saving the Bloodlust and committing it to the boss only seems like a waste, when it can use the Bloodlust for those more efficient trash pulls, especially if it's fortified and so difficult as well because of the emissaries, making it so hard to interrupt all of those witch doctors.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see what... I'm going to take a look at the second on the app that we have at the desk here. I'm interested to see what traits this Assassination Rogue is going, because he's actually doing quite a bit of damage on these AoE packs. Must be running some combination of Echoing Blades plus Shrouded Suffocation, because he's doing a lot of early on damage. So it's impressive to see that Assassination is keeping up with or even outperforming Outlaw. That being said, Outlaw did get nerfed, so it's not too surprising to see, but he's doing a pretty significant amount more damage if you look at those damage meters right now.
Yeah, so interesting to see that now that Outlaw is nerfed, we're just gonna have 3 Assassination Rogues in the MDI here, so perfect. There we go, Hypers actually already fighting the Golden Serpent, as they also had a death earlier, by the way, when they were committing their Bloodlust to the trash pool. They did have someone go down. They committed their battle rest to get them back up. So now they're out of battle rests for Hypers. One Last Chance still has their battle rest, because they just had a mass rest, out of combat rest, come up for their rogue that died in the skip. So if anything goes wrong for Hypers, they're not going to be able to get them back up. Even though they do have a DK, so they have 2 battle rests in their group, meaning even if the Resto Druid goes down, the DK would be able to battle rest them if they have a battle rest available to them, which of course they don't have right now. Now, One Last Chance actually pulling those Guardians on top of the Serpent, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and this is kind of what I didn't want to see. We talked about this a little bit earlier. These animated Guardians, every time we've seen a team pull both of the Guardians on top of the boss, we've had a tank death without fail every single time. Now, it's only been twice, but it's a 0% success rate. Every single time we've seen it happen in the Gauntlet room, there's been no tank deaths or no any deaths. So, it's a small sample size, but early on, with not that much of a sample size, seeing deaths always happen in the boss and never happen in the Gauntlet, I'd love to see them, show us that we're wrong, but this is always dangerous. The tank's already taking a lot of damage on this boss, and throwing extra damage in doesn't help.
Yeah, I wish the teams would just listen to us for one time. Boss Guardians bad, Gauntlet Guardians good. See, the map checks out, Saronic approves, so definitely want to change that strategy up for next time around, so we don't have those tank deaths happening anymore, as Hypers is finishing off the Golden Serpent here, and not having any sort of problems. Of course, Hypers didn't pull any Guardians on top of the boss, so they definitely shouldn't be having any sort of troubles at all. I assume Hypers is going to be pulling the Guardians on top of this Gauntlet now, which we've seen multiple times working out, so they were actually listening to us, so they're pulling it the correct way, while One Last Chance is doing it the wrong way. But it actually seems like they're pulling it off without the tank dying. We anti-jinxed them.
We did it.
Yeah.
We did it right this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever the caster curse happens, it's always the opposite of what we say, right? So we kind of anti-curse them. One Last Chance is not going to wipe to the boss, I believe, as they move on forward. I took a look at the rogues, the Assassination Rogues trait, like Jack mentioned. You guys can do at home by clicking on that WoW head extension in the top left of your screen. It's a little arrow you click. He's running a pretty interesting setup. He's running triple Shrouded, 1 Twist the Knife, 1 Nothing Personal, and 1 Echoing Blades. So the Shrouded plus Echoing Blades definitely gives him a lot more AoE damage, but running the Twist plus the Nothing Personal helps him out on single target damage as well. That being said, because he's not fully spec'd into single target, he's probably going to do less than the Outlaw Rogues. But as long as they're only pulling 3 or 4 targets, he should definitely do a lot more overall damage than the Outlaws.
So I wonder if we anti-jinx them, does that mean that Hyper is going to die to these Guardians here?
Yes.
Especially, I mean, it doesn't help that he's
Yes.
drunk as well. So we'll see how that goes as they're engaging the second pack here. Now, of course, this Gauntlet it does have a set rotation on the tournament realm, so it's not RNG as it is on live servers. It will always start with the top left one, and then it will go anti-clockwise. So they have to deal with the Guardians on top of having those 2 named mobs that are in this pack. Arguably, the most difficult pack that they're dealing with right now. You can see just how much damage Hyper is taking. And there's lots of abilities that need to be interrupted as well, like this Lightning that you've seen that just came out, Lightning AoE. That needs to be interrupted by a knockback, so you have to use that Typhoon from Moon as we just seen it come out. And on top of that, you also have this X Barrage. You can see the debuff on the whole group right now. It is buffed by 45, of course, so it does do a huge amount of AoE damage to the whole group. But Moon not having a problem at all to keep the group alive. Sorry.
Like you mentioned, anti-clockwise, that's counterclockwise in Freedom units. But they are dealing off with this second Guardian pack. Like you mentioned, they do have to knock back all of the casts, and looks like they're going to do it just fine. But one last chance, because they've already dealt with the Guardians, and they had dealt with the first 2 Guardians as well, they are ahead on trash percentage, even though they're just now getting onto the section of the Gauntlet. Hypers will get through the Gauntlet first, but because One Last Chance dealt with the extra Guardians earlier on, they're going to be ahead on trash percentage. And not to mention that, but like we mentioned earlier in that MDT clip from the earlier King's Rest we had, they won't have to deal with the Hulk at all should they choose not to.
Yeah, so the routing will be interesting for sure later on, especially because we've seen so many different things happen with the bridge area. Now, one thing that kind of that I think was interesting that both of the teams did that we've seen before in this King's Rest was that both of those teams just kind of skipped the bridge trash to go to the council boss and then kill the trash on the back track, which is I don't really understand why they were doing that or what the cause of it was, because their Bloodlust was getting ready, and then one team just kind of used their Bloodlust for the council boss, and then Black Mamba did save it for the mini boss because it's buffed by 45, of course. So Shadow of Soul just doing so much tank damage, and the one team that did not save the Bloodlust actually ended up having a tank death on Shadow of Soul. So definitely want to see what One Last Chance and Hypers are doing here if they want to save their Bloodlust for that as well. Now we see the cheat death proccing here. Actually, we actually see the tank getting mind control, just AoE fearing the whole group. So the whole group just gets AoE feared. We see one rogue that's going down, the other rogue proccing the cheat death just because they're unable to go out of the Blade Storm from the king as they're being feared.
How did the tank get MC'd?
Can it target the... I don't think...
Did the druid taunt? And I've never seen the tank get MC'd before.
Neither.
That's a very interesting... very interesting chain of events for One Last Chance there. Fortunately, didn't really hold them up too much. They're just right on to the next pack, and I feel like they've kind of been closing the gap on Hypers in this gauntlet so far. They've been, they were one full pack behind, and now, I mean, they're pretty much still one full pack behind. That being, but everything still stays true. They're still ahead on trash percentage. The only difference is Hypers is going to have to deal with one more extra trash pack when they're on that bridge gauntlet later on.
Yeah, so we see Hypers using the trap to go past this construct and the emissary on their bridge. We've seen this construct pulled one time last weekend, and it actually seemed very scary as this beam that the bridge construct does hit the whole group and almost wiped them. But none of the Eastern groups so far choosing to pull this bridge construct as they just deal with other trash later on. And we see a huge pull come out of Hypers here as they pull all of these fluids here on top of one of the constructs. It seems like they didn't pull the other one on the other side, but they might just combine the other construct with the boss later.
Yeah, and I think we've seen Coxie instantly going down there. That's not what you want to see. Hyper's health is kind of going up and down, but that's what you usually expect to see from a Brewmaster. Their health spikes up and down a lot just purely because of the way their damage mitigation works through stagger. But yeah, having to commit that early battle res there, I believe that was their second battle res, so they're not going to have one available for another 9 minutes, and that's going to be for the entire like super difficult part of the dungeon with the bridge gauntlet as well as the third council boss as well. Sean dropping also low on the side of One Last Chance, but we haven't seen too many wipes in this section of the dungeon from most teams. Not trying to curse them, that's just the truth. We've almost never seen any wipes in this room, so that was kind of weird to see a random death coming out from Coxie there.
I have to believe it was aggro, right? It is a skittish dungeon. Now, usually skittish is not a huge deal, but if you have a DK just bursting almost up to 1 million DPS, then skittish all of a sudden is going to become a deal again, right? So maybe also Brewmaster struggling a little bit more with aggro compared to Prod Warriors. I'm not completely sure how it goes. I mean, there's still 2 rogues that can tricks you, so in theory it should not be a big deal. Maybe Coxie just not waiting long enough before he started bursting the damage. We will see later on, but Hyper's now managing to clear off the pull, and they're on Machimba now, as they do have their Boralus available, but they might not be choosing to use it on this fight. They might choose to use it on the trash later on, or they might even save it for quite a long time to just have it to Shadow of Sul later.
Yeah, based off of what we've seen a lot of teams doing, they're more than likely planning on using that Bloodlust for the first trash pack on the Gauntlet, and then it might come back up for King Desarve later on in the dungeon for a 3 Bloodlust dungeon. It looks like One Last Chance is pretty much doing the exact same thing. But the thing with One Last Chance's mob count, they're a little bit lower than what the other team was earlier on. They have to deal with the 2 constructs, so I thought they were on the boss as well. They should get to 74% trash once they've dealt with both of these mobs. All 3 of these mobs. They've even pulled the Brish mob as well.
That's what killed them here.
Kin goes down too because of that. That's really interesting. This is even more innovation than what we saw earlier. They're going to be even higher on trash percentage, which means they can actually opt to not do the first pack at all and do something else instead. Maybe just the 2 Berserkers in front of the 3rd boss as well. So I'm interested to see what they're going to be pulling on the bridge because of this. It could be something completely different than what we saw earlier today.
Yeah, definitely. It also seems so dangerous. I talked about this bridge construct and no one really pulling it, but now we see One Last Chance doing so and having a death just because of it. Now, none of the rogues had their cloak available for this beam. As you can see, the purification beam coming out right now. Now, this beam is basically not outrangeable and not line of sightable at all. It just has a huge range and it goes through walls as well. So you definitely want to make sure to either dodge it or to have some sort of defensive ready if you get hit by it, because it just leaves a really nasty dot behind, damage over time effect that does do a lot of damage, and that's why they have been struggling here. And it also seems like it wasn't as efficient as it might be, just because they did pull all 3 constructs together, but this the bridge construct doesn't move very well because it constantly casts a beam and the frontal, so the other 2 constructs died way earlier compared to the bridge one, and then they ended up just having to single target it down, which again, single targeting something down that you don't have to pull just seems very inefficient. So we'll see how this turns out for them later on, as they're already in 78%, and there's someone going down. Okay, so 1 row going down, they do not have a rest available, so finishing off this whole boss with only 4 people is going to cost them a lot of time.
I did it again.
Yes,
we caster cursed them in this room. I don't know how it keeps happening. I was going to say, like, for those 3 Guardians, it seemed like in the space it took them to deal with those 3 Guardians, Hyper's got the entire second boss down in that time frame. And now also having a rogue go down here, it looks like he just stood in the fire, which is just lazy DPS brain. What can you do about that? Not having cheat death available. You have to know that that's difficult and going on. However, on the other side, Hypers has popped their Bloodlust on that first pull. You see the bleed dropping Hyper incredibly low, using his own Zen med to make sure he doesn't die, but he goes down anyways. They don't have a battle res for him, so they're going to have to kite this out if they want to have any chance of doing this. Maybe they'll have to shadow meld the trash off, because Moon does have that available, but that's going to be the only thing keeping them from keeping them in this pull. He has to shadow meld this off right now. Fortunately, he's able to get it off. It's not going to be a full-on team wipe. He'll be able to battle res them up, but that was spooky, and that's their Bloodlust committed. They're not going to have that available should they try to do that again.
Yeah, so it has... I feel like that was just a misplay from anyone who was not the tank, because the tank just had bleed effects. He had 2 stacks of bleeds, which already does do a lot of damage from the Berserker, right? And there was an emissary of Tide that meant that you cannot get the Berserker away from the tank because it's not stunnable or susceivable in any way. So what needed to happen is someone else go closer than the tank to be able to get the bleed on them, because it is the closest proximity target. It's not aggro based, it's the closest target. So anyone else could have just walked to the tank, stood closer, faster than the tank, and then they would have gotten the bleed, meaning that the tank wouldn't have had 3 stacks, which ended up killing him. So definitely a team mistake happening by Hypers here, as one last chance. They're working on Machimba here, because they still have their dead rogue, which can't be rest because of the battle rests that they had to commit earlier.
And something else they could have done as well, they didn't even have to have a player closer to the leap. They could have used the Unholy Decay pet. Now that's not ideal, obviously, because Ray's ally does have a cooldown, but I mean, it's better than your tank going down and committing to almost a full wipe. I mean, that's just unfortunate from them. However, on the other side, we're going to be able to see what One Last Chance will be pulling here. They do commit their we saw the tricks go off, so they will be pulling this first 3-pack. But after this first 3-pack, they don't have to commit their Bloodlust to this because they're not doing a large pull. They're only killing these 3 mobs. We see the large 2 trash packs with the Emissary of the Tides in the middle behind them, as well as the Hulk and the 2 Raptors. I can't guarantee you. I'm pretty sure they're going to be skipping almost all of that because they have so much extra trash percentage at this point in the dungeon. And I'm interested to see what they plan on pulling. They don't have to do the exact same route that Black Mamba did earlier because they have 4% extra trash percentage on the board. But it'll just be interesting to see what they plan on pulling, what their variation on the route is.
I do have to question their Bloodlust usage, though, because at this point, One Last Chance has been holding their Bloodlust for quite a while. They're 17 minutes into the dungeon, so I believe they only used their Bloodlust 1 time, right? So definitely holding it for a little bit too long, I feel like, just because they could get 3 usages. Oh, and there we go, the Bloodlust is being used, so they were saving it for this exact pull, which does seem like a big pull, and again, you said they're not going to be pulling this, but they end up doing so. So this means that this might just give them all the trash percentage that they need, and then they're just going to skip all the way to the council boss, which I assume. But again, is this really going to be worth it? Because this brute just has so much HP, right?
Is that the caster curse happening too? Did they hear me say that they weren't going to do it, and they're like, we'll show you. This is our last chance. We're going to do what we want. This is really weird, but I mean, it's an interesting use of Bloodlust in this fortified dungeon. The thing about the Spectral Brute and why we want to dodge it so much is this Ground Crush ability. It provides a huge area of denial, and while you're running out, you can't DPS him down. And because he has so much more HP than everything around him, you want to be focusing him, not the other mobs. You want to be cleaving off of him, and when any downtime on him is, I mean, he's trying to run out here. I mean, there's nothing he can do. This is really unfortunate. He also, that could have been bad. He popped his cloak already and had the poison barrage on him. Fortunately, he was able to vanish it off. That could have been really bad if he didn't have that, because that poison barrage does a lot of damage.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, they're Outlaw Rogues and they have increased melee range, but not even Outlaw Rogues are going to be able to attack through this huge area of denial. So it really seems like, so if they pull that many constructs and go through all of this trouble to get this percentage, then I feel like there must have been more efficient things to do with this last few trash percentage that they need. Because look how long this pull took them. They committed their Bloodlust. I mean, yeah, they got up to 96% now, so they only have Shadow of Soul left, but it still feels like maybe 2 of the bridge trash groups they could have just pulled through together and just AoE'd them down with the Bloodlust or something like that, because this brute just not only having so much HP but also just denying so much damage on anything else. So interesting choice here by One Last Chance. Hyper's already working on that council fight. Of course, Hyper still needs to do more trash afterwards, while One Last Chance does not.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at the Bloodlust timer to see how long that pull took them. That's what I was pointing to, the Bloodlust timer. It took them 1.5 minutes to finish off that brute, as well as the rest of the AoE pull. That's like almost a fortified boss in and of its own. That's a ridiculous amount of time to commit to a trash, and they popped their Bloodlust on it too. But it did get them to the exact right trash percentage, and they do have the right amount of shrouds to skip the rest of trash, so there's a chance that that's actually a pretty efficient thing to do. I'm interested to see what their time is going to be compared to what we saw earlier today, and just kind of a comparison. Black Mamba didn't have a clean run, but we can kind of figure out what a clean run would have been from them based off of, just guessing pretty much. I mean, it's not an exact science, but we can also compare it to the Western region if we want to as well. It's interesting. When this dungeon's on Fortified, it kind of opens up new routes for other people to do. On Tyrannical, you can kind of pull whatever trash you want, and the trash doesn't matter too much. But on Fortified, you really have to think about what trash you want to do, because not all of it is very easy. Those Berserkers are terrifying.
I'm a little bit sad that Moon did not Shadow Melt off his Severing Axe here. So there's a small trick you can actually do on this council fight, that in between the boss spawns, you actually can get out of combat, even though you are in a boss fight. So usually Shadow Melt does not get you out of combat in boss combat, of course, and Vanish doesn't get you out of combat either. But on this very specific fight, you can get out of combat just because there is no boss currently active in between the spawning. So once you do use that Shadow Melt right after Kula is dead, you actually actually get rid of all dots, all of debuffs. So you can get rid of the Severing Axe if you use the Shadow Melt, and you can also use the Shadow Melt to just use a potion out of combat just to get the timer rolling again. So Moon not making use of that Shadow Melt as one last chance, actually struggling quite a bit on Xanazol here.
Did they just both of their cheat deaths there? Did they let
Yeah.
the explosive go off?
Maybe,
That's what it had to have been. There's no way you take other damage in this section of the fight. That's very questionable. I mean, we saw the same concept from another team in the Western Division, but that was interesting to say the least. I'm not sure if I like that strategy. I mean, they didn't die. They still had battle res available.
Yeah, they had cloak ready too, right? They could have used their cloak. I think one of the rogues used it, did not proc the cheat death, and the other two just chose to, you know what, just like let's not press that button. Or maybe it seemed like they were close to killing it and they believed, and it ended up not happening. So yeah, interesting to see. But it worked out for one last chance. One more time, look at the difference between the two death timers, 5 versus 4 deaths. There's only 5 seconds difference. So it's still kind of close between those two. One last chance is going to be done with the boss faster, which actually... sorry, the other way around. Hyper is going to be done with the boss faster, but they still have to deal with some trash afterwards, while one last chance only has to deal with the mini boss.
Yeah, well, Hypers is going to have to deal with, I believe, 2 trash packs after this. They're going to have to do the 5-pack that has the Emissary of the Tides in it, and they're also going to have to do the 3-pack that's right in front of the bridge, whereas one last chance can just use their 3rd and final Shroud to get to the bridge and hopefully skip past all of the rest of the trash. That's going to be their ideal scenario, and then all they have to do is finish off Shadow of Zul and King Dazar. I think one last chance is pretty firmly in the lead. It depends on how well Hypers deals with this trash. If they maybe have a way of pulling all of the trash left that they need all at one pull, I'd be very impressed, because this trash is incredibly dangerous unfortified, and there's an Emissary of the Tides in this pack, like we mentioned, so they can't interrupt any of these spells until that Tides is down. I don't think they're going to be doing both pulls at the same time, so yeah, just doing one pull, and then they'll be doing the 3-pack afterwards. But one last chance, boss going down for them, and they don't have to deal with any trash. They're just going to go straight to Shadow of Zul.
Yeah, one more thing I actually didn't mention before is that one last chance, Proud Warrior is playing Dwarf. So he does have the Dwarf ratio available to them. Now, if you think, if the monk, the Brewmaster monk, Hyper, actually would have been a Dwarf too, then they wouldn't have this wipe happening earlier on the Berserker pack, because the only reason they wiped was because the tank actually had 3 debuffs on them. But the monk needs to be playing Shadow Melt, because their strategy is not allowing them to have those triple shots as we've seen on one last chance side, and also their routing is completely different. So one last chance not needing the Shadow Melt on the tank, while Hypers does require the Shadow Melt. So not having that Dwarf actually did matter in this dungeon.
Yep, it's an intended tank death. He didn't have a Shadow Melt available, and the Shroud wasn't long enough. Because, of course, when you do walk through that door after killing the 3rd boss, there still is that RP screen that pops up, and even if you have like an auto cutscene canceller, it does lose 2 seconds of that Shroud. So you can't run through without like using a speed pot in that amount of time unless you're like very perfect with your movement. So on purpose death from them. But they are on Shadow of Zul way before Hypers is, and Hypers knows this. That, you know, they can watch the stream and figure this out. You see them pulling this Raptor with them as they run towards Shadow of Zul. I mean, that's a heads-up play from them. They know they're behind now.
One more thing though, One Last Chance does not have their Bloodlust available. I believe Hyper is going to commit the Bloodlust here, but One Last Chance does not have it. So having to pop this tree form to keep the tank alive, they're going to be, they need to manage their defensives properly to keep Sharos alive, because this mini boss does so much damage in a fortified setting. You can just see the Tree of Life being popped. Once the Tree of Life goes down, I assume Sharos is going to pop his shield well to be able to stay alive here. As we see, he just keeps dropping low, and unfortunately they have one of those AoE zones spawn in melee range. I wonder why none of the rogues is just going in to tank it. You can outrange the AoE zone to just go away, but you know, you can also just take a step into it and soak it. So very interesting to see that none of the rogues chose to soak it. Everyone just running away, just losing so much uptime on the Shadow of Zul, meaning it's going to take so much longer, and they're running out of defensives at this point. So Sharos actually might go down here still.
Looking at the HOTS, I mean, Rhino's just pumping as much heal as he possibly can into Sharos right now. It looks like he's not going to go down. The last Shadow Barrage goes off. He's fine. They're good. They're going to go make sure they deal with that minion of Zul. And once again, we have to mention this every single time, just so you guys at home are sure, that Shadow of Zul did give them the final 4%. Is just a UI bug on our screen. They do have 100% of their trash count. And Hypers will be pulling King Dazar slightly before One Last Chance. But that being said, there is a very good chance that in the next 2 minutes, this boss is not going to last that much longer, but I believe that One Last Chance will have their Bloodlust come up before this boss dies, which will give them a little bit of an advantage on this boss. They're only 5% behind on the HP right now.
Yeah, this is still going to be close, though, to be honest, because both teams, 25 seconds death timers, right? 5 deaths each. Both do have a battle rush available, so in case something does go wrong in this fight, but it's a 45 setting, so boss is not going to be as difficult anymore. Now it's all going to be about DPS, and we do have a difference in comp here, so the damage, the single target damage is going to be different. We have the 1 Assassin Rogue, 2 Outlaw versus the 2 Outlaw and the DK, right? And the difference is, of course, the Brewmaster tank as well. Tank damage, the tank damage difference might not be as big as you can see in the damage meters right now, but the Brewmaster is buffing everyone else's damage as well on top of that. Not only the 3 melees, but also the healer's damage.
Most dangerous part of the fight right here is Tizala comes down. He will be casting that Deathly Roar, which will fear everyone in the group for 3 seconds. There's nothing they can do while they're feared. The rogues can cloak the first cast here, so maybe only one of the rogues had cloak available for that, unfortunately. But this Bloodlust is absolutely going to come off cooldown, and that's going to have to make the difference for them. They are ahead on boss percentage right now, even with the Bloodlust coming off cooldown. So one last chance. This is their dungeon to win. They have the Bloodlust available for them in 20 seconds.
Yeah, and you can see the Asa Rogue shining right here. Look at the damage meters. Look at the Asa Rogue doing so much damage. Definitely a very good choice by One Last Chance to switch one rogues back just to see, just to have this extra damage, which does matter a lot, as you can see right here. Now Hyper's 40% on a boss, One Last Chance 50%. So this is still close, and you can see how much they're min-maxing the DPS. They know how close this is between them. Just because Reban is still alive, right? No one is focusing Reban. Everyone's just focusing the boss, keeping it alive, just cleaving it down passively. Everyone is single target focusing, and we see the Bloodlust being popped on One Last Chance, but Hyper's still ahead.
Dude, Bloodlust has been cast, and they're very slowly closing the gap, but it's not going to be enough. Haste isn't that big of a deal for these Outlaw Rogues. They're only closing in. They're 4% behind now. They were 10% when they popped the Bloodlust, but that Bloodlust is fading in 10 seconds. Only 3% between the two teams now. This is going to be neck and neck, down to the wire for these teams. I mean, One Last Chance, like you mentioned, their name. I'm going to take the bit from Jack one more time. This is their last chance to prove that they have a chance in this cup today. Well, they have the 3rd map as well if they lose this, but still, this is so close, but it looks like it's going to go to Hypers at the last second here. Last second deaths are going to be everything from them, but it looks like Team Desire is going to go down for Hypers first by just a hair.
So close.
That was an incredibly close one. I'm interested in seeing the time when people are not ready. And unfortunately, we're having some people who are not ready as well. So Hypers is going to be taking that 2-1 victory over One Last Chance, as they were unable to field the full 5 members that were required on to that one. So they will be moving on through the lower bracket, and One Last Chance lost their chance.
Team 430 as the gates drop here. Both teams out the gate right away with that mass stealth. Of course, won't last very long, as that Void Emissary does have true sight and will see through that stealth right away, but no problem for these Alliance teams, of course, with the Shadow Meld.
And of course we see the comp diversity again with the 3 rogues on both sides. So 6 rogues in total. There we go. So both of those teams, of course, are playing their time trial composition, which time trials happened before the rogue nerfs. So they just stick to that comp that they have been playing. They do not adapt it here, as they both do this initial pull. Now Full Speed choosing to do a little bit of a different pull, where they pull it around the corner, which is something we've seen a lot from the Eastern region. And Team 430 actually choosing to do a little bit of a smaller pool, where they only pull this it's not a patrol, but it's this trash pack that if you kill this, the boss is going to spawn.
Boss is going to spawn indeed, as Sai gets quite low right now, and 2% health and falls over. Full Speed does have the battle res available, but doesn't matter, as the healer goes down, and so does Smile back, as the mob smile back on him as he dies. The rest of the team follows suit, and they have to run upstairs. Now, I'm not really sure how he's going to get out. He actually has Shadow Meld available. Fortunately, the Druid does, so they will be able to just Shadow Meld all this off. If he even gets there, though, just why would you do that and run in and get killed, as just gets nuked down to orbit one more time? This is an absolute disaster from Full Speed, as Slow and Steady is now winning the race here from Team 430, who's already gotten started on the first boss.
Yeah, this is very unfortunate for Full Speed. Not only do they have 7 deaths, but they also, all of their pull, like they reset, they had a full team wipe, they have to do everything again. Fortunately, they did not lose their Bloodlust, but just their healer being in combat again does not have the Shadow Belt available, just going down one more time.
I mean,
they're just going too fast. Full Speed, maybe they have to calm down a little bit, go a little bit slower at this point, just because they have their 3 shrouds available, right? They have all those rogues, so it wouldn't be a problem for them to shroud the healer through if they have to, or shroud the tank through, and now they're having another team wipe come in here.
The problem is they did just shroud the healer through, but the healer got aggro through the mass stealth. I guess must have popped an ability on the way. Full speed needs to go half speed here in a second because they just cannot take whatever strategy they're doing. Obviously it's not working out for them. They're 10 deaths on the border with only 6% trash. Haven't even spawned the first boss, so all eyes right now on Team 430, which is making their technical debut with Sky Captain Craig down to 30% HP now. We're in a fortified environment, so the lethal one-shot potential of Sky Captain Craig's kind of fire Azerite blast is not nearly as strong or dangerous here in this fortified environment. We just saw Cinderella get hit there only for about 1/3 HP. We do know the strength of that on live and higher tyrannical keys. But for Team 430 here, about to down Sky Captain Craig and move over to what will be at least the more pivotal role in the dungeon based on the affixes that we have at hand.
Yeah, so we see full speed just going a little bit slower here. Definitely, 10 deaths on the board. They have to pull everything just one by one at this point, just to be sure that they do get to the next boss. While Team 430, they are done with the boss right now, so they can move on. Now, there's this one enforcer on this bridge that we will see most teams just skip. They will, they are going to pull it as they run past, but then they just shut them out after aggro, or they use the shroud, as we see for Team 430 here. And once they're past this, there's multiple different routes that we've seen teams take up here, because there's lots of different trash groups that you can go for. So this is a really open area at this point.
Open area indeed, but usually we'll see. I don't think too often we've seen anymore that people don't do the council captain second. Sometimes we will have get a bit of backtracking if they do Trothak first and then come back, but we'll see what these teams have up their sleeves. As Team 430 stealths into action in the middle of council captain area. They have done well here to mark the Brian scale just for interrupts. Want to make sure you get both frost type casts interrupted, as well as we can see the Latin Arcana being channeled there, and Bloodlust is committed here on a rather large pull, so it makes sense. We're going to see all these mobs get deleted. Now we're going to have to keep an eye on Inspiration. There's going to be a lot of damage coming in, sub 30% on these mobs because of that Raging Affix, and this is where it gets a bit hairy. Don't say anything, Inigara. While the mobs just destroy the tank, it's just pure damage here. There is some Blind Rage coming in left and right here on the different rogues, but they just have so much CC and ways to get around that it's really just about the tank damage.
You're Bolt.
Right, you are, Nagura.
Okay, so Fortified and Raging definitely can cause some troubles here, as we can see. The problem is all of the mobs just go into Raging at the very same time, as you can see right now on Team 430 side. While Full Speed is still just struggling on the same trash pull that they did. They just have more deaths, more problems here. So just keep an eye on 430 here, as they have a very clean run. They have 0 deaths so far. They even managed to pull off this huge trash pulls that they just committed their bloodlust to. And you even saw Inspiration, the tank, being able to tank through all of this Raging, right? He wasn't even starting to kite. He was just standing there and taking it, basically, just using all of his defensives to survive and be able to do. One of the casts actually going through, though, as you see the group dropping a little bit low, and the tank heard me probably, and now he's gonna die.
Is that how it works? Don't listen to the girl. You will die, apparently. But Inspiration, being a true inspiration to face tankers everywhere, popping that shield wall at a very appropriate time on the previous pack where a lot of the danger wars, and they just had enough DPS to make sure that most of the trash died before those 8 seconds at 40% DR faded off him. But a lot of struggles here for Kiki right now. Cannot manage to get Inspiration out of this 4-stack of Grievous on top of the Raging mobs. Was quite close. Fortunately, did not fall to the siren voice of Nagura there, dying over on the side, as they once again channel that Latent Arcana and are looking like they're going to do a double pull here. One of the Harpooners that Jack mentioned, of course, pre-cast here. One of the dangerous mobs. It does grip the furthest target away from it into the mess here. So if you have the Buccaneers kind of doing their whirlwind, or you have a Blind Rage going on, and somebody unluckily gets gripped in on top of that, they can very easily die combined with the Raging here. So something to keep an eye on, but they do have a fair bit, once again, of crowd control, including the Shockwave from the Warrior. So if done correctly, they should be able to handle this pack quite well. While Lobster gets quite low, doesn't have access to that cheat death, nor does the third rogue on that list, so quite vulnerable right now.
We see all of those mobs just go into Raging at the very same time, as one of the whirlwinds did not actually get interrupted. It is dropping the whole group very low. Now Grievous is also like a very annoying affix, especially if your melee group with their melee brain just gets hit by this whirlwind, as you can see right now. Immediately everyone just dropping down, eating the fish feast once they are out of combat, just to get rid of this grievous effect, as it is very annoying to heal once it stacks up to 4. Now we see the boss being engaged here, and it is actually Eudora being active this time around. Eudora, the more difficult boss here that can be active, just because Lobster actually going down to the barrage here of Eudora jumping to the corner.
Yeah, this is actually really scary because they didn't pull the Void Emissary on the side, so they're actually playing the cards right now of RNG, once again, ironically with 3 Outlaw Rogues in there, but they're playing the RNG cards and hoping that Eudora does not jump to the 2 corners where the Void Emissary is nearby too much, because if she does, they can't chase her unless they want to aggro the Void Emissary, which is pretty much going to insta-wipe them unless they want to reset the boss. So second time in a row, Eudora jumps to the far corner, and what happened last time is that Lobster was out of position as they were tanking and DPSing Captain Jolly. They have to be really careful not to get anywhere too close from that Void Emissary. I mean, this is a pretty ballsy pull right here, Nagura, so hopefully it works out for them, but if Eudora goes to that far corner, they're not going to have enough of an angle to really dodge the Grape Shot.
You can outrange it though, so if she jumps to the corner, it is 40 yards range, so all you have to do is make sure that Jolly is getting pulled away from her. So you definitely want to make sure that if she jumps the far corners, you want to be as far away as possible. You can see they did get hit by 1 shot, and we see Lobster go down. They don't have a Battle Rest available to them. They were not far enough away, so they're definitely not they're not playing around this Eudora shot properly, so they will have to finish up this boss with only 2 DPS players left. Now Eudora is pretty low, so they should be able to, but Eudora's powder shot is doing so much damage, as you can see go through here, and the Rogue's not really able to dodge it. Now I wonder why he's not using the cloak, right? It is magic damage as far as I'm aware, so you should be able to. It should be cloakable. So both times he died, he could have cloaked the damage, unless it's physical.
I think it's physical. Sure. I think it's physical, but then again, it is 5 in the morning, so it could be either damage right now, Nagura. But unfortunately, Lobster does get pinched there for the second time and goes down. Not going to have the res available, as you just mentioned earlier. Now we do have a different mechanic. Typically we see on these bosses, Nagura, that they have the kind of the brews that come down from the bar area. It can be crit haste or of course the debuff. I think for the first time ever between the 2 seasons, we're seeing that is not the case. It's actually the brew buff on the ground, and what that does is it gives you a 15% damage increase as long as you stay within its area. So a bit less RNG and a bit less skill cap to play, as well as you just have to sit in that area and DPS the boss is down. Finally, everybody mounts up as the boss does die here for Team 430, and they stealth right over into Trothak's pit. Full speed is just not going at full speed right now, as 18 deaths accrue on the board. Another full team wipe right now as they just rally to get themselves together after killing the first boss.
I mean, they're dying at full speed. Something, right? But I mean, they did manage to recover a little bit, right? They did get the first boss down. They are slowly progressing through the dungeon. The pulls are just not working out for them. I feel like they had a strategy for this dungeon. Maybe they tried to adapt their strategy to a faster one, because they ended up having I believe it was rank 8 in the time trials, or even lower than that. So they definitely wanted to better their strategy and copy someone else, as we talked about earlier. And maybe they just didn't practice this enough, and therefore the pulls are just not working out for them. And of course, if you try a pull and you commit a bunch of defensives or offensives to this very pull, and then you end up wiping, if you try the same pull again, you're not going to have these defensives anymore, these offensives, and then it's going to be even more difficult. And that's probably what's happening to full speed. They just, it doesn't work the first time, and then it's going to be even more difficult the second time they try.
Second time, indeed, for Team 430 here has finished off a rather substantial pull on the side. They're still only at 51% trash. Typically, you see groups at in the kind of 70 to 80% trash range. A big pull here coming with Ludwig von Tortolin, and of course, one of the trash packs on the side. I believe there's a brine scale there. You can see that it's marked, and it is definitely getting damage priorities. It finally goes down. They don't want to deal with those cast intros, because if one leaks in the raging and it's the frontal frost blast, it will quite actually easily kill someone in the group. So once again, they've downed that and are now working on Ludwig, and they've pulled the Emissary of Tides in safely on top of the rest of the pack, which can now just prevents obviously crowd control on the rest of the group, but there's nothing in there that's too dangerous outside of that brine scale, which they made sure to kill first. After Ludwig, I expect that they'll probably pull a bit more trash on the side just to get ready for Trothak here, as I mentioned, because most groups usually are in that kind of 70 to, let's say, 85% rage by the time they're done with Trothak. So a fair bit more trash left to go for Team 430 here.
Yeah, of course, Ludwig taking quite a long time here, as it is. Ludwig is buffed by Fortified and not by Tyrannical, as it is considered a mini boss basically. You also saw the enrage effect from the raging affix just being applied to Ludwig once you drop below 30%, being immediately dispelled by the Resto Druid with the Soothe. Now, the Resto Druid actually really low on mana, does have the Innervate available though, which should not really be needed as there's nothing else really happening. But we saw the Rogue actually dropping very low here as he stepped outside the arena, it seemed like.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to get booed and have rotten food thrown on you, which is what happens if you step outside the arena. You get it right with a substantial buff, and he does it again there. Actually, did he get hit by the shell? I think he got hit by the shell there, but almost broke that cheat death, dipping down to 20%. Both rogues channeling their latent arcana, of course, from the trinket from Queen of Shroud and the Eternal Palace. Double Brine Scale here as we get the double spell reflect up, immediately marked by the team so that they can get any interrupts on the water bolts, but more so the Frost Frontal. That's the dangerous one. We get a shockwave coming in here. Frost Blast gets well interrupted on both sides as Raging Territory is now hit. It's actually 3 Brine Scales. I just noticed the third one on the side there. A lot of damage coming here on Inspiration as he has his Last Stand pop, doing what he can to survive. Of course, Last Stand combined with that bolster effect does give you full uptime on shield block, which is just incredibly powerful against any form of melee. So he's able to just sit there and face tank the rest of that trash for maximum DPS uptime. Disaster here once again though for full speed as they reach the big 2-0 as Just goes down once again. No battle res available for them, and I don't think they're going to be able to kill this boss, which is at 30% for Eudora and 73% for Captain Jolly. There's just no way they're going to be able to survive through all of that without a healer.
They are rogues though, so you never know at this point.
Yeah,
no, but it is
true.
Grievous as well, so definitely the tank not going to be able to survive through the Grievous decks. Grievous especially is an affix that is quite difficult for Frat Warriors to deal with, because once you drop low, it's just so hard for them to get themselves to full HP again, to get rid of this Grievous. And there it is, there's the full team wipe gonna come in for full speed. As I mean, they do have a battle rest available, but with the Resto Druid going down, there's just no one else who has a battle rest. They don't have the DK or anything else who can rest them back up, so they're gonna have to try again. This time they might even have their Bloodlust ready if they try again and want to commit their Bloodlust, as Team 430 also has their Bloodlust available, but at this point they are very likely going to save it for the last boss, and they're just going to use it for trash that is going to be pulled on top of the last boss, which I assume, which we've seen so many times from other teams as well, just because of the friendly fire damage that he can do to the trash there.
Yeah, and part of the issue with Sai here is all day he was the one tank, at least, well, that's not true actually. We saw the Vengeance Demon Hunter earlier from Jing BB, but aside from that, he was the one warrior tank that was not running Urchin at all. Urchin, of course, is that healing trinket that you get from Lady Ashvane in the Eternal Palace. So warriors have probably the worst throughput of any tank in terms of self-sustain, self-healing, etc. And so that trinket is really their saving grace this tier. You see a lot of warriors running it. We saw it a ton in the West Cup, and he wasn't running it. So in the situation where Grievous is slowly taking you down on a warrior, that trinket actually might have provided a chance for them to stay alive with the Grievous Tixing just not wearing it, unfortunately. So down he goes. Full speed now at 21 wipes as Team 430 sitting at a mighty 2 wipes. Trothak 21% and 75% trash on the board, getting ready to finish this boss off. And then they still have a fair bit of trash left to go before they do have access to Harlan, but we do know in Agur a lot of teams grab trash on top of Harlan and nuke him down with that cannonball barrage.
Yeah, and we also see the Resto Druid actually choosing to use that Mass Root, which is going to help them out later on for the Ravagers, because the Ravagers, of course, they cast a Painful Motivation, which debuffs themselves and 2 random mobs around them, which does leave a dot behind a damage over time effect that does just kill them. So if you have the Mass Root available, you can make sure that the correct mobs are getting hit by that Painful Motivation and not the ones that you don't want to have affected by it. Now, Team 430 are downing the boss here, so they're on their way to that last boss area. And as you mentioned, they're probably going to engage the last boss and then just slowly pull the rest of the trash on top of it.
But the warrior actually doesn't care and goes up with the outlaw rogues. And I'm not really sure. Oh, the druid is actually just going to wild charge up. Of course, there he is in a humanoid form right now. So they actually skip that entire trash pack at the bottom, which does consist of a void emissary. So good on them to just get rid of that. And they immediately waste no time engaging Harlan Sweet, the final boss of the dungeon here. Now, you know, there is that Enforcer pack, the double Enforcer pack rather, just outside of here is probably not going to be enough for their 25%. So what we've seen teams in the West do and likely they're going to do here is just kind of deal one pack at a time into that Cannonball Barrage, especially once Harlan hits the 60% mark, because that's when he will cast Cannonball Barrage on every single member of the party, except for the Warrior, of course, the tank, that is.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Full Speed for actually continuing to do this dungeon, because they probably do have the stream open on their second monitor. They know just how far behind they are at this point. But I just like the spirit to continue playing, to just not give up. They're in this competition, and just give them a smiley face. Their rogue is called Smileback. So let's motivate Full Speed a little bit to just keep going, as they are really far behind. But Team 430... you know, only having those 2 deaths, we saw them struggle a little bit on one of those trash pulls earlier, but outside of that, having a very clean run. This is the first time we see Team 430, as they were forfeiting their first game because of time issues. So this is the first time we see them, and it seems like they don't have any of those nerfs affecting them at all, which we've seen some other teams struggle with. Like Black Mamba, for example, you know, saying that they're nervous before their first game and having some struggle with just not executing the pulls properly. But Team 430, very first showing here on the Cup, and they are having a flawless run so far.
Yeah, true inspiration this team is right now. Harlan Sweet at 50% for Team 430 as they nuke down the first set of ads with the quadruple Cannonball Barrage. Unfortunately, nobody interrupted the Stormcaller in the back after it was rooted, so it did just kind of sit there doing nothing for a while, just casting, and was not caught in the Cannonball Barrage. But this time they make no second mistake and just get him down on top of it. Full Speed sitting at 52% trash and is working on Ludwig von Tortolen, of course, in the Trothak pit there, waiting for the third boss to spawn. Tree of Life has been popped here rather by Kiki on the side of Team 430.
Okay, this is very dangerous for Team 430, just because all of those mobs are in raging area now, and we have the 4 Grievous stacks on Inspiration. Inspiration actually going down, and everyone else proccing their cheat death, using their defensives to be able to survive here as the battle rest comes out from Kiki here. He's also in Tree 4, making sure everyone stays alive, getting rid of all of those Grievous stacks, and now Inspiration trying to get the aggro back on all of those mobs as they're so spread out. You also have a caster in the back, and yeah, this is very dangerous with the affix combination. Really, Inspiration just dropping low again. Still, so many mobs alive, still in this raging area.
He just goes down again, and they don't have the battle res available, so they're gonna have to try and finish off Harlan Sweet, who is taking double damage here. But Kiki eats a bombard to the face, and unfortunately goes down. It's up to these rogues who are just not very durable when it comes to 4 stacks of Grievous. And I guess we spoke too soon here, Nagura.
Well,
you just cursed the team yet again. I don't know why you keep doing this, but Team 430 full team wipe at Harlan, around 20% HP, 8 deaths on the board, and they're going to have to start this out again. Tettles, I don't know what you're doing with your hands, but please stop that immediately. I know I'm aware lobsters go pinch, and there's a teammate named Lobster on the team. Team 430 now 94% as they cross the bridge one more time. They have to, of course, use the Shadow Meld, as there was that Void Emissary, and once again they're going to have to leap up the hill and hookshot up the hill and wait for that wild charge from the rest of Druid. Now, I guess they still have 6% trash left on the board, so they're looking to just get through that a bit first before they re-engage Harlan. But they're already so ahead at this point that there's no way Full Speed is catching up.
That is true. I mean, even if Full Speed would be catching up in raw dungeon speed, there's still just an insane amount of difference in death timers as well. So, you know, Team 430, they definitely have this in their bag as they're trying to finish this trash, as you mentioned. Kiki actually going down here as they're trying to get this last percentage that they need for the 100%. Now, again, they still can deal with this Ravager pack easily, which they can just, you know, take it slow, finish off the last 3% that they need, go to the boss and finish the boss. I mean, they don't have their Bloodlust available anymore, but they don't need it for the boss itself. They only needed it to do this huge trash pull on top of the boss. So it really should not be a problem for them at all to just finish the last 3% and finish the boss.
Inspiration just looks so sad. They're sitting down next to that treasure chest, knowing that the treasure chest they would have gotten by completing the dungeon has disappeared in front of their eyes right now. And Nagura, you know, it's easier said than done. I mean, you're just saying go kill the boss forehead, but they were trying to do that and wiped miserably at 20%. So Team 430 here, it is fortified. You're absolutely right. But Team 430 here getting started once again on Harlan Sweet for the second time. They have almost completed all their trash. They're missing 3%, which they could just turn around after and you let a Ravager pack kind of self-cannibalize on the side. So that's not a problem over the trash. They don't need to be risky or anything with their play here. They just need to chew through the rest of the boss's health, as Trothak is now at 50% for Full Speed with still 21 deaths on the board.
Yeah, so just fighting Harlan Sweet one more time now. This boss is actually kind of annoying, especially with Grievous affix, because you constantly have this random AoE happening. You can see those winds that shoot out of the boss that are basically unavoidable, or at least very, very hard to dodge. So most of the group is going to get hit by them. You're randomly going to get knocked back, as you can see the ability happening right now. And then on top of that, you also have the Cannon Barrage, which does also do group damage to you once the whole group is affected by it in the end. And because of this Grievous affix, it does make it a little bit difficult to heal everyone up, just because everyone is taking AoE damage all the time. Now on top of that, you also have those Grenadiers spawning in the back, as you can see right here, just being rooted by the rest of Druid. And outside of that, you don't really have to do anything with them. If they would reach you on the fixate, they will explode and do AoE damage to you, but you know, rest of you can just constantly entangling root them.
46% here for Team 430 as one of the rogue unfortunately gets clipped by the Cannon Barrage there. They do actually have a battle res available, so Kiki wastes no time for that as Rebirth is cast and he runs back into action, entangling Roots cast there on the Grenadier, making sure that it does not reach the rest of the pack. Actually, I think is a Bombardier, not a Grenadier. I mean, come on. Full speed here, 21 deaths on the board. They finally cross the bridge past the Void Emissary as well and are looking up. But it looks like Lobster Rogue is just... I mean, he's just full of surprises here as he's jumping up and down, trying to pick his way back up the hill right now. Oh, he almost got there. He's in trouble now. That cannonball barrage is coming down, and it takes no prisoners as Lobster Rogue is down. Lobster, unfortunately, shows us what not to do, but he's a very good teacher. He showed us what not to do on the side there. He goes down. They will be able to finish off this boss here, of course. Harlan Sweet has reached sub 30% HP, meaning he is taking 100% increase of damage right now, but Team 430 is certainly making us sweat for the finale of this dungeon right now as Harlan reaches single target digits and they have 3% left for trash right after this.
Hey Salute, remember when you were talking about this being a speedrun dungeon?
Yeah, I remember.
Remember that?
Hey, we're casting here, okay? Don't steal our show, Jack.
Oh, I crossed the line onto that one. Oh, excuse me. Goodness
to see
gracious.
that Full Speed caught up, actually. They're on Harlan Sweet now as well, so...
Yeah, they caught up.
Well... to the boss.
They caught up indeed, and I'm not really sure what the team is doing. I'm not sure if they realize that they have 3% left.
They're playing with the Ravagers.
Oh, yes, okay. Are they? Okay, so yeah, they're just waiting for the Ravagers to finish off the rest of this dungeon any second. And there it is, finally, Team 4.
Now, let's see how they do it in cup play.
There is a blood DK on my screen right now, and I fear for everyone's life involved in this dungeon after the exposure that we just saw on Freehold, but hopefully the team is well experienced and well thought out. This is actually the first time we've seen a blood DK for a while, since MDI 2018, actually. Since BlizzCon last year, so it's been quite a long time. I mean, there's a reason you don't bring them to dungeons. Hopefully they prove us wrong here, as blood DK is out and busted. Of course, we know the strengths of the blood DK. We have the AoE grip, just for a reminder of those at home. I know you haven't been to a museum in a while, but we have the AoE grips from the blood DKs. They're high self-sustain, good with burst magic damage intake, and just to prove our case even further, the warrior tank on full speed does go down, and we're already having early issues just like in the previous dungeon here, but Team 430 sticking strong, 80k HPS on that blood DK.
Well, so if the blood DK didn't die and the warrior died, that means that the blood DK is just straight up better, right?
Yes.
There we go. So Team 430 not actually having any problems here on their very first pull. They managed to get the 8% trash, while Full Speed on their first pull only got 6%. So Team 430 not only having less problems, but also doing a bigger pull here. As they move on to do the next pull, we see the WCC come out on the attendants here on the Templars, and both of the teams still have their Bloodlust available, which we'll see might be saving for the first boss, which of course is the best boss ever designed. And then we also got Tyrannical. Again, bolstering in this dungeon is going to cause a lot of problems, and that's why we don't see those super huge pulls come in by those teams, just because even if all of the mobs do have even HP, you can't kill them at the exact same time, and therefore you're going to bolster some of them, and then it's going to cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, bolstering teaming in this dungeon is definitely quite mean. It wasn't actually even just a double CC, it was a quadruple CC, so each rogue sapped and blinded one of the attendants at the bottom, after which Inspire on his DK ran in with that Gorfine's Grasp AoE grip, another nice little little punt there with Ursul's Vortex from the Typhoon Ursul's combo with Kiki making sure to get another round of interrupts from these water bolts, which are actually quite deadly, even in this tyrannical environment. Just sustained heavy magic damage intake is scary for any tank, quite frankly. Team 430 here, 15% trash on the board, about to finish the last 2 attendants. Let's make that 17 or 18% as they look to go around the side here. They're not doing a skip towards the boss that we typically see teams do, wanting to get started on Aquaseer as quickly as possible. But down they go. Latent Arcanas have been channeled, and it looks like they're going to try to brute force this Void-touched emissary here. I don't think Gorfiends is available just yet for an AoE grip. No, he has about a minute left on that, depending on his talent loadout. So Bloodlust has actually been committed here. Not the most typical pathing that we've seen, Nagura.
Yeah, definitely interesting route here that the Team 430 is taking. Full speed. They're already past the first boss here and dealing with this trash over there. Of course, they have to go back and deal with the boss afterwards. Now, they do have Full Speed still has their Bloodlust available, so I assume they're going to use it for the boss. And because it is bolstering, you can't really pull anything on top of the boss. We still have seen other teams do so. They pulled Helldays on top of the boss and just made sure that they're not going to kill it before the boss is dead. So that's something they can do, they can choose to do, and also maybe save their Bloodlust for that. Now, one thing to know that Kiki actually did not switch from Master to Typhoon. So interesting, if that might have been a mistake, because he did have the Master for Freehold, but we don't have anything like Sanguine here, so maybe it's not going to be such a huge deal after all.
Yeah, actually, I didn't notice that. How did they find out that Ursul's
I think it was a mass grip.
Well, was it a mass grip to the side? Okay, but I thought so.
Sure.
Okay. Anyways, nonetheless, so Master Root is indeed in this dungeon. You can see just the self-healing power of that Blood DK, one of the high self-sustained tanks, sustaining about 110k HPS on that huge pull they did earlier, allowing the healer a bit of breathing space, but of course quite susceptible to spike damage, as we did see his health go from 100 to 20 quite frequently, after which he would just death strike that instantly to the quite frankly the level of a lay on hands from a prot paladin. So huge amounts of self-healing and self-sustain coming in from that Blood DK, and loss of other things, reason you don't see them too popular at the moment, but nonetheless they're making it work for them right now. Team 430, they're sitting at a mighty 27% trash on the board, waiting for Aquaseer's RP to finish on the side, something that Full Speed's already done with 25% trash on the board, and they are at 78% on this boss.
Yeah, Team 430 is still trying to deal with this trash. Now, this trash is very dangerous in general, just because there's so many casters. But on top of that, there's a bunch of healing spells that need to be interrupted. And not only do you not want them to heal in the first place, but with bolstering, it's even more important to interrupt the healing abilities. Because if you do have one mob being much higher HP than the other ones, then of course the bolstering is going to be this much more difficult to handle. And now we see the initiates being pulled away from the mini-boss Helldays here. And then I assume they're going to go to the boss as well. Now, Full Speed still holding on to their Bloodlust.
Full speed of holding onto their Bloodlust. I'm not sure exactly where they're going to commit it. Of course, little trick there with the initiates with the mini-boss Helldays on the side is that you can actually creep up on the left side along the ledge and aggro the initiates before Helldays, so that the 4 of them will come away from the boss, allowing you to kill them without bolstering Helldays himself. Now, a bold statement here, though, from Team 430 has actually pulled Helldays on this tyrannical boss away, on top of the boss. So, obviously, if they kill him before Aquaseer dies, they will bolster the boss. Last thing they want to do, they're really just keeping him in here for the extra damage from the wind rune that he puts on the ground that increases your haste by 25%. Finally, Nagura, we do see the commitment, of course, from the Bloodlust from Full Speed right now. Just for the transition, I guess they found it particularly dangerous, but that is where they decided to commit it, and they themselves have also grabbed Helldays.
Yeah, I think this is just a very safe play to just save your Bloodlust for this intermission phase. We actually see the rope going down.
Does he go down Nagura style, or yeah, I think
never
so.
fell off this platform ever.
Okay.
I don't know what he's talking about. So I think so. I think he actually did fell off. He also had his cloak available, so interesting to see that he didn't commit any of those things. He could have dodged it or used his cloak, didn't do either. So they have to finish the boss here with only 4 members. As even though they do have a battle rush available, if you fall off the platform, you're going to be out of range and not restable. Now, having Helldays here. I mean, it does give you the buff from the zone, right? But it just seems so... it just seems kind of a waste to pull it this early, because I don't think the damage that you gain from having the buff of her is going to be worth it, because the healer can't really do damage because he constantly needs to heal the AoE that Helldays does. I just feel like they should have pulled it a little bit later, because at this point, they just have it throughout the whole boss fight, and they can't even kill it, because if they kill it, they're going to bolster the boss.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they just predicted that their rogue was going to topple over the side of the cliff, and as a result needed to foreman the end of the boss. And clearly the only reason the rogue died is because there's a blood DK present on their team, and for no other reason. I'm just kidding, of course. But yeah, I mean, he must have just gotten clipped on the side. And I mean, you say, you know, no Cloak of Shadows used. I'm sure he didn't intend to get hit, so he probably didn't expect it coming. Just misread the trajectory of the mob when it was doing its surging rush, and unfortunately got clipped and punted off the edge of the platform. So no battle res for them as a result. Full Speed has dealt with the first boss, has killed off Heldis, and is not deciding to move past this Void Touched Emissary. They're deciding to brute force it. We haven't seen this Emissary killed a single time, if I'm not mistaken, amongst all of the Shrine of the Storm runs last week from the West Cup. Now that we are in a teaming environment, perhaps they considered it important and easier to get as part of their mob count compared to the West last week. But hopefully it's worth it for them, because it's certainly quite time inefficient to just cleave these two mobs on top of the Void Emissary versus the quite massive pull that we saw from West teams in this area.
I also just want to point out that the surging rush on this boss is actually very hard to tell which direction the boss is charging.
Here it comes.
So I just want to, you know, because since you were helping settings, you could have also told them, you know, just, you know, have an arrow or a better indicator or something, you know. But anyway.
No, that's what somebody who falls off the platform a lot on that boss would say.
But yeah, Kiki actually struggling a lot to heal this boss, as they were, you know, having held this throughout this whole boss fight. The boss taking way longer because of this, because of the rogue being dead, and at this point he's completely out of mana. They should be able to finish off the boss here though, and they should be able to finish off Heldis as well. But Kiki definitely struggling a lot to be able to heal this fight, as he just now got the innervate back up, so they should be fine. Full Speed on the other side, they are already pretty far ahead. Of course, they didn't have any sort of problems on Aquas here. They also do not have any battle rests available anymore. It should be back up soon, but at this point, if anything goes wrong, they don't have that safety net.
So I'm not really sure why the Rogue did not release after Aquasir died there. I don't think Heldis is considered a boss level mob in terms of being able to release if you die, so he just a bit of a lazy play there. He definitely could have gotten back in time by the time they killed Heldis, and did not have to spend the time rezzing him on top of it. But nonetheless, no harm done, I suppose, in the end. 3 deaths on the board for Team 430 as they are looking to start the trash that Full Speed has just chewed through. Mastel does come out from the side of Full Speed, and they're looking like they're going to skip Sorn. Runecarver Sorn here, which is definitely a very smart play in terms of bolstering being present in this dungeon. Sorn is surrounded by 4 small initiates. You can't do the same trick that you can with Heldis, where you separate him from the 4 initiates. So the only way to do it is really just to range them, and I mean keep Sorn while he's channeling and grab the other mobs millions of yards away just to make sure he doesn't bolster. So it's a bit of a mess, and the team does well here to just completely avoid that situation entirely.
Yeah, so Team 430, they're actually not that far behind at all at this point. They're also pulling the exact same group here with the Emissary of Tides on top of it. The only difference is the 2 deaths in between, of course, and they're in the same percentage of trash right after this right after this trash pack, rather. But one of the rogues, unfortunately, going down here. They do have 2 battle rests available, so they should be getting him up here. Cinderella also getting hit by one of the AoEs, and one of the Tempests as well, almost going down too, but the cheat death is available, so it should be fine on that side. While Full Speed is going past the bridge now, making sure they actually pulled the mini-boss away, I believe, or at least it looked like it, instead of doing the whole Shadow Meld risky play. We'll see how Team 430 deals with it right after this.
Okay, so just to draw your attention, of course, there's a bit of a UI display bug here for Team 430. They actually only have 2 deaths on the board. The scoreboard is accurate at the bottom, so the 4 on their side of the screen is actually inaccurate. They don't have 4, they only have 2 deaths, so not certainly going more swimmingly for them than those 4 deaths, as they do a proper skip past the bridge right now. He does stutter step in the side there, and Spire does, making sure he doesn't aggro any of the patrolling trash there. It looks like both teams have done a successful version of the skip past the Guardian Elemental, and now we'll have to be quite careful here what they pull and how many of these initiates they pull, on account that we are once again in that bolstering affix, and these initiates have a substantially lower amount of health than the surrounding apprentices in the area.
Yeah, so I'm still like looking at this DK, and I'm trying to find a special pull or something that Team 430 is doing with this like mass grip or something like that, because it seems like the mass grip hasn't really been used by them that much at all, and it seems like what's the point of this blood DK at all at this point? Just because you only really want to bring a blood DK for utility, right? Outside of that, there's no advantage from a blood DK, or what do you say?
Well, I mean, they have some advantages. Of course, the A grip is one thing you mentioned. One of their main advantages over prot wear is just the self-sustain and being able to just have massive self-healing as long as you don't just get gibbed in one shot, because they are very susceptible to spike and mass incoming damage ever since their nerf after the first, not MDI season, but after the first season in BFA worth of M+. So what it might come down to is it just might make Kiki's life easier, maybe allow him to get some extra damage in here and there. But you're right, I haven't really seen anything extremely substantial come out of the Blood DK. I mean, what we can say, maybe this is just a comfort pitch for them. Maybe he's just used to playing Blood DK on this map, especially that's quite daunting with this bolstering teaming affix, and this is their comfort pick, and this is what works for them. So we'll have to see if anything else later in the dungeon is good for that AoE grip, but so far nothing has been too crazy special for it.
So Team 430 actually catching up a little bit just because Full Speed misplaying the bolstering a little bit here. You can see those two apprentices being bolstered quite a lot. You see the tank not being able to melee them anymore, just needs to go away and kite while everyone else is finishing off the rest of the mobs. Now Team 430 doing the snapping pull with the initiates in the water, and at this point they might actually be slightly ahead compared to Full Speed as they're finishing those initiates, and Full Speed just now pulled them.
Inspire having a little trouble getting out of that water, finally managed to jump up, and the little ducklings of rogues following suit as well, finally managing to get back on land. Once again, Arcana being channeled here from those big DPS trinkets by one of the rogues as they rush in and pull Galecaller Faye and of course Brother Ironhull. Both teams at around the same time actually pull, but we do have Bloodlust go up on the side of Team 430. They do have that one death disadvantage over Full Speed, but they have Bloodlust coming up here, so both teams quite neck and neck at the moment as they engage this second 2 council boss on Tyrannical.
Yeah, so this boss is actually quite difficult to deal with on Tyrannical just because of Galecaller Faye. Now, Galecaller Faye constantly casts this Tempest Blast that you can see that, if not interrupted, it will actually do a initial burst damage on the group and also apply a debuff, increasing substantial damage from this Tempest. So you want to make sure that you have an interrupt rotation going on Galecaller Faye. Now, once in a while, you can see the energy bar, right? Once Galecaller Faye reaches 100 energy, as she does have right now on Full Speed side, then she does apply a buff to herself, and if you interrupt the slicing blast while this buff is up on her, she will spawn those tornadoes, as you can see in this room. So you want to make sure that you don't interrupt her too much while she has her buff up if you don't want to deal with the tornadoes. But it seems like Full Speed just is accepting the tornadoes and just constantly interrupting her and just trying to dodge them as good as possible.
As well as possible indeed. I was just looking through Inspire's loadout here for the Blood DK, since it's it's an joyous occasion. It's the first time I've seen actually Blood DK in quite a while, so running that Purg for just extra safety, and of course the 2 typical defensive trinkets that we've seen so far for this season with Edict and of course Urchin from Lady Ashvane. So fairly typical loadout as far as gear is concerned that we've seen from Protwares and some of the Vengeance Demon Hunters and Brewmasters, of course, present in this second season of MDI this year for the summer here. But Galecaller Faye about to fall here for Team 430 after they will be able to focus on Brother Ironhull. These teams are literally less than 1% apart right now, so their DPS output is about equivalent. I mean, for the rogues, it just comes down to their output right now. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, Team 430 did have the advantage of the Bloodlust at the start, so perhaps not as equivalent as we can see Full Speed actually starting to take away. And you can just see some of the DPS advantage of the Prot, where all of this adds up right now. The 2 healers are, actually Just is a bit higher on damage than Kiki right now, and of course the Protware is out DPSing the Blood DK. That's to be expected, but all of this adds up for just a bit, and you can see them slowly pulling further and further ahead, Nagura.
Yeah, so Kiki actually playing it very, very safe, just staying away, casting Solar Breath, which is really weird to be honest, because if Galecaller Faye is alive, I can see this being a safe play, just standing away, not getting hit by the tornadoes. But Gale Calafe is dead, right? It's only Brother Ironhold that is alive. So just standing there casting Wrath seems inefficient for Kiki, because the only thing Brother Ironhold does is the frontal cleave that he can just dodge easily. So cat damage definitely way superior over casting Solar Wrath. So very weird play by Kiki not going into melee range here. As full speed down to boss, they do have the Bloodlust available, as we mentioned. So Team 430 pulled this cancel boss later, did use the Bloodlust, and full speed killed it faster. So full speed definitely showing that they have a little bit more single target damage coming into this, or cleave damage rather, as it is a two-target fight. But both teams chose to focus down Gale Color Fae. We've seen some teams just increase their cleave damage and not necessarily try to focus down Gale Color Fae, just to have more efficient damage and also go a little bit on Ironhold.
This is a pretty scary pull coming in here from Team 430 right now. Tree of Life gets busted out, but they let one of the Ritualist casts go through. You can see the Shadow Bolt debuffs. Two of them go through right now. Cinderella goes down. Kiki goes down as well. And just no interrupts coming up on that Ritualist is going to be likely a full team wipe here. Now, the DK can certainly self-sustain for a while. There goes the Purg proc, but they decide to cut their losses as the other two rogues vanish and to just try to play it safe. I believe a battle res is up by the looks of it. Yeah, so he managed to get the blood. One of the advantages, of course, we haven't mentioned it because I just forgot, quite frankly, blood DK is that they are DK, so therefore they have access to a battle res. So as soon as the pull went south and Kiki died, Inspired stabilized just long enough, getting that enough runic power, 30 runic power, to battle res the healer and essentially save a rather disastrous situation, or try to save partially rather disastrous situation. Full speed, working a bit slower here and dealing with that first Ritualist Enforcer pack as well. This Ritualist, of course, a pull we actually never saw pulled in Season 2, just wasn't popular, and it made it very daunting for teams that if you wiped, you didn't have this kind of shortcut checkpoint. But now they seem to be pulling this Ritualist just as part of the percentage that they need, not only because this dungeon in Season 3 was rebalanced and retuned in terms of the trash and how much percentage it gives for specific parts of the trash, but also we're in a teaming environment.
Yeah, it's just interesting that Team 430 was struggling on this pull, not with a tank death, but rather having cast go through and having the healer die. Because usually, we've been talking about this pull before, and other teams have been doing this. Usually we just see the tank die, right? Because with so much tank damage, you see all of those enforcers being pulled. But this time around, the Blood DK not having trouble surviving, it was really just not having the interrupts, not having the CC to interrupt those casts, which is very weird.
To be fair, though, I mean, a lot of the tank deaths that we see on this pull very frequently end up dying later on, just because they run out of gas, shield wall falls off, last stand falls off for warriors, and the deaths there came quite early in the pull. I mean, I'm pretty sure he had Vamp Blood running and probably IBF as well, Iceman Fortitude, so you know, he was good to go just like any tank would be early on. Not sure how it would have fared later on, but it doesn't really matter, moot point, as the run, or the pull basically half wiped and they had to reset it completely. Here they go with a rather dangerous pull again. No problem for Inspired right now as he pops his AMS, Anti-Magic Shell, absorbing a rather substantial amount of magic damage. The main magic damage coming out of these Enforcers right now is that huge smash, which just deals a super big amount of frost damage. So AMS well counters that as they get ready to move further in the dungeon past this Void Emissary, something that Full Speed has already done skipped and is on the bridge ahead.
Yeah, Full Speed definitely just running ahead here, as they only have one death so far. Definitely, I mean, if we compare this dungeon to the Freehold, right? Full Speed struggling so much in the Freehold, having so many deaths, just trying the same pulls multiple times over and over, and just keep failing to it, and just keep messing the pulls up. In the complete opposite happening here in this dungeon in Shrine, Full Speed definitely did not get affected by the struggle in Freehold, which is very nice to see, to be honest. That it's not affecting their mentality at all. They just kept a straight head, and they just continue to play really well here without having any sort of tilt happening at all. So very well done by Full Speed here, as they're moving on to this bridge area here and pulling the patrols. Now, we've talked about this patrol being pretty dangerous for tanks just because of those Rip Mine casts and any sort of other casts that are happening. You also see the Rasta Druid dealing with the emissary really well.
It's not too bad here because there's two versions of the bridge patrol that exists, and it's really the depth bringers that you want to watch out for. So this is the one with 3 cultists and 1 depth bringer, so there's only 1 caster worth of Rip Mine that you need to pay attention to for the tank, which actually did leak once. You can see Sai with that debuff just wore off him, and the Rip Mine not only nukes you for a heavy amount of shadow damage, but we've also discussed, of course, decreases your max HP by 10%, and it does stack. So if a few of those leak, it's quite deadly for a tank. Now, fortunately, we're not in a fortified environment, nor should you want those to get off in the first place unless you're spell reflecting them. But no problem so far. Cinderella starts dipping quite low right now as well, and Inspire goes down, and it looks like the DK just bit off a bit more than they can chew right now. Actually, they do have a battle res available, but Kiki just trying to stabilize as a Rip Mine cast goes into him as well, and finally gets down, gets the battle res off with a final blow coming in from these rather bolstered Depth Bringers, if I'm not mistaken. And it looks like they're going to finish the job right now, as Inspire did get res. He's not taking his res, but even if he does after the trash resets, he's not going to be able to res Kiki just because they have no battle res. So the Depth Bringers run off. Those are the ones that they skipped at the bottom of the stairs, and the Rogues do survive. So they do have a 4-man team right now, but Kiki's going to have to find a way to get back, as they're probably their comms are flaring up right now, deciding how they're going to get back from this situation. Full speed, doesn't care. They've already killed off the lashers that they need on the side and are getting ready here for Lord Stormsong.
Yeah, they're in big trouble now on Team D side. They're probably discussing, okay, so what are we going to do? Is Inspire going to be able to get back? Because the rest of it does have a stealth available, right? So they probably just discussed, okay, what did we skip before? How are we going to be able to get back? Because the rest of, there's the mini boss, of course, that is skipped on the bridge. There's Zorn as well, and Zorn has a very weird interaction happening, actually. If you somehow get in combat with Zorn, it actually gets True Side after a while. So if Zorn has True Side, then he's not going to be able to dodge it unless he's going to Shadow Melt it off. But he also needs to Shadow Melt the Bridge Elemental. So it's going to be interesting for Kiki to get back. We'll see how he does, as he also needs to get by this living Elemental here.
One of the Rogues did release to try and help him with that mass stealth. We can see the mass stealth came up past the elemental on the side there, the Living Tines. And Nagur, it's a bit ironic. We were talking about how we've seen some teams so far this season kill that Ritualist that opened up the shortcut access towards the second boss from the Aquasir area. And ironically, or unironically, Team 430 did not do that when Team Full Speed did. And Team 430 was the team that really could have benefited from this in this situation. And now they're caught in a very awful scenario where, you mentioned Soren, you mentioned the bridge elemental. There's also a Void Emissary right there that they skipped earlier, so they have to get past that. That also has True Sight. Now, that's not the most dangerous thing in the world just because it is stationary, but it has 2 Iron Hull apprentices right beside it too. So this is an absolute mess of a situation for Team 430. I don't even know if they're going to really recover by the time Full Speed is even at the last boss of the dungeon from this.
Yeah, this is going to be super difficult for them to come back. And you can see they're discussing it. Maybe they need their tank to release. Maybe they need to just kill the mobs that are alive here, because there might just not be any other way. Or they have everyone go back, just do the same skip again and Shadow Melt at the very end. But this is definitely a very difficult situation, as Full Speed is fighting Lord Stormsong, and they are saving this Bloodlust for a very long time. I wonder if they could have used it on cooldown and get another use off at the very end of the dungeon, because this is a long dungeon, right? In their time trials, they had 29 minutes time, so they definitely could have used another one, because right now they've only used one so far, I believe. One, actually no, they used one on the boss as well, so they used 2, I think, but they definitely don't seem to have a very efficient Bloodlust time at all. As they finish off the boss here, it is tyrannical, so there's some things that can happen at the last boss. But even if they have a full team wipe, they're still going to be ahead.
And they're still going to be ahead, so Team 430 decided to just get the second Rogue release. They actually double sapped the 2 Iron Hull apprentices on either side of the Void. Everyone ran past the Void, they Shadow Melded, and then they stealthed together to the bridge, where one of the Rogues pulled the Guardian Elemental to the side. They popped, actually no, they didn't have their Vanish available, so they actually sacrificed themselves just for Kiki to safely get by, who is now mass rezzed on the other side of the bridge. And then as a happy 3 team, they're running over and getting over to the remaining 2 team members, of course, one of which is the Blood DK that has been taking the longest dirt nap in MDI history, I think, at this point. As they run over through the room now, they'll need a double sap past the 2 Depth Bringers in that room, which is actually, those 2 Depth Bringers are what led to the disastrous situation in the first place, so they had a bit of a misskip, but you can true CC those with sap and just run by them nice and safe. Full Speed here, getting ready to start on Volzith, the final boss of the dungeon, but it looks like they're going to deal with the trash first. They don't want any... they don't want any accidental bolstering on the boss. We do know this trash is often done during the transition phase of Volzith. You can, of course, outrange bolstering, but it looks like they just don't want to risk any of that, Nagura.
I think it's a good play by Full Speed to not risk anything at this point, just because if they're watching the stream on their second monitor or they're just paying attention to the audio, then they know that they're really far ahead at this point. So just risking being in boss combat while dealing with those, or risking to bolster the boss, as you mentioned, definitely not not a risk they have to take at this point. They can just take it slow, deal with this trash by itself, just make sure everything 100% is dead, and then they can engage the boss. They also have the Bloodlust still available, so they can definitely take it slow, as Team 430 is still just trying to recover from this wipe. And Shrine is just a dungeon where, you know, if you have one of those full team wipes coming in, you're just going to struggle so much. Maybe not as big of a problem anymore like it was with Reaping. It was even a bigger issue then, but still, you can see just how much they're struggling here.
Certainly a meanie bobini of a dungeon. Team 430. Now, of course, the story is actually worse. I did forget to mention in teaming, I believe there's actually an extra depth bringer in that Lasher room present, not to mention that there's a void emissary in that entrance, so they had to wait even longer outside that room, as you saw earlier, for Kiki to get Shadow Meld up once again so that they can safely pass that room, which they did, and they are now back in action as Inspire has been finally res full team strength here, and they're getting ready to finish the rest of the bridge. And as quickly as they can, move over to Lord Stormsong's room at full speed here on the main screen. Of course, still dealing with Volzith. 83%, I mean, you know, we've seen other teams in the West get this boss to mid and low 70s% and still weren't able to one phase it. So I can fully expect to see another transition phase.
Yeah, most definitely going to see one more transition phase come out of full speed here, and there's no reason for them to risk any sort of one intermission anyway, since they do. You know, they're so far ahead at this point. Now, one thing to note again is, of course, the buff on the Wrestler. You can see just how much damage the Wrestler Druid is putting out here, as he does do 40k DPS, and is probably going to do even more at the end of this Bloodlust. As you can see, the buff on him in the group frame on the top, it is a damage increase on him. It also reduces his max HP, so in case there's anything like a cast from the Denizens going through, it will one-shot him, and also those tentacles will one-shot him, so you definitely want to watch out for that.
Jack, of course, just absolutely surprised at the thought of a healer dying to the cast to go through. But fortunately, that will not happen here for Just, as they're getting ready soon to go to their second transition phase. Some of those manifestations, are getting close to the boss. Each one will give the boss 10 energy, and we see the energy bar at the bottom of the screen right now indicating that he will cast his manifestations of the deep cast, which leads the players into the transition planar phases, where the DPS, of course, deals with the two caster mobs, while the tank deals with the tank mob here along with the healer. There's a little manifestation left at the top, and anything that gets absorbed into the boss during this transition will, of course, not damage the players, but will give the boss energy again, meaning you're going to start at zero, not at zero energy. You can already see Volzith's energy bar at the bottom already has a small tick on it, meaning one of the adds absorbed during this transition phase.
So after this transition phase, they really don't have that much to do. They have to finish off the boss, and then they still have 2% trash left, which they most definitely will get from the eels on the side here. Now the eels, they don't actually bolster at all, so in theory they could be pulling them on top of the boss and just creep them down. But again, there's no reason for them to take any sort of risk. They can just finish off the boss in peace here, and once they're done, get that last 2%. Team 430 did manage to get back now, and they are on fighting on Lord Stormsong. But again, it's just too little too late. Unfortunately, they lost too much time. It was a very close match up until this council fight, until they had this wipe happening, right? But at this point, full speed, just having a much cleaner run with their only one dep.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're about to seal the deal here in a moment as the last of the Abyssal Eels come in. But, a pretty big throw there by Team 430, and it kind of unfortunate situation. We finally saw a Blood DK get played in a very long time here, and it didn't work out for them. Obviously, the first pull that made them wipe had nothing to do with the tank death, but then afterwards, the tank death did follow suit. But
what they're most comfortable with, and trying to also take a look at who's going to make the mistake first. So let's get into it. Our final game of the day between Full Speed and Team 430.
And no surprise here to see that there is no Unholy DK. There's actually 5 rogues, which is actually one. Yeah, there's one less than 6 rogues. That equals 5, and because that 6th spot is actually a Windwalker.
I thought it's a green rogue. Anyway, Team 430 actually pulling this first trash pack, which we've seen most of the people actually skip so far, and they have all of them rage at the same time, so they're struggling quite a lot finishing this off, as they also have the Void Emissary to deal with. So they did manage to finish it up without having any sort of deaths, but it was definitely not easy, as it looked like 53k HPS coming out of Kiki here to be able to do this pull, as Full Speed is self-pass this first trash area and engage the Triad now, the first boss, with that Bloodlust.
With the Bloodlust, indeed. And Triad, quite a dangerous boss, especially on Tyrannical. Them, this one, and I would say Lord and Lady Waycrest definitely on the watch list for the two hardest bosses in here. Now, the Soulbound Goliath can pack a punch, especially on your tank, but with Prot Warriors in here and their prowess against physical blockable damage, it shouldn't be too much trouble for them. Team 430 as well has started on the Triad, but is saving their Bloodlust? Question mark. Could be for a pretty substantial pull after the boss in the hallway where the commander and the guards are. We'll have to see exactly what they do here.
Yeah, and then one more thing to note about this boss here is that each sister actually has an aura that gets active whenever the iris is on the sister, and each sister does have a pretty nasty one, especially Solana does have a 50% healing reduction aura on everybody, and that's why quaking is even more difficult during that time, just because the quaking damage, just percentage damage as we talked about before, but if you also have this healing reduction, it's going to be so much harder for the rest of Druid to heal that away. And then also in combination with the Nettles ability that happens on Sister Briar, which is right before Sister Solana, if you don't heal the Nettles away before you get into this 50% healing reduction, then you can have a very hard time doing so, as Team 430 actually also uses their Bloodlust here on Triad.
Yeah, it's certainly a very healer check fight. It's very dangerous, and not just that, but everything just spirals into each other. And of course, if we go on Sister Milady, then you get that the aura that increases damage taken over time if you don't move, not to mention with the AoE nuke, area denial as well. So huge healer check of a fight here, and certainly you have to see who has the kahunas to heal through it, especially if you don't commit Bloodlust, which is why we see all the teams commit Bloodlust to this. Certainly want to get it out of the way. Could be interesting to see as well next week, Nagura, for all the future cups for the season, the remaining 4 cups when we're in the 18 territory on Tyrannical on this boss. It's going to pack quite a punch. We've already seen some struggles on it just at the 17 level. We know how the scaling is this season, quite tough. Nonetheless, Full Speed here at 25% on Sister Briars. They're about to finish off the fight first. Team 430 not far behind. Both teams, of course, no deaths on the board just yet, as a Sister Briars 40% for Team 430, getting ready to finish that up. A lot of it's already going to come down to what we see in the upcoming hallway and, of course, the courtyard, Nagura. We've seen a lot of teams in Waycrest Manor today have big failures in the courtyard area.
Yeah, we saw full team wipes coming in this courtyard just because of the emissaries that are causing so much trouble. There's a Void Emissary standing right in the middle that you have to deal with. I mean, usually you can just skip the Void Emissaries if you just walk past them, don't aggro them, or you make sure you just walk away because they are stationary, and then you just shadow melt off the aggro. But because you need to clear the courtyard, you need that space, you just have to deal with it. And then the mobs in general are just also very dangerous in the courtyard. You have the Thorn Shapers that just constantly cast all of those dangerous abilities and the debuffs on the whole group, which gets even more dangerous if all of the mobs are raging at the same time, which we've seen cause so many issues for the other teams before.
This wing of the dungeon is particularly dangerous for tanks, as these Rune Weavers, guards, and captains do a substantial amount of damage, and then once again multiply that on top of the 100% increased damage from raging sub 30%. We can already see side respecting that and pre-popping that shield wall. As soon as those mobs hit 30%, the guard captain is doing so much damage. Want to make sure you interrupt that spirited defense so he doesn't get a lengthy buff of 75% reduced damage taken. These teams, of course, don't have any Blood Elves present. They are Alliance or any offensive dispels. There's no priest. There's no DHs. There's no shaman, of course. So if that buff goes off, they're just spending a lot of time having to DPS that mob down. Pretty big pull coming in here for Team 430 as well. A lot of damage coming in. You can see that shadow cleave from the guards as well, something that you want to avoid at all costs from the melee in front. Of the rogues, of course, aren't listening to me as they sit in front of the mobs as well right now. But Full Speed has committed the Tree of Life here. Pulsing damage coming in from the Void Emissary in the courtyard. Let's hope they can pull it off and not succumb to full team wipes that we saw earlier in the series.
Yeah, Team 430 actually also doing a pretty big pull as they had a very beautifully done tricks of the trade pull here as all of the rogues were stealthing past the mob, sapping one mob pack after the other. And we actually see the tank go down for full speed. And this might just be a full team wipe, even though we do have the battle res come up. But all the mobs are still raging here, and you can see the tanks just having a hard time getting back the aggro as all of the damage dealers are trying to survive.
Yeah, we see a kind of a mini hop there coming out of side just to make sure he resets his taunt cooldown. So whereas you have a force taunt on an 8-second cooldown just like every other tank, but your heroic leap will reset that cooldown. So in a situation where you die, you can actually grab 2 mobs really quickly. This Thorn Guard is very, very scared to deal with. He has a full set of Soul Fetish buffs, which is 50% increased haste and damage. And then on top of it, he's about to hit Raging, but fortunately just is there to dispel him. But that guy is hitting hard. Like we're talking boss level hard. Fortunately, a warrior can deal well once again with those blockable physical damage coming in. Lobsters go pinch. Unfortunately, falls once again for Team 430, but they do have the battle res and decide to commit it to him just so they can stabilize and finish off the equally dangerous pull that Full Speed just did and finished off. But both teams having just a bit of a struggle with this pull once again, Nagura.
Yeah, both the teams struggling so much with this pull. I wonder if this is maybe it's just something that is too risky for those teams to even pull off, because almost all of the teams that have done this pull so far just either had a full team wipe or they struggled so much and lost a lot of members. Now Team 430 is going to be able to finish this up hopefully here with only 1 death so far. So Team 430 actually doing a pretty good job as Full Speed does lose their healer just here on this other pull, and now they're out of battle rests there. Of course they can't get the healer up after all, and now we have the Windwalker die as well. They're just struggling so much with this raging affix here.
Yeah, and that disease of course does not get dispelled on Neanners there, the rogue, so he falls over, does not have cheat death available. It procced earlier, about 90 seconds earlier, and this Thorn Guard once again is packing a punch. Once that shield block fades from Sai, he will actually start taking a pretty substantial amount of damage. So hopefully the team can get back in time, especially Just, who is finally back, just so he can use Soothe once this Thorn Guard gets in rage at 30%. Kiki having huge trouble here, and Lobster's about to go down as well. Just disaster coming in here for Team 430. Is that Soulbound Goliath on top of them?
Yeah, so they wanted to do the same thing that we have seen from the Western region. So they had one player pull all the mobs away to the side, and then someone taunt the boss back. So they basically just wanted to skip the mini boss, they wanted to skip the emissaries, and just pull Goliath back and deal with it there. But the mobs de-aggroed from the player too early, and then it was social, like the Goliath was social pulling some of the mobs that they didn't actually want to aggro. So they had a full team wipe coming in, because of course once you're in boss combat, then there's no way of you to use the Shadow Melt to drop the combat anymore. So with this missed pull, having those mobs that they didn't want to aggro come with Goliath, they just had to have a full team wipe. Now Kiki is back and will get a mass rest off, but at this point it's
no,
quaking.
That revitalized, that 10 seconds baseline revitalized cast interrupted by a 20-second quaking pulse. Unfortunate and unlucky here for Team 430, who's finally full strength again in the courtyard. None of the 3 rogues have cheat death. Actually, none of the 5 rogues on the board have cheat death available to them right now, just to attest to how not clean this run has been going for both teams, as Team 430 sitting at 8 deaths, 32% trash right now. Full Speed sitting at 6 deaths, 34% trash, but they are 78% left on Soulbound Goliath here as they look to try and kill the second boss. Team 430 kind of switching gears and heading off into the hallway for killing some trash towards Rahl's room and wanting to kill this Void Touch emissary as quickly as possible, but the team's already taken 1 hit, so I'm not sure if they want to try and LOS this hit. Fortunately, nobody dies, but a pretty big hit coming in there from the Void Emissary, which they have now managed to kill.
You can just see how much HPS those Raster Druids have to put out to be able to survive all of those pulls. This is these affixes are just so nasty in Waycrest, because I mean, yes, you have the Tyrannical making all the bosses more difficult, but then you have the Raging and the Quaking, which makes the trash more difficult. So even though the trash is not fortified, it's still just so difficult for them to deal with all of this. Just Raging being one of those affixes that makes Waycrest 10 times harder. Now, Full Speed, they also have a death here, no battle rest available. They should get it back up very soon though, so they're gonna be able to get Smile back up again if they want to. They can very easily finish off Goliath without the the damage dealer, but it is tyrannical, so they probably want to get him back up just to be faster.
And just to keep things nice, spicy, and equal, Cinderella goes down on the side of Team 430. They do also just now have the battle res available. They definitely should use that because the boss is at 95% HP, but they are not committing to it, as Full Speed did commit their battle res to resing Smile Back Smiley Face, making sure that they're full strength and trying to chew through this. Now, a bit of a scary situation earlier. Sai was getting just absolutely pummeled by the boss, who hits increasingly hard because of that damage stack, decided to pop the shield wall very early on and then immediately go on the fire. So wasted a pretty substantial amount of that shield wall, but you know, better that than having the tank die, especially with the rogue falling after. Not really sure, Nagura, here why Team 430 is not resing the rogue.
It's because he's not in range.
Oh,
now,
did
this
he go
rogue
to,
was pulling they was trying to do the same thing again, right? The rogue pulled the rest of the mobs away so they can pull Goliath back. And now that he died, he didn't manage to get his vanish off. So they can't rest him because they're just too far away. If he goes close, he will aggro the mobs. So they have to finish this 4-man. Even though they do have the battle rest available, he just can't go close enough to get him back up.
This is a rather spicy situation. Now,
oh, they got it.
Oh, they got it. Yeah. So he was in range, but you had to go to like kind of a sneaky angle on the side there, a bit scary. But fortunately, they managed to res that. Otherwise, this boss would have taken light years to finish for the team. Quaking on top of the AoE pulsing here, not exactly the combo you want to do. So you need proper communication there. You know, relatively every 20 seconds or so, the quaking does pulse in the dungeon. So you probably want to wait for a quaking to pulse before doing that. Else it puts you at a severe disadvantage. You can see Kiki having a lot of trouble catching up on the team. Had proc that undulating tide, so just put him in a very unnecessarily stressful situation as Full Speed now still working on a bunch of the trash, pulling it out from the Rahl hallway and just working on it in the courtyard where they have more room to kite if needed.
Yeah, one more thing to note is that Kiki is not actually shape-shifting the thorns either. So they were actually really lucky that Kiki was not the one being targeted by the thorns while this whole AoE was going on. Because if he was the one that would have gotten targeted, they definitely would have had the tank die. Without a battle rest available, that might have been a full team wipe. We can see the thorn is just going on Kiki right now. I really wonder why he's not shape-shifting this ability. Because again, if you're shape-shifted, you're immune to it.
Just to teach you a lesson. But
probably.
Speaking of a disaster here, actually Team 430 right now having a lot of struggles with the AoE pulse, but does manage to survive. Inspiration getting quite low, finally gets a bit of the healing love from Kiki, but on the side of Full Speed, Sai actually went down when he ran into the hallway. He grabbed as much of the hallway as he could, which already chunked him low, and he was just trying to solo grab it, and by the time he was back, he was at already about 30% health, and unfortunately the Void Emissary that was at the far side of the hallway, 360 no-scope, sniped him and finished off his remaining health with the cast, so it set them back a bit. They had to spend the time resing the tank and then redoing the pull again. So just a more sloppiness coming in from Full Speed right now, who admittedly is in the prime position to win this dungeon, at least as of right now. You know, they are ahead. They still have a 1 death difference in favor of them. But Team 430, I mean, all these little mistakes are adding up, and Team 430 is catching up as well. Soulbound Goliath now 7%.
Yeah, and like the death is not the death time. It's not a huge difference between those two. It's only 5 seconds. We have 8 deaths and we have 9 deaths. Now both of the teams do have the bloods available. As we see Full Speed having so much trouble, you can see the spit debuffs on their group frame up there. And once those mobs go into raging, then the split debuff will do more and increase damage as well. So this is why raging is so difficult in this dungeon, just because there's so many debuffs that these mobs apply. You have the Gorger jump, which applies the bleed effect. You have the split debuff, as you can see right now, happening from those maggots. And then on top of that, they also have the disease from the thorn shapers in the courtyard. There's just so many different kinds of debuffs that you cannot avoid. Most of them not even dispellable at all, and some of them are diseases which only can be dispelled by the Windwalker in Full Speed side, and on Team 430 they don't have anyone who can dispel it at all. So all of those debuffs just dealing so much group damage.
Inspiration, of course, popping that shield wall early in his pull here. I mean, they have finished off with Soulbound Goliath, and they're being rather aggressive trying to catch up. I mean, you know, we mentioned it all the time. They probably know where they are relative in the dungeon compared to their opponent Full Speed here, so they know they got to get a move on. But a lot of damage coming on Inspiration right now with these enraged mobs. Finally, the Sooth comes out of Kiki on the infected peasant just at the last second before it would have finished off Inspiration. Why it didn't do that earlier, not sure, because those infected peasants actually can hit quite hard. On on top of, you know, the raging 100% increased damage. So carefully does that at the very end. They're making sure to dispel, to soothe, that enrage, so that inspiration doesn't fall over. Of course, both of these teams playing essentially in hardcore mode, if you will. There is no battle res available, so it doesn't matter who dies. If somebody dies on the team, they will have to run back or incur a full team wipe, whatever it may be, should that happen. Rather aggressive pull coming in here yet again from Team 430 for the remainder of the Rahl hallway, as Full Speed is getting ready to move into Rahl's room itself.
Yeah, so I assume that they're going to use the Bloodlust in Rahl's room while probably pulling some mobs on top of the boss. Now, neither teams do have a DK in their team comp, so we're probably not going to see an insane pull where we see the 1 million DPS come out of the DKs, but we're definitely going to see some mobs being pulled on top of Rahl, because Rahl itself really doesn't do anything dangerous at all. Tyrannical doesn't really matter on Rahl because all of the abilities can be dodged. The only thing that does hurt is the tank damage, but even that is not even tank damage is not even a lot on Rahl at all, so definitely not a huge deal to pull some trash on top.
Yeah, no problem for them, and both teams just pulling a bit of the trash out in the hallway first, dealing with it. We did see Full Speed use the snapping technique on top of the desk that we saw last week on the West Cup get used to quite a popular advantage. We haven't really seen that before, so it seems teams are starting to pick up that strategy for themselves as well. Team 430 here just dealing off with the rest of their smaller pull from Rahl's room right now, as Full Speed grabbing what I think will probably be the last trash pack before they combine it with Rahl himself. 72% trash on the board for them and 68 for Team 430.
Yeah, we will see what they do with this enchanted emissary as well. We've seen a team before make you very nervous as they were not pulling this emissary while they were fighting Rahl. But it seems like Team 430 chooses not to pull the boss yet. They're just dealing with the trash in this Rahl's room. And I lied, there we go. They did engage Rahl as well once Inspiration managed to get aggro from all of this trash. And they're also popping their Bloodlust here. So it seems like there's a lot of good damage going on, and everyone is dropping into raging range right now. But it seems like they have recovered, and look at the AoE damage by the rogues.
Yeah, a lot of damage coming in from the rogues right now. Must have been a 5 buff right there from one of the rogues. But, you know, the Warrior Inspiration here overcommitting, almost overcommitting at least his offensive. He actually popped Shield Wall the moment all of the mobs grouped up before they even got the raging territory. Fortunately, the DPS was so strong that they managed to kill everything before anything got too dangerous. And a couple of Dinner Bell casts went off, which do silence all members within that area, but it doesn't really matter for rogues and Warrior if you're silenced just temporarily, and I'm pretty sure Kiki, the rest of Druid, was well out of reach of that. Full Speed doing the same thing here and popping their Bloodlust on top of it. Rahl now at 85% for them. They're 79% trash on the... Actually, both teams are 79% trash on the board, and Team 430 just slightly ahead on boss damage, Nagur. So they actually ended up more efficiently dealing with this hallway / room over Full Speed. We saw that 5-second difference, of course, for the death between the two teams, but Team 430, which was looking rather rough. I mean, they were a good 70-ish% behind on Soulbound Goliath, is actually now ahead by 20% on Rahl at equivalent trash percentages.
Yeah, Full Speed actually taking all of this very slow. They were engaging Rahl without pulling any trash on top. They were dealing with the trash first and then engaging Rahl just by itself. And we've talked about that this was not actually that hard at all on Tyrannical, and that we want the teams to pull trash on top, which Full Speed just doesn't want to do. They're just playing a little bit safer here, and this might hurt them in the end because, as you mentioned, Team 430 actually ahead at this point, even though Full Speed was in the driver's seat this whole time. But now Team 430 actually had a chance to get back into the game, and they're the ones who take the riskier pulls, who pull the trash on top of Rahl, commit the Bloodlust to it, and now they're going to be downing Rahl first.
And they should indeed be downing Rahl first. Full Speed catching up just a bit here. They've closed the gap to around 14-15%, but still are a fair ways behind Team 430, which is now entering the single digits of percent on Rahl, now sitting at 7%, looking to chew through the rest of this. They're sitting at 79% trash on the board, so they probably do need a bit more before they head downstairs and just skip the rest of it, heading into a Lord and Lady Waycrest basement area. And they finally finished the boss off. Full Speed managed to catch even a few more percent ahead, so the teams are actually quite close, and the percentage that Team 430 is opting to get is in the kitchen area, where not only a Rune Weaver is present, but we of course see this Void Touched Emissary, which does deal an immense amount of damage with those Queen's Decree casts.
And you see the spit debuff as well from the maggots on all of those team members. You see the HPS coming out of the rest of it here. Inspiration actually going down to one of the Void Emissary casts here. So they don't have a battle rest. They should be able... It's only the Rune Weaver alive here, so it should not be a super big problem, as the rogues can maybe off-tank it. But I feel like Inspiration should just release, because they don't have a battle rest available, and it's going to be faster, right, than them finishing it off.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is just lazy play. He really should have released. He has Heroic Leaf available. He has a few things in order to get back. And I mean, they're even kiting the Soul Weaver towards where he would release and come back in. He could have gotten back and saved a life by now. Edge going out on Cinderella. They're purposely letting that cask off. It's not very dangerous, even with raging, as you can see. Cinderella running away once again from the mob. As the two... They battle-resed him. What? As the two mobs bounce... As the two rogues, excuse me, bounce the mob back and forth. Full speed, not without troubles of their own right now, getting an extra death in on man, the Windwalker Monk. They also dealt with the kitchen, but not very clever play coming in here from Team 430. They did not have to commit that battle res. The Warrior could have released. They could have guided back towards the Warrior across the courtyard there and just salvaged the pull entirely. But at this point, they had 2 extra deaths for no reason. They had the Warrior death on top of it, and then the Rogue died along with it. So just not great play, a bit sloppy here. And oh no, the Quaking pulses as they mass stealth. So they get out of mass stealth, because if you get hit by somebody else's Quaking while you're mass stealth, it takes you out of that stealth form. So unfortunately, the rest of the team does go down. Kiki manages to sneak downstairs and avoid any aggro. So 4 extra deaths on top of their time rezzed, and another interrupt from the Quaking. When it rains, it pours here for Team 430 as Full Speed is already downstairs and working on the trash for Lord and Lady Waycrest.
This is so unfortunate for Team 430. They were so close, and now so many misplays one after the other. Inspiration dying, then Inspiration not releasing, and then just having this very weird decision that they're going to battle rest. I mean, Kiki even could have Shadow Melted and just got a normal rest off. I mean, there's so many other things they could have done, and what they chose to do was definitely the wrong decision. Now, Full Speed, on the other hand, they did a lot better, at least. They are fighting Lady Waycrest and Lord Waycrest at this point. Neither of the teams do have their balance available, but it should be coming back up for the last boss, I assume, as Team 430 is dealing with the assassins here and the room, with raging, of course, being a little bit of a problem, but they should be fine finishing it off, as Full Speed still working on that boss.
Full Speed, both teams actually now 91% on the board. I think that's enough percentage with the Gloom Horrors at the end of the dungeon, because we're not in a teaming environment. If I'm not mistaken, they give about 8 to 9%, so I think this should be just okay heading over to the final boss, Gorak Tul, once they deal, of course, with Lord and Lady Waycrest first. We can see that Full Speed is an entire cycle on this boss ahead of Team 430, as Lord Waycrest has been killed once, essentially. He does get healed by Lady Waycrest, sacrificing 30% of her health. We've seen this a million times, and they've now just completed their second cycle. So they're moving on towards their last cycle as Team 430 tries to catch up. But that 1 death difference between the two teams has now been extended to 6, so there's an extra 30 seconds on the board that Team 430 needs to overcome.
Yeah, and if you think back, this whole series, right, it started with a Freehold. It looked like Team 430 is completely dominating, as Full Speed just, had a full wipe on the first pull, and they just kept wiping over and over and over. And it seemed like Team 430 is just like this team that comes in for fading the first round because of time issues, and they're just sweeping through the lower bracket. But now it's completely turned around. Full Speed actually, they're the ones who are doing much better compared to Team 430. They're having so many problems here, as Full Speed is in the last phase of Lady Waycrest and Lord Waycrest, where both of the bosses are actually being active. Now, usually you do want to finish off Lord Waycrest first, even though it looks like he has more HP, he does actually not. Lady Waycrest is the one with more HP, and you want to deal with Lord Waycrest first.
Staff proc comes in from just right now, so he's not going to have that available for the rest of the dungeon. I believe Kiki's wearing a staff as well. I'm not actually sure if I've seen it proc. I'm just going to check right now while we keep casting over this match. But nonetheless, we haven't seen that staff proc. Now, will that staff save them 30 seconds if both teams are equivalent from this point on? Definitely not. But it is something to note as they head off, and a lot of the danger is very actually front and back loaded. Just general danger coming in on the Gloom Horrors after this pull, just because they constantly do a lot of tank damage, and then add Enraging on top of that is easily can get a tank killed, because you don't have that breathing time that they would usually do when they jump to their furthest target, because the healers, of course, do that trick where they jump up on the torch and negate any jumps.
So Kiki is actually completely out of mana, as you can see on 430's side here. They still have the bosses to deal with. They're choosing to cleave a little bit more damage, which is more efficient to down the boss faster, to cleave it down, but it's going to be more tank damage, and that's why Kiki's actually running out of mana here. But they're finished it safely.
Kiki's actually not running the staff. This is actually the first time I think we've seen a healer not run the staff between West and East Cup, so not sure what the choice concept is there, but nonetheless, no staff available, which is why we haven't seen it proc over there on the side of Team 430, and they're also not deciding to deal with an aggressive kind of push on the Gloom Horrors. They're dealing them, not only are they dealing with them without Gorak Tul, both teams it seems, but they're also not doing any tricks to prevent jumping from those. So if they jump at the wrong time on top of a Quaking, on top of Kiki, or just in this case, they're getting, exactly, Raging is just going to finish them off completely. No such death there on the side of Team 430. They do manage to finish that off as Full Speed is still dealing with their trash pull rather inefficiently. What's going on here? Team Full Speed at 95%. They're still dealing with the Gloom Horrors. A lot of damage coming in from Quaking right now, and those mobs are raging. They could actually give someone easily. Shield Wall still running here for Size. He tries to backpedal down the hallway. 99% trash for them, and they are not, finally, 100% comes in. Team 430 has already started on Gorak Tul, so they might actually have a chance because they had an extra death there in Nagura, so 25%, 25 seconds, excuse me, between the two teams.
It's actually very likely that Team 430 might still pull this off, as they also have their Bloodlust available earlier. Well, you know, it's a short difference. It's 30 seconds for Full Speed, more on the Bloodlust, but this is all that they maybe need at this point. I mean, it's still a 25 seconds difference in death timers, so I'm not sure if that's going to be enough for them, but it's definitely a lot closer than it seemed to be, just because Team 430 was dealing with the trash so much faster compared to Full Speed. Full Speed also having one death, having to deal with them, and it actually looks like Full Speed does have the better comp to deal with those hordes, just because they have the Ring of Peace. The Ring of Peace means that the healer can just stand behind it and they will just jump against the ring. So super interesting to see that Full Speed took so much longer compared to Team 430.
Yeah, not just that, but I mean, if you're Team 430 right now, you know how close it is. 25 seconds is not enough time to differentiate 8% on the boss, even if you get your Bloodlust accessible right now, which they're about to pop. I'm not, we go back to why is Kiki using Solar Wrath on the boss instead of getting in kitty form and DPSing as much as possible. These small things are what could separate Team 430 to make sure that they clinch this win, but right now, Bloodlust has gone off. Full Speed does not have Bloodlust for 15 seconds, and it's going to come down to trying for a 25-second or faster kill for Team 430.
This has to be just nerfs right now. Kiki popped his Innervate, and then he sat down drinking one of those mana potions that you have to channel while his Innervate was up. So Kiki definitely just showing some nerfs here, as you said, not going into cat form, not doing any damage, and this is so close between those two teams. They have their Bloodlust up now on Full Speed side as well. Again, there's a 25 seconds difference between those teams. It looks like Full Speed is going to make it, but Kiki, I mean...
Why is Tree of Life up for just right now? I mean, there's a bit of splash damage once in a while, but he could be getting some extra damage in during this Bloodlust, but opting to just go defensive and heal. 14% difference between the two bosses right now. I'm not sure what's going on. The world around me is spinning, is quaking. Once again, hits for Team 430, and a lot of damage coming in on the group. Finally, Kiki manages to get a bit of extra healing. Gorak Tul will fall here momentarily for Team 430, and the 25-second timer will start to see if Full Speed can finish this off.
25 seconds, I mean... I don't know. This is going to... I mean, 8%, it's probably not going to happen.
I guess we'll see in a moment, won't we, Nigura? So 15 seconds left on the timer, and I believe they will be able to finish this off as Gorak Tul does fall here with 9 seconds left on the board. 8 seconds when the